Hey guys, it's Senti Reads, and as you can see by the video title, today I'll be ranting about the fifth book in the ACOTAR series, A Court of Silver Flames, or Silver Flames for short because ACOSF is very hard to say. Why SJM decided to slightly switch up her naming convention for this title is a mystery to me. I'd typically give a brief recap of the previous book, but nothing really happened in ACOFAS. All you really need to know is that Nesta hasn't really dealt with any of her trauma, even though the war is over now, and has an increasingly volatile relationship with Feyre and the rest of the Inner Circle. For the sake of my sanity, I'll be splitting my coverage of Silver Flames into 3 parts because the book itself is separated into 3 parts. There's a lot for me to comment on here, and this book has one of the most convoluted plotlines in the entire series, and it's also the longest book, so this will be my longest rant yet. Buckle in, guys, you are not ready. I'm aware that some people use these videos as a replacement for reading the book, so I wanted to be thorough in my coverage of all this f***ery. Oh, it's too early in the video to say that. Scratch that. Silver Flames is about Nesta's healing journey, and it's a big departure from the rest of the series in several ways. First of all, we're now following Nesta instead of Feyre, which can be a huge deal breaker for readers who will never forgive Nesta for how poorly she treated Feyre in the first book. But other readers really enjoy Nesta's journey and personally relate to her, so this is their favorite book of the series. In my last video I said that ACOFAS is polarizing, but I'd say that applies even more so to Silver Flames. The second big difference is that Silver Flames is written in third person, where the rest of the series is written in first person from Feyre's perspective. I don't have a personal preference between third or first person perspectives, but I know that some people care really strongly about that one way or the other. Silver Flames is written as third person limited, so each scene follows a specific character and what they're feeling at the moment. That's different from an omniscient third person perspective where you hear every character's thoughts and feelings in every scene, which to me is very overwhelming. I think third person omniscient isn't a very common perspective to see these days, but I wanted to point this out for the sake of clarity. Throughout this video, I'll say a scene is from a certain character's perspective, but I don't mean it's written in first person, it is all written in third person. Hopefully that makes sense. Unlike ACOFAS, which was mostly a fluffy Christmas special, Silver Flames tackles some heavy topics, so please check the screen now for a list of content warnings. If any of these things are going to bother you, then please click away now. I totally understand. Take care of yourself. I also want to give a disclaimer that I know that many readers feel a personal connection to Nesta, so I wanted to be clear that my criticisms about Nesta and the ACOTAR series in general are simply that. I am criticizing a work of fiction, and nothing I say is meant to be a personal attack to fans. I'm sure the vast majority of you viewers understand that, but with the heavy topics presented in this book, I wanted that to be extra clear. Before we jump into the mess that is Silver Flames, I want to introduce the coloring book that I used as B-roll footage. This is the Chibi Fairy coloring book by Alba Leon, and I got it on Amazon. I think the illustrations are super cute and obviously fit the fairy theme of the video, so it felt like a perfect choice. I'm not an artist, so some of my fairies are better than others, and I'd love if you could leave me some coloring tips in the comments below, because I am now a coloring girly. It is just so fun. The stuff I complain about in this video gets pretty heavy at times, so at least you get to look at some cute fairies while I complain. With all of that out of the way, let's jump right into Silver Flames.
Okay, we are cooked. Yeah, we are absolutely cooked, chat. GG.
The book opens with Cassian cowardly standing outside of Nesta's door because he's scared of her even though he's a big tough guy who's not afraid of anything. We get a reminder that Nesta's apartment is the only shithole in Valaris because of course it is. I complained enough about Rhysand's poor city management in the last video, so I won't harp on it again now. Cassian finally finds the courage to knock on the door, and not only is Nesta not happy to see him, but she's also wearing another dude's shirt. As a reminder, Cassian and Nesta kissed in ACOWAR, and Cassian kind of indirectly confessed his love for Nesta, but they've had no progression in their relationship since then. In the last book, ACOFAS, Nesta really didn't want anything to do with Cassian or anyone in the Inner Circle because she's in a self-imposed self-destructive isolation as she's struggling to deal with her trauma from the war. Cassian notes that Nesta is thin and pale and doesn't look like she's doing very well, but doesn't show any real compassion for that, and he barks the orders he was given like the good little dog he is. Feyre wants you at the house. Which one? Nesta said, frowning at the foot he'd wedged in the door. She has 5. He bit back his retort. This wasn't the battlefield, and he wasn't her opponent. His job was to transport her to the assigned spot, and then pray that the lovely home Feyre and Rhys had just moved into wouldn't be reduced to rubble. This had me cracking up because I've complained extensively about how stupid it is that Feyre and Rhysand have so many houses. Also, if anyone is going to reduce a house to rubble, it would be Rhysand after Nesta annoyed him too much. Oh, or Cassian, because isn't he banned from the Summer Court because he destroyed a building and reduced it to rubble? Why are they so worried about Nesta? Nesta hasn't shown any sign of her freaky cauldron powers since the war and has zero combat training, so she isn't really much of a threat at the moment. Cassian clarifies that Feyre wants Nesta to come to her new house by the river, which was her Christmas present from Rhysand in the last book. The river house is where Feyre and Rhysand primarily live now because the townhouse was inconveniently small for holidays. God, it must be nice to be rich. We learn that about 9 months have passed since the previous book because it's now autumn and in the last book it was winter. And Cassian has had very little interaction with Nesta during that time. There's mention of a party on a riverboat that happened in the summer, and Nesta got sloppy drunk and fought with Amren. Not even Feyre knows exactly what the argument was about, and apparently Amren hasn't told anyone, and nobody has seen Nesta since that party. Cassian stupidly reveals that he's been sent to get Nesta 2 hours early so that she has time to get ready. Nesta is offended by this, but honestly I'd be more pissed if I wasn't given any time to prepare myself and get ready. I need a full 24-hour notice at least if someone expects me to be somewhere. Her eyes flared. Do I look like I need 2 hours to become presentable? He took the invitation to survey her. Long, bare legs, an elegant sweep of hips, tapered waist, too damn thin, and full, inviting breasts that were at odds with the new sharp angles of her body. On any other female, those magnificent breasts might have been enough cause for him to begin courting her the moment he met her. But from the instant he'd met Nesta, the cold fire in her eyes had been a temptation of a different sort. And now that she was high fae, all inherent dominance and aggression, and piss-poor attitude, he avoided her as much as possible. Especially with what had happened during and after the war against Hybern. She'd made her feelings about him more than clear. What? What the actual fuck? It's too early for me to rage quit, but God, I want to. It's not a crime to enjoy some tiggle bitties, but there's a time and a place for that, and now is neither the time nor the place. If I saw someone who was clearly in crisis, I wouldn't be thinking about their gazongas. Actually, maybe I would in this case, because it's kind of baffling that it's repeatedly stated how thin Nesta is, and how much weight she's lost, but somehow she still has, quote, magnificent breasts. Good for her, I guess. Cassian tells Nesta to kick out whatever guy she brought home with her and to get ready because he'll be back in an hour to come get her. He already said that he's 2 hours early, so apparently he needs a full hour to escort Nesta across Valaris to Feyre's fancy house? Whatever. The scene ends there and we cut to Nesta's POV. She doesn't know her one-night stand's name and only kind of remembers their hookup because she was so drunk. We get a kind of funny line that the guy is handsome but boyishly thin compared to big beefcake Cassian, and he's scared to leave because Cassian might still be outside the apartment. Shit, I'd be scared of Cassian too. He did mass delete an entire village that one time. I'm also realizing now as I'm recording this that there was a similar kind of comparison in the first ACOTAR with Feyre's lover Isaac, that random dude. Like, the first time Feyre hooked up with Tamlin, she was like, oh, this is a real man, unlike that boy Isaac. Which just feels really weird. It's so weird. Anyway, Nesta thinks to herself that it isn't Cassian that her nameless lover should be scared of. What would his fear smell like if he learned she'd used him, slept with him, to keep herself at bay, to settle that writhing darkness that had simmered inside her from the moment she'd emerged from the cauldron? Sex, music, and drink she'd learned this past year, all of it helped. Not entirely, but it kept the power from boiling over, even if she could still feel it streaming through her blood, coiled tight around her bones. This type of maladaptive coping and dissociation is an extremely common and valid trauma response, and it frustrates me to no end that the other characters can't really acknowledge that in any way that actually matters. They seem to understand that Nesta suffered from the war, but they all act like she should just get over it because they're all over it. Everyone has a different timeline when it comes to healing, and it's not for anyone else to decide how long it should take for you to get better. Nesta starts to get ready, and we're reminded yet again how shitty her apartment is and how her sisters have begged her to move because God forbid someone makes a choice that Feyre doesn't agree with. This was her residence. No servants, no eyes monitoring and judging every move, no company unless she invited them. Or unless prying, swaggering warriors made it their business to stop by. This passage gives a lot of insight into why Nesta would rather live alone in a dump than with the inner circle at a fancy mansion. I wouldn't want to be constantly monitored and harassed by assholes either, even if I wasn't trying to cope with my whole world being turned upside down. They all expect Nesta to plaster on a smile and pretend she's okay, even though she's clearly not capable of doing that, so I don't blame her at all for isolating herself. Nesta takes a bath, which is something she's not always capable of because of her trauma from being dunked in the cauldron. I make a lot of jokes about how tragic it is that Nesta and Elaine became hot fairies. Ooh, what a tragedy, you're hot and you live forever. But I'll remind you that canonically, that process was extremely painful, and going through that level of physical torture can be mentally debilitating, for obvious reasons. As if Nesta's suffering isn't clear enough, she thinks about her father and how conflicted her feelings are about him. She had hated her father, hated him deeply, and yet he had loved her, for some inexplicable reason. Not enough to try to spare them from poverty or keep them from starving, but somehow it had been enough for him to raise an army on the continent, to sail a ship named for her into battle. She had still hated her father in those last moments, and then his neck had cracked, his eyes not full of fear as he died, but of that foolish love for her. No. I'd argue that someone who truly loves their children would not let them suffer through poverty the way Papa Archeron did. I understand that he was probably severely depressed after losing his fortune, but he didn't put in any effort whatsoever to provide for his family. Children don't ask to be born, so it's a parent's duty to step up and care for them no matter how hard things get. And if you're not a person who's capable of doing that, don't have children. Papa Archeron didn't even do simple things like chopping firewood or tending a garden to provide them food or literally anything to help. Sure, he had a bum leg and was technically disabled because of that, but he was capable of doing more than just carving stupid little wood figurines that he didn't even really try to sell. There had to have been something more he could do. Also, one big grand gesture isn't enough to erase years of hurt and disappointment. That's not how that works, and that's not fair. That whole mess with Papa Archeron randomly showing up with a whole-ass navy in that battle is so stupid and out of left field that I don't really care to analyze that any further. Nesta has a lot of guilt about not being able to save her father or Elaine that time she was randomly kidnapped by Hybern. She lives with a constant dread of something else happening and drinks and sleeps around to try and cope with that and forget about that possibility. We get a weird tangent about how Nesta was a virgin until she lost her maidenhead to some random fairy dude in her shitty apartment in Valaris. The narrative perpetuates the misinformation that women bleed a bunch during their first time, which is something that irritates me to no end, but I can't get into that rant because I'm already being too nitpicky. Moving on, Nesta thinks about Rhysand. After the war with Hybern, Rhysand had offered her jobs, positions in his court. She didn't want them. They were pity offerings, then attempts to get her to be a part of Feyre's life, to be gainfully employed. Oh, the horror of gainful employment! But the High Lord had never liked her. Their conversations were coldly civil at best. She'd never told him that the reasons he hated her were the same reasons she lived here. Took cold baths some days, forgot to eat on others, couldn't stand the crack and snap of a fireplace, and drowned herself in wine and music and pleasure each night. Every damning thing Rhysand thought about her was true, and she'd known it long before he had ever shadowed her doorstep. Any offering Rhysand threw her way was made solely out of love for Feyre. Better to spend her time the way she wished. They kept paying for it after all. Rhysand is stupid as fuck to offer Nesta any kind of position in his inner circle or the government in general. He really needs to stop with the nepotism hiring and find actual qualified people to run things. Maybe if there were more capable people in power, they'd make more progress on defeating fairy racism and the rampant misogyny in both Illyria and the Court of Nightmares. I don't really know what the fuck is going on with the next part of that passage. Rhysand doesn't hate Nesta because she's showing signs of being traumatized. Rhysand hates Nesta because she sat on her ass and was a heinous bitch to Feyre, who was the only person keeping her and the rest of the family alive when they were all starving in poverty. Even though Feyre is over all of that, Rhysand still holds a grudge against Nesta and never gives her the benefit of the doubt because he is so biased against her, and I kinda can't blame him for that. As much as I hate Rhysand and think he needs to stay out of the sisters' conflict, I'd hate Nesta too if she continued to be an ungrateful mooch while she wallowed in her misery. I understand Nesta is going through some shit, but that doesn't give her carte blanche to act super rude to the people she expects unconditional financial support from. Nesta finishes getting ready and Cassian shows up to get her. We get a weird line about how Cassian is practically worshipped in Valaris because of his heroism in the war, but the text makes no mention of how the Illyrians, who actually make up the army, hate Cassian. Cassian is rude and snarky about Nesta's dirty apartment because he can't help but be a total asshole all the time. He even goes so far as to say Nesta doesn't change the sheets between her overnight guests, which I don't know how he would know that, and that's a pretty vile thing to randomly bring up. Nesta mostly ignores him and says that it's not his business because it's not. I think Cassian purposely picks at Nesta to try and get her attention because being ignored makes him uncomfortable, but that's such an immature way to address that. Riling Nesta up before she has to meet with Feyre and Rhysand is incredibly stupid, and it's just setting Nesta up for failure. Nesta knows that whatever they want to talk about with her must be important because there's still unrest after the war, so Cassian doesn't need to add to her stress by insulting her hygiene. We get some exposition about the mortal queens that I would normally skip, but this ends up being plot relevant much later on in this book. All you need to remember is that one of the queens was dunked in the cauldron after she saw Nesta and Elaine become hot fairies, but instead the queen became a withered old crone and nobody has seen her since then. Will she show up later in this book? Guess you'll have to see. The scene ends there, and the next scene picks up at Feyre's fancy new riverfront estate. We get a big long description of how lavish and extravagant the place is and how much Nesta hates it. I don't know if she's jealous because it reminds her of the wealth her family once lost, or if she's resentful that it's Rhysand's money that paid for it all, or what, but she makes a good point that had me gagged. Most males bought their wives and mates jewelry for an outrageous winter solstice present. Rhys had bought Feyre a palace. No, he'd purchased the war-decimated land and then given his mate free rein to design the residence of their dreams. Calling out rich people for capitalizing on a war to buy cheap land for themselves is a level of self-awareness that I didn't think this series was capable of. Since this book follows Nesta, we get a lot more of a critical look at Feyre and Rhysand, and they get a similar kind of character assassination that Tamlin got. There's a lot of people who don't like Silver Flames for that reason, but I hate Feyre and I especially hate Rhysand, and I hate him more than I hate Nesta at this point, so I'm here for the Faysand slander. We get more exposition about the beautiful manor and how Feyre designed and picked out everything, and a lot of her art is on the walls. I think Nesta is so resentful of the house because there's plenty of art of Feyre's new friends and even art of their father and Elaine, but Nesta isn't in any of the paintings. That might sound selfish of Nesta, but I would definitely feel left out if everyone got a painting except for me. That was how it had been, after all. Elaine and Feyre doted on by their father, Nesta prized and trained by their mother. During that first tour, Nesta had noted that lack of herself here, the lack of their mother. She said nothing, of course, but it was a pointed absence. Oh wait, their mother also didn't get any paintings, but I forgot she was even a character since she's so irrelevant. We learned in the first book that their mother died of typhus or some other illness when they were all young, and that was before they lost their fortune. In this book, we'll learn a little bit more about Mama Archeron, but that all comes later on in the story. Nesta is tense and on the verge of a breakdown as she finally meets with Feyre and Rhysand to see what they want from her. Amren is there too and openly glares at Nesta, which isn't a good start to any conversation. Nesta feels shame for whatever went down at the riverboat party, but we still don't learn exactly what happened yet. Feyre says something along the lines of, "I heard you had quite a night," which feels very rude to me to start a conversation that way. Like, just say what you want to say, don't make these pointed little remarks. It would make me uncomfortable to know that people were talking behind my back about things that weren't any of their business, and Nesta falls even farther into her shame cycle because of that. Amren dogpiles onto that by telling Nesta she looks like shit. "Though I bet it's hard to look good," Amren went on, "when you're out until the darkest hours of the night, drinking yourself stupid and fucking anything that comes your way."
Don't be fucking rude. Are you?
Ouch. That has to especially hurt coming from Amren, who was once Nesta's only friend in the inner circle. Nobody says anything in Nesta's defense, which is even worse. Feyre seems like she wants to speak up, but Rhysand clearly agrees with Amren, and Cassian just keeps his mouth shut like the little loyal dog he is. Like, ugh, Cassian, ugh, I hate Cassian. Nesta is surprisingly calm when she says she didn't know that what she did was any of Amren's business, because it's not. And of course that immediately pisses Amren off because she's the type who can dish it out but can't take any attitude back. Amren challenged, "They are when you spend that much of our gold on wine." Perhaps she had pushed them too far with last night's tab. Nesta looked to Feyre, who winced. "So you really did make me come all the way here for a scolding?" Feyre's eyes, mirror images of her own, softened slightly. "No, it's not a scolding." She cut a sharp glance at Rhys, still icily silent against the mantel, and then to Amren, seething in her chair. "Think of this as a discussion." Nesta shot to her feet. "My life is not your concern or up for any sort of discussion." "Sit down," Rhys snarled.
All right, let's everybody just calm the fuck down.
Amren, chill the fuck out. And also Rhysand, chill the fuck out. I know Amren is part of the inner circle, but it isn't our gold, it's Rhysand's gold that he lets other people spend. Amren seemingly just sits around and doesn't have a real job in the court anymore, so I guarantee nothing she's doing is bringing in any money, so get off your high horse, girl. You are also leeching off the kindness of Rhysand. I really hate seeing how cowed and docile Feyre is, and she doesn't stand up to Rhysand nearly as much as she used to, especially in ACOSF. She was always talking back to him, and that was very refreshing to see. Her giving him this deference now is giving Tamlin, and that's only going to get worse throughout the book. I'd typically agree that Nesta's life is none of their business, but she doesn't get to say that while also taking their money. I don't believe for a single second, though, that she's actually spending an appreciable amount of gold considering how rich these fuckers are, and this intervention is less about money and more about control. We get some interesting details that never came up before, that Nesta feels compelled by Rhysand's commands and has to actively fight to keep herself from following them and sitting down. I think it's because he's the High Lord, so other Fae naturally bend to his will, and that's actually kind of terrifying because that seems separate from his mind control powers where he can just force people to do what he wants. We don't often get these details that show the Fae as more primal and animalistic than humans, and so things like this kind of catch me off guard. I don't think that Rhysand likes that Nesta isn't obedient and doesn't drop to her knees to kiss his ass and Feyre's ass, and that's the whole crux of this conflict, not money. Rhys said, "You are gonna stay. You are going to listen." She let out a low laugh. "You're not my High Lord. You don't give me orders." But she knew how powerful he was, had seen it, felt it, still trembled to be near him. Rhys scented that fear. One side of his mouth curled up in a cruel smile. "You want to go head-to-head, Nesta Archeron?" he purred. The High Lord of the Night Court gestured to the sloping lawn beyond the windows. "We've got plenty of space out there for a brawl."
Catch me outside, how about that?
What the fuck? Rhysand really said, "Catch me outside, how about that?" What is happening? That's so out of line, I don't even know what to say. If anyone gets to fistfight Nesta out in the yard, it should be Feyre. Feyre and Nesta really just need a good slap fight to just get this out of their system once and for all. Rhysand has no business escalating this situation to physical violence, and I wouldn't tolerate any man on this earth challenging my sister to a fight. Hell no, absolutely not. I'm the only one who gets to fight my sister, and she would kick my ass, so I'm not going there. Feyre finally speaks up and snaps at Rhysand and says she told him to stay out of it. If that's the case, then he shouldn't even be there for this conversation at all, because he clearly can't help himself. Feyre goes on to tell Rhysand that he can keep his mouth shut or he can leave, and again, he should have just not even been here to begin with. Same with Amren, who Feyre also bitches out. Feyre would be able to smooth over this whole Nesta situation a whole lot easier if all these irrelevant assholes didn't keep jumping in with their irrelevant opinions. Feyre addresses Nesta and says that they'll need to make some changes, and Nesta wonders where Elaine is in all of this. "I'll take the blame," Feyre went on, "for allowing things to get this far and this bad. After the war with Hybern, with everything else that's been going on, I should have been there to help you, but I wasn't. And I'm ready to admit that this is partially my fault." "That what is your fault?" Nesta hissed. "You," Cassian said. "This bullshit behavior." I really don't like this infantilization of Nesta and her bad behavior. Trauma or not, the way she reacts and behaves is solely on her and nobody else. I don't really listen to this podcast anymore, but Marcus Parks from the last podcast on the left had a really good quote about how mental illness is not your fault, but it is your responsibility. So it's not Nesta's fault that she is feeling the way she is, but it is her responsibility to react in a way that is appropriate. And if she can't react appropriately, it is her responsibility to heal so that she can react appropriately and to have relationships with the people in her life. The one thing Feyre should apologize for is forcing Nesta to be around a group of people who hate her and heckle her into having outbursts that they can then demonize her for having. That's bullshit to do to someone, but Nesta is plenty nasty even when people aren't specifically calling her out. I don't really think it's fair, though, to go so hard on Nesta for her attitude when they all kind of shrug off Amryn when she says similar, if not worse, things than Nesta has said. If Nesta is a problem, then so is Amryn. Amryn probably spends more of their money, too, considering she has a thing for jewels instead of cheap beer. Actually, the more I think about it, Amryn might be more of a problem than Nesta, because Amryn also used to have, this overwhelming power that they were afraid of, the same way that Nesta does, so, Amryn is a problem, too. Where's Amryn's intervention? Nesta is immediately on the attack, and I kinda don't blame her, considering how condescending and horrible everyone has been to her since the moment she arrived. She calls Feyre out for being a self-righteous do-gooder, which had me gagged. Nesta isn't wrong about that, but she could stand to be more empathetic and considerate of others, even if she doesn't go as far as the performative charity work that Feyre does. The chapter ends with Feyre finally putting her foot down and saying she won't continue to enable the lifestyle Nesta leads that allows her to wallow in her bad attitude and behavior. Feyre's sending Nesta off with Cassian to train so that she can become a loyal little Night Court soldier like the rest of the Inner Circle. Okay, so Feyre didn't say that last part, but I stand by the fact that this intervention is more about control than any genuine concern for Nesta. The next chapter shifts to Cassian's perspective as the meeting continues. Feyre goes on to clarify what the plan is for Nesta. As of this meeting, Feyre clarified, you're moving into the House of Wind. She nodded eastward toward the palace carved into the mountains at the far end of the city. Rhys and I have decided that each morning you will train with Cassian in Windhaven, in the Illyrian Mountains. After lunch, for the rest of the afternoon, you will be assigned work in the library beneath the House of Wind. But the apartment, the seedy taverns, all of that is over, Nesta. In case you've forgotten, the House of Wind is their fancy house in the city that nobody really likes going to, which is why they don't live there and why they had to buy the river house for some stupid fucking reason. The only way to come and go from the House of Wind is to climb a staircase that is 10,000 steps, or to fly. You could technically teleport above the wards and fall onto the house, but you would probably hurt yourself. Considering Nesta can't fly or teleport and isn't fit enough to climb 10,000 stairs, she is essentially a prisoner. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Perhaps a bit Tamlin-esque? Oh, how the turntables.
Well, well, well. How the turntables...
Nesta is silent but clearly angry, and Cassian has a passing thought that he should get closer to Feyre to protect her in case shit pops off. I think Feyre is more than capable of protecting herself from Nesta even without using her magic, but Feyre's strength is basically tossed aside and forgotten in this book for reasons you will find out later. This seems irrelevant now, but it's stated that Rhysand has placed a super strong shield around Feyre to the point that nobody can even touch her. I guess if they go to touch her, they would bounce off an invisible force field, and her scent is masked, but put a pin in that for now. Cassian goes on to think that Nesta could be so angry she'd use her cauldron laser powers to blast Feyre into dust, and that is so insulting. Nesta hasn't been the nicest to Feyre, to put it lightly, but suggesting that Nesta would murder her own sister is quite an accusation. And it shows how everyone immediately assumes the worst from Nesta. Nesta finally says that she refuses to move to the House of Wind or train in the, quote, miserable village that is the Illyrian camp, and Amryn says that it's not up for negotiation. This really feels like a Dr. Phil special where troubled teens are kidnapped and sent to the ranch for treatment that is essentially torture instead of therapy. Ew, why are we doing this? This is so ineffective. Nesta even gets sent on a terrible wilderness hike, but we'll get to that later. Amryn says that Nesta's apartment is already being packed up as they speak, and they'll get her some better clothes for training, so don't worry about the shit you had at your shitty apartment. The narrative implies that Amryn is genuinely worried for Nesta, but frankly I think that's bullshit. This is a punishment more than it is an intervention. More than that, did Nesta understand that this meeting wasn't to condemn her, but instead came from a place of concern? Her simmering stare told him she considered this purely an attack. Dude, I'd view this as an attack too. Rhysand straight up told Nesta she could catch him outside so they could fist fight in the yard. The narrative can try to paint this all as a tough love approach, but this goes so far beyond that. I'm not a therapist or a mental health professional, so I don't know the exact way they should deal with Nesta, but there's gotta be a better way than this. Nesta says she's not a member of the Night Court, so they can't boss her around. I'd say she is a member, considering she has a permanent residence in Valaris and has no plans of leaving, but whatever. Amren is quick to remind Nesta that during the war she agreed to be an emissary to the human realm for the Night Court, and she never resigned from that position. So Nesta is indeed a member of the Night Court, and they can in fact boss her around. Amren even busts out some kind of rule book, but nobody bothers to fact check her on any of that. We learn that the final straw that caused this intervention was that Nesta racked up a ridiculous tab of expensive wine, exotic foods, and gambling debts. I'm sure whatever she spent is hardly a drop in the bucket compared to Rhysand's massive wealth, but Nesta still isn't entitled to go buck wild on someone else's dime. Like, girl, be reasonable about it if you're spending someone else's coin. Cassian recalls Feyre crying over her plate of eggs at breakfast when Nesta's night out was discovered, and somehow that image is very funny to me. Anyway, Feyre was silent as Rhysand concocted the entire plan of how to deal with Nesta, which feels very sketchy. Rhysand notoriously hates Nesta, so I can't help but feel that he wanted her to suffer more than he actually wanted her to change and improve. And throughout this intervention, Feyre tries to speak as if her and Rhysand both came up with this plan, but it is explicitly stated that Feyre was silent as Rhysand came up with everything. So, let's not pretend that Feyre came up with this. Rhysand decided everything. Rhysand is the one who is in charge. Rhysand decided that it was Amren who should break the news to Nesta, because if Rhysand took ownership of this plan, then Nesta might resent him forever, which in turn would harm her relationship with Feyre, because Feyre clearly is never going to leave Rhysand. Okay then. All of this scheming and manipulation makes this feel even less genuine, but the narrative never really acknowledges that, and we're supposed to assume that everyone truly just wants to help Nesta, and this is all for her own good. No, it's not. That's bullshit. Amren clarifies that Nesta isn't technically a prisoner in the House of Wind because she's allowed to use the stairs if she can, manage it. That's such a cop-out excuse for how this is different from the Tamlin situation that I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. Nesta asks what happens if she refuses to follow this plan, and Cassian is shocked and appalled that somebody would so openly defy Rhysand and Amren, as if he himself hasn't directly gone against Rhysand's orders in previous books. This is something I complained about in previous books, that Rhysand is like, I don't boss people around, everybody makes their own choices. And then as a result, nobody ever really listens to Rhysand when he does decide to give them orders. So this thought coming from Cassian is really at odds with what we've already had set up about the Inner Circle's dynamic with Rhysand. And it kind of nerfs his character as being this big badass war general into being a pawn for Rhysand when he previously had a lot more agency in the other books. Anyway, Nesta can either follow the plan or she's getting shipped back to the human realm. The 3 people mentioned in the passage I'm about to share is referring to the Archeron sisters, by the way. The human world was behind them. They could never return. Even though all 3 of them were war heroes, each in their own right, the humans wouldn't care, would stay far, far away if they weren't provoked to violence. So yes, Nesta might technically be able to return to the human lands, but she would find no companionship there. No warm welcome or town that would accept her. Wherever she was able to find a place to live, she would be essentially housebound, confined to the grounds of her home for fear of human prejudices. Considering nobody really knows if Nesta can still use her cauldron laser powers, I highly doubt they'd just ship her off to the human realm and leave her unsupervised. If Nesta didn't go on a rampage herself, then what's left of Hybern or some other enemy could kidnap her and use her powers, or she might willingly join their side for revenge. That would have been a much cooler book, actually, if something like that happened. Oh, wait, scratch everything I just said. Considering the ancient creepy pit monster Bryaxis is still on the loose for some inexplicable reason, they'd definitely just let Nesta go off on her own to potentially wreak havoc. Nesta asks Feyre directly if those are truly her only options, and Feyre starts to backtrack before finally saying yes. This is not what Nesta wanted to hear, so she starts screeching about how Feyre has no right to do that to her, and that it's Feyre's fault Nesta was dragged into this whole mess, and why she's acting the way she is, and blah 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 blah. Nesta, girl, you were heinous before you were a hot fairy, so I'm gonna need you to take it down a few notches. Regardless of whether or not any of this is Feyre's fault, Nesta is still responsible for her own behavior. Rhysand is about to explode in rage like a certain blonde spring court fiddler we all know and love / hate, Tamlin, before finally Feyre puts her foot down and she's like, enough is enough. The plan is final no matter what Nesta has to say about it. This is what we're doing. Nesta isn't used to Feyre's shiny new spine and sputters an excuse about needing to be able to see Elaine. Feyre says that Elaine has already agreed to the plan and is actually the one who's currently packing up Nesta's apartment. Wow, I did not see that coming. And if Elaine wants to visit Nesta at the House of Wind, someone will gladly take her there. Nesta is stunned by this because Elaine is supposed to be her ride or die, and nobody has ever stood up to Nesta quite like this before. She demands to speak to Feyre alone, and surprisingly everyone goes out into the hallway to grant them this privilege. Not even privilege, you should just be able to speak to your sister one-on-one. We then get a scene break to switch to Nesta's perspective. Nesta held her spine ramrod straight, back aching with the effort. She had never hated anyone so much as she hated all of them now, save for the King of Hybern, she supposed. They'd all been discussing her, deeming her unfit and unchecked, and, "You didn't care before," Nesta said. "Why now?" Feyre toyed with her silver and star sapphire wedding ring. "I told you, it wasn't that I didn't care. Everyone I mean, had multiple conversations about this, about you. I decided that giving you time and space would be best." And why wasn't Nesta involved in any of these conversations before now? Like, I get why they didn't include her because she's so explosive, but also this seems worse to have decided this without any input from Nesta. They could have just asked Nesta what she needed to feel better. Anything would have been better than just deciding what they're going to do for Nesta without her having any input whatsoever about her own life. I already despise this merry band of assholes that is the Inner Circle, so I can't fault Nesta for hating them too. It's only been a year and these people are immortal, so that's basically nothing. And I think it was in the last book that Cassian said it took him years to get over his first battle, and he's a full-fledged warrior. So I really think they need to cut Nesta some slack on the timeline. They did not give her enough time. Nesta's behavior is definitely not okay, but they can't really pretend they gave her the actual time and space to heal. That is just not true. Nesta asks what Elaine said about the plan, and Feyre says that none of this is about Elaine and that Nesta doesn't even see Elaine very often, so she needs to stop using her as a deflection. We get some internal monologuing from Nesta that it's hard for her to be around people because seeing them reminds her of all the trauma they've been through together. Spending time with them literally gives her flashbacks, which is why she isolates herself. I'd feel a lot more empathy for Nesta if she tried to explain any of this rather than being mean to people so that they would stop seeking her out. But this book is about Nesta's character growth, so it would be sort of unfair for me to dog on her for not being perfect from the start, because you can't change if you're already perfect. I mean, I'm definitely going to keep complaining about Nesta, because what else am I supposed to do? I just need to bitch about something, and God, Nesta's easy to bitch about. But this is actually refreshing compared to Feyre, who was perfect from the start, and her character arc was her just being more perfect and more cool and more powerful. I think that's why the people who do like Silver Flames are drawn to this book, because Nesta does have a genuine character arc compared to Feyre, who, again, just got more perfect, but I am going to keep complaining about Nesta. Sorry, not sorry. Nesta thinks about the time in the last book where Cassian told her to try harder or leave, but Nesta said that she had nowhere to go. Nesta admits to herself that she doesn't want to go back to the human realm, but she doesn't know where her place is in the fairy realm either. That's why she drinks and gambles and all of that, so she can dissociate from her problems and just try to find some amount of peace. Feyre goes on to say that all Nesta does is spend her money, and Nesta is quick to put Feyre in her place and it says, like, no, honey, that's Rhysand's money. Considering Feyre and Rhysand are married, it's now also technically Feyre's money, but I see what Nesta's getting at. Particularly for people like Amren who complain about Nesta spending money, because, like, this is all Rhysand's money, let's be real. Nesta sarcastically thanks Feyre for taking time out of her homemaking and shopping to consider her, which is so funny to me. Feyre is obviously offended by that, and she reminds Nesta that she has a room in the fancy river house if she ever wanted to stay there, and she was even allowed to decorate it herself, which is such a great privilege. But if Nesta rejected it, like, girl, how could you reject this wonderful offer? Why would I ever want to stay in this house? Where she could see precisely how happy they were, where none of them seemed remotely as decimated as she'd been by the war. She'd come so close to being a part of it, of that circle, had held their hands as they'd stood together on the morning of the final battle and believed they might all make it. And they did in fact all make it, even though 2 of them died. They were resurrected. So yay, everybody did survive. Misery loves company, so I can see why Nesta wouldn't want to spend time around people who are supposedly healed from their trauma, even though they're all actually just ignoring it and pretending to be better until they all have their own outbursts or meltdowns. Rhysand isn't expected to hide or control his rage, but Nesta is, and that's not fair. And even Azriel and Cassian have had violent outbursts throughout this series, so why is Nesta the only one who is supposed to behave when everybody else gets to act a fool? That's not fair! Nesta's war trauma made her realize how quickly everything could be taken from her, and I think she'd already have learned that lesson when her family lost their wealth and fell into destitute poverty, but I guess a war is what it took for Nesta to realize that. Feyre says that Nesta should want to stay at the house and just interact with the inner circle in general because they're sisters, as if that's supposed to mean something. I don't personally subscribe to the fact that you need to stay with your blood family, but anyway, Nesta even acknowledges that whole poverty thing I just mentioned by snarkily throwing a jab at Feyre for always, quote, sacrificing for her sad little human family, which, girl, Nesta, chill the fuck out. You don't get to resent Feyre for being a provider while suckling her teat for years because you can't be bothered to do hard things. You can't criticize someone for being a martyr when you're the one handing them the nails to build their cross. That's not fair. Feyre is fed up and angrily says that Nesta spent 500 gold marks the previous night, and I have no concept of how their currency or economics work, but it's obviously a lot of money. The crux of the issue comes out when Feyre says that she was embarrassed to go over the bill with her family, and by family she is referring to the inner circle. Because remember, they're not just friends, they're family. Family. Nesta hated that word, the term Feyre used to describe her court, as if things had been so miserable with the Archeron family that Feyre had needed to find another one, had chosen her own. Nesta's nails bit into her palms, the pain overriding that of her tightening chest. Bro, Nesta, did you forget about your poverty and how neither you or Elaine helped Feyre do anything to support the family despite being completely able-bodied, unlike Papa Archeron, who I still contend could have helped somehow? At the very least, Nesta could have sat around and kept her mouth shut, but she actively went out of her way to insult and degrade Feyre. So yes, the Archeron family sucked enough that Feyre needed to go find another one. Absolutely it sucked. I'm gonna chalk this up to poor writing on SJM's part, as she clearly didn't plan ahead enough to know that she would one day write a book about Nesta. If she had, I think she would have toned down how vile and needlessly cruel Nesta was in the first book. Like, I think at one point Nesta literally calls Feyre a peasant. For why? That's so rude. For what? And then when Feyre needs help chopping the firewood, Nesta's like, no, you could do it with your man hands. I don't want splinters. Like, why? Why would you go out of your way to write her to be that mean? SJM really shot herself in the foot with that, because I know there's a lot of readers who will never give Nesta a chance because of all of that, and I'm kind of one of those people, but I'm trying to have an open mind. Nesta just really pisses me off, but everybody else pisses me off so much more that I kind of like Nesta, and it's very conflicting for me. Feyre continues to chastise Nesta for not only spending so much money, but what she spent it on. Nesta accuses Feyre of just wanting to save face, and that's exactly what is happening here. It is about how it reflects upon me, upon Rhys, and upon my court when my damned sister spends our money on wine and gambling and does nothing to contribute to this city. If my sister cannot be controlled, then why should we have the right to rule over anyone else? Ding ding ding! They finally said the quiet part out loud. Nesta can't be controlled, and that's embarrassing and pisses them off, so they have to do something about it. Should Nesta be allowed to make an ass out of herself on Feyre's dime? Or Rhysand's dime if we're going to be technical here? No, she shouldn't. But everyone needs to stop pretending that they just want what's best for Nesta, when that's clearly not what this intervention is about. This has nothing to do with Nesta getting over her war trauma and having time to heal. They just can't control her, and it makes them mad. Nesta says that she is not a thing to be controlled by Feyre, and thinks about how she has been controlled her entire life. She's referring to her mother, but that's not explicitly mentioned here. That'll be coming later on. Feyre says that's exactly why Nesta needs to go train, so she can learn to control herself, and also so she can become indoctrinated to be a good Night Court citizen. Okay, again, she didn't say that last part out loud, but clearly that is what she wants. Nesta again refuses, and Feyre again tells her she does not have a choice. Well, I mean, she does have a choice. It's either fall in line or go to the human realm, but really what kind of choice is that? Feyre goes on to say that Nesta's shitty apartment has already been condemned and it's going to be torn down and rebuilt as a shelter for war refugees, so she cannot go back there. Bitch, what? Excuse me? We were told in the last book that Rhysand never bothered to fix the only slum in Valaris because it would be too difficult to deal with its residents during the remodel. Where are they supposed to go now if their building is being torn down and made into a shelter for other people? Surely Nesta wasn't the only one who lived there. This also shows that Rhysand had the power to fix it at any time he wanted to, and he simply chose not to. He only took action when he could use it to spite someone he hates. What a horrible person, and an especially horrible leader. Fuck Rhysand. He is not a good person, and nobody can convince me otherwise.
I hate the shit out of you!
Nesta tried to master her uneven breathing, one of the few choices she'd made for herself, stripped away. Feyre didn't seem to care. Feyre had always been her own master, always got whatever she wished, and now it seemed Feyre would be granted this wish too. Nesta seethed. I never want to speak to you again. Is Nesta on crack? Feyre had a shitty life before Tamlin whisked her away, and then she had to go through extreme torture and even her own death to defeat Amarantha and solidify her place in the fairy realm, and that was all just the first book. She suffered through the next books too. Sure, Feyre is living the high life now, but she went through 10 times as much trauma as Nesta ever dealt with in order to get there. So don't sit here and tell me Feyre always got what she wished. She went through hell to get all of that. And to be clear, I don't think trauma should be a competition, but Nesta can't help but always make it into one, and she can never see that she's losing that competition. Feyre doesn't take the bait from Nesta and says she can talk to Cassian then. If you don't want to talk to me, girl, go talk to Cassian. And Nesta clearly doesn't mean what she says because she continues to talk to Feyre. She says she won't be Feyre's prisoner, and Feyre reminds Nesta that she does technically have other options, but she's done paying for Nesta to destroy herself. And that's what I said all in the last video. Feyre girl, if you're done watching this, stop bankrolling it. And that's exactly what's happening. Thank God Feyre is done being an enabler, but I think she went too hard in the other direction. I don't think that they have the right to fully kick Nesta out of Prythian, but they could ban her from Valaris or the Night Court if they're done dealing with her. I think her choices are a little bit extreme here. Like, they should have just cut Nesta off and let her stay in Valaris, maybe, and find her own way. Well, no, because then she would keep embarrassing them. Whatever, I don't know what the solution is here, but this is not it. Nesta again tries to bring up Elaine, and Feyre again shuts her down. Is like, girl, you don't even see Elaine, and she claims to know why Nesta pushed Elaine away and doesn't really see her. But I highly doubt that Feyre actually understands Nesta's mindset of pushing people away so she doesn't have to feel her trauma. Because if she did understand that, I think Feyre would go about this whole situation very differently. But, Nesta isn't exactly easy to deal with, so I don't know. I don't know anymore what they could do differently. This is just bad. Nesta thinks bitterly to herself how it used to just be her and Elaine, but then Elaine chose Feyre and left her behind. She also thinks about how Amren also abandoned her and chose the inner circle, which is dumb because Amren was never going to choose Nesta, like, duh. Amren is whatever, but thinking that kind of thing about Elaine is just disgusting to me. I am also in a trio of sisters, and one of my sisters is my twin. I know there are times in my life, mostly during my childhood, that my twin and I shut our other sister out, and honestly, that shit haunts me. Twins have a special bond, and Nesta and Elaine are not even twins, because sisters in general also have a special bond, and I would just never want my little sister to feel left out again. I don't have to choose one sister or the other. There's strength in numbers, and I would rather be a trio than a duo, and us all stand together. But that's enough about me. We have a lot of nonsense to cover, and you truly have seen nothing yet. Nesta has nothing left to say, and neither does Feyre, so the chapter ends there. The next chapter is from Cassian's perspective as he hangs out with Rhysand. I think I previously mentioned that Cassian comes off as pathetic in this book, and the reason why I say that is because we get to see a lot of his internal monologue, and the part I don't like is seeing his admiration and almost deification of Rhysand when he's thinking about him. Like, I understand Rhysand is the High Lord, so his subjects and of course his inner circle are gonna look up to him, but it comes off as wimpy and weird from Cassian, who had no problem defying Rhysand in previous books. Before now, Rhysand came off as more on an equal level as his inner circle, and then in this book, all of a sudden, Rhysand is so elevated above them that it's very different from what we've seen before, and it makes everybody else look pathetic. Anyway, they're in Rhysand's big fancy study, and we get a weird detail that Rhysand has set up a working model of their world with planets and stars and stuff, and it tracks the sun's location and time and all that jazz, and how Rhysand uses it to ponder the universe because he's just that deep. What? Am I dumb? Like, when did planetary models like this become a thing? Because this feels kind of advanced, and how do the fairies know so much about space to the point that they know about other planets and their location relative to their planet? Do they have telescopes? Like, and would a telescope of this time period be advanced enough to see the other planets well enough to know, like, where they are in relation to other planets? Like, I'm so confused. The technology level and general knowledge level of this world is so confusing and random to me. Like, I don't understand what they know and what they don't know about science or anything. Like, I'm confused. Take a shot every time I say I'm confused, and you will get blackout drunk. Trust me, you need it to get through the rest of this. Anyway, we get a bunch more pointless exposition as Cassian randomly thinks about Feyre and what a good painter she is. Like, I guess he's looking at a painting in Rhysand's office or something. He kisses Feyre's ass as much as he kisses Rhysand's ass, and I hate all three of these goons, so these parts of the book are so annoying. I hate these people. They don't deserve ass kissing. Stop ass kissing! Cassian and Rhysand talk about Nesta, and Rhysand seems skeptical that Cassian will be able to whip her into shape, even though this entire plan was Rhysand's idea, so why would he set this up if he didn't think Cassian could do it? Again, it all goes to show that this was never about helping Nesta improve, because Nesta doesn't even think Cassian can do it! Rhysand simply wants to punish Nesta, and Nesta hates Cassian, so what better punishment than sticking them together? Like, this is dumb! We get some exposition about the potential Illyrian civil war that was mentioned in the last book, and Cassian mostly smoothed over that whole conflict, so they don't have to worry about that anymore, I guess. It would be cool if we could have seen more of that play out. If we're gonna mention it, like, let's do it. But nope, it happened, and now it's done with. Rhysand says that Cassian is ready to take on bigger responsibilities, as if being the leader of the Illyrian army and generally being a liaison for the Illyrians and Rhysand isn't a big enough job. Maybe the bigger responsibilities Cassian is ready for is actually enforcing the rules in Illyria and making them not treat women like shit! Why are we adding more responsibilities when they haven't even done what they've already set out to do? Why? Why? Why?
Now, I'm really mad.
Rhysand calls the Illyrian situation a test, as if Cassian didn't genuinely stop a civil war from happening, which seems super weird and almost makes it seem like Rhysand somehow set that all up even though he didn't. Maybe. I don't know. Maybe he did. Rhysand goes on to say that Nesta isn't a test, but he's smirking and acting kind of all high and mighty, so I'm not so sure that this isn't another test. They talk about Nesta's cauldron powers and how they've been dormant since the war, but that doesn't mean she doesn't still have them, so they need to be careful and figure out what she's capable of. Cassian tells Rhysand that it sounds like he's afraid of Nesta, and Rhysand blatantly says that it is, which kind of contradicts that he wanted to go fight her earlier. But this is all further proof that the intervention was not for Nesta's own good, but because she might be an important and dangerous weapon that needs to be controlled. Oh, and also she's an embarrassment, so like, somebody control Nesta. Cassian shook his head, unable to help his laugh. Rhys smiled, lacing his fingers behind his head and leaning back in his seat. You need to get out in the practice ring more, brother. Brother! Sorry, Cassian told him, surveying his friend's powerful body. Don't want that maid of yours to find any soft bits. She never finds any soft bits when I'm around her, Rhys said, and Cassian laughed again.
Disgusting!
Ew, what the fuck? First of all, Cassian thinking about Rhysand's powerful body is fanfiction fuel if I've ever seen it. But I mostly pulled this passage to reiterate how much Rhysand sexualizes Feyre, which is something I had a big problem with in the last book. I know these two are lovers, so of course he's going to have sexual thoughts about her, but it's always so vulgar and gross instead of being like tender or loving. It's always like, I want to be balls deep in Feyre. Like, ew, like it's gross. It's not like, oh, I love being with Feyre. It's gross. It's always gross. I especially don't like that he's having this kind of banter with Cassian. It just feels disrespectful. Especially since Feyre is the High Lady now. Like, you wouldn't want to speak, like, sexually vulgar about your queen in front of the servants. Like, what? They're not servants, but they're kind of servants. Whatever. Let's just move on. Cassian asks Rhysand if Feyre is going to kick his ass for what went down in the intervention. And Rhysand says he already sent the servants away so that they don't overhear anything. Oh, but it's not the fighting he doesn't want them to overhear, if you catch my drift. Again, this comes off as so disrespectful because Feyre had genuine issues with the way that Rhysand acted because Rhysand really acted poorly. He straight up asked Nesta to fistfight him. He said, "Cash me outside, Nesta." Like, what the fuck? And Rhysand trivializes all of that by implying that they're gonna bone instead of discussing what happened and having a conversation about his poor attitude. and how he's just making the situation worse. They're just gonna fuck about it, I guess? God, I hate Rhysand. Cassian grinned right back, even as something like jealousy tugged on his gut. He didn't begrudge them their happiness. Not at all. There were plenty of times when he'd see the joy on Rhys's face and have to walk away to keep from weeping, because his brother had waited for that love, earned it. Rhys had gone to the mat again and again to fight for that future with Feyre. For this. But sometimes, Cassian saw that mating ring, and the portrait behind the desk, and this house, and just wanted. Do y'all see what I mean about the ass-kissing and Cassian kind of coming off as pathetic? I understand that Cassian and Rhysand are bros, but this is a little much for me. Like, weeping at the sight of your bro being happy. Like, dude, come on. I hate Rhysand and genuinely think he's a bad person at best and outright evil at worst, so all of this Rhysand praise from Cassian feels like propaganda. As I said before, it really wasn't like this in the other books, and in this book they treat Rhysand like he's God and not like he's one of their bros. Like, it's weird. They get back on track with their previous conversation about how Rhysand thinks Cassian is capable of bigger responsibilities, but Cassian isn't really interested. Cassian says that being general is enough, but he hesitates when he says it, and Rhysand picks up on that. He says that he and Azriel think the human queens are up to something, and for some reason he wants Cassian to look into it. That's clearly a job that's more suited for Azriel, so Cassian pushes back on that. What, we're doing some role reversal? Az gets to lead the Illyrians now? Don't play stupid, Rhys said coolly. Cassian rolled his eyes, but they both knew Azriel would sooner disband and destroy Illyria than help it. Convincing their brother that the Illyrians were a people worth saving was still a battle amongst the three of them. Don't play stupid? What the fuck, Rhysand? What's stupid is making Cassian do spy work when you already have a fucking spy master! I hate everyone in this series except for a few select people like Lucian and Tarquin, but I'm gonna take a stand here and now and say that I hate Azriel the least out of the Bat Boys. I think I hate Rhysand the most, but Cassian really tests my patience, so that's hard to say. Let's play a game in the comments below. Bang, marry, kill for Rhysand, Cassian, and Azriel. I'm gonna go with marry Azriel because he'll be a hopeless simp for me if I'm even a little bit nice to him. Bang Cassian because you'll see later on in this book that that dude knows how to lay some serious pipe. And kill Rhysand because duh, I fucking hate Rhysand. Anyway, Rhysand says Azriel is too busy doing other stuff, so Cassian needs to investigate the queens, and it's gonna be a test to see what Cassian is capable of. I think that's pretty stupid considering they're still recovering from a war, and the queens very well might be trying to start another war, so I can't imagine that whatever Azriel is doing is more important than figuring that out. And this should not be a test for Cassian when the stakes are so high. At the time of writing this script, it's actually been like 2 months since I read the book, and I can't remember if what Azriel has been working on is ever revealed, but regardless, it's really, really stupid to get Cassian involved with any of this. This is dumb! Rhysand says that Azriel spies from the shadows, and he needs Cassian to get information from out in the open, and that Mor will explain everything when she's back from whatever fairy country she's out building a relationship with, because that's her new job now. Instead of dealing with the Court of Nightmares, Mor deals with these other random fairy nations we never get to see. Cassian seems surprised that he has to deal with both Nesta and the queens, and yeah, that's a lot of work, but Rhysand won't budge on that, so Cassian just accepts it, because of course he does. The scene ends there, and we're still in Cassian's perspective in the next scene as he meets Nesta to take her up to prison, the House of Wind. Feyre is also there, so I think her conversation with Nesta was happening at the same time Rhysand and Cassian were talking. Cassian wonders if Feyre has noticed that the servants are starting to leave because Rhysand sent them away, and he notices an almost mischievous look in her eyes that indicates that she has noticed and she knows what Rhysand has in store for her, which gross! What? Gross! Feyre! Remember you were mad at Rhysand. Don't lose that energy. Tell Rhysand off. He needs to know what he did wrong. Don't fuck about this. You can fuck afterwards, but have a conversation first.
I hate this fucking shit!
Thank the gods he was getting out of here. He'd probably have to fly to the sea itself not to hear Rhys, or feel his power when he... Cassian stopped himself before he could finish the thought. He and his brothers had put a good deal of distance between the stupid youths they'd been, fucking any female who showed interest, often in the same room as each other, and the males they were now. He wanted to keep it that way.
We are going to pretend we didn't hear that.
What the fuck did I just read? What? I actually don't know what to say about any of that. What? Let's just move on, because, oh my god, what the fuck? Cassian asks Feyre if she's going to teleport him and Nesta up to the House of Wind as if he isn't capable of flying up there himself, but then Mor randomly walks in and she's like, I'll do it! Cassian is happy to see her and gives her a big hug, which I'm sure Nesta is super happy to see, and that's not awkward at all. Cassian senses that something is wrong with Mor and she's got something on her mind, so he asks her what's wrong, but she just vaguely says she'll tell him later on. I don't remember what's going on with Mor, so I guess we'll figure out together what that is. Despite the tense intervention that just happened, the mood is like weirdly light as Cassian, Mor, and Feyre banter a little bit together while Nesta just stands there completely silent and obviously still furious because they just had a big argument. I think Nesta actually does have some self-control if she's able to stonewall them instead of shouting and arguing, especially with Mor being there because Mor is so fucking annoying. Nesta even willingly reaches out to grab Mor's arm when it's time to teleport away to the House of Wind, but it's not like she has any other options. The scene ends there as they teleport away. The next scene is from Nesta's perspective as they arrive at the House of Wind. Mor had to teleport above the wards, so they are high up in the air above the house and start falling. Cassian grabs Nesta and glides her down to the house with his wings, and Mor teleports away midair. Nesta realizes that Cassian could have and should have just flown her up there considering he had to use his wings anyway, and I'm wondering why he didn't just do that. Like, why have Mor show up and do this? It feels like a really clumsy way to introduce Mor back into the story, but she should have just shown up later in a way that was more appropriate. Because her showing up just to teleport them, like, really doesn't make sense. Oh, and we do get clarification that teleporting above the wards is not a great idea because the distance to the house is high enough to break bones. So truly the only way to access the House of Wind is to have wings or to use the stairs. No wonder the inner circle doesn't really like going there, it's pretty inconvenient. Nesta is uncomfortable at the house because it's where she and Elaine were sent when they first became hot fairies, and all of those unpleasant memories come flooding back to her. Did anybody consider this when they decided to stick her in the House of Wind? No, of course not. Cassian tells Nesta that she'll be staying in her old room and tells her where his room is, like on the floor above it. Nesta's like, why the fuck do I care where your room is? And Cassian banters back, you know, Nesta, you can come to my room if you have a bad dream and you need a bedtime story. Maybe one of those smutty ones you like. Because Nesta likes smut novels because this book is very meta for some reason. And it's just like, ew, Cassian, shut up. I know Cassian is probably just trying to lighten the mood, but it's not gonna work and I wish he'd just keep his fucking mouth shut. The last thing I'd want if I was being all emo and brooding is for someone to hit on me. That would be my 13th reason for real. Nesta doesn't respond and goes inside the house. She thinks about how she's never really felt at home anywhere she's ever lived, but at least she's familiar with the House of Wind and she enjoys the private library there. To be clear, she means there's a separate library in the actual house and she's not referring to the library deep below the house where the priestesses live. I don't know exactly how that library is connected to the house itself because the 10,000 stairs lead to the streets of Valaris, like ground level, and not to the library, which would be even farther down. Nesta thinks about Elaine again and how Elaine was basically catatonic when she was first turned into a hot fairy and she needed a lot of care and support. Nesta rudely thinks that Elaine is, quote, the adjusted one now, and that's so gross and it almost makes it seem like Nesta wanted Elaine to stay weak and sick. Nobody really respects Elaine and they all baby her, but she's barely a character in this book and in the series in general, so I'm not going to complain about that too much. Nesta thinks about how she was starting to come to terms with the whole hot fairy thing, but then the war happened and ruined everything. Until she'd been hunted by the king of Hybern in the cauldron. Until she'd realized that everyone she cared for would be used to hurt her, break her, trap her. Until the last battle, when she couldn't stop 1,000 Illyrians from dying, and had instead been able to save only one. Nesta takes a whole lot of blame for things that aren't really her fault while actively not putting effort towards things that actually are in her power to change, which is so infuriating to me. Nesta feels really bad about all the war stuff, but does not feel bad at all about the poverty stuff, and that is so weird. I wouldn't even be able to look Feyre in the eye if I treated her that badly when she was the only one keeping me alive and fed for years. Truly, like, how does Nesta not feel bad about that? It's weird. Going back to the war, Nesta thinks that if she had to do it all again, she'd still save Cassian, so deep down she does care about him, even if she can't fully admit it. Cassian follows Nesta even though she says she doesn't want an escort to her room, because Cassian just can't leave Nesta alone or give her any space. He does this all the time. Cassian tells Nesta that Azriel's room is also by his room, but that Azriel probably won't be around so much because he's so busy, but he does make a point of saying, you know, Azriel does prefer to stay at the House of Wind versus the River House or any of the other houses Rhysand owns because Azriel likes privacy. And I would want my privacy too. I'd rather stay at the House of Wind so I wouldn't have to listen to Feyre screaming and Rhysand's roaring. Like, there's no way in hell I'm staying at the River House. Nuh-uh. Nesta thinks about how Rhysand owns all of the houses and pays for everything for everyone in the inner circle, and she knows that's something she could use to hurt Cassian if she wanted to, because that is kind of emasculating to have somebody else pay for your entire existence, but she decides against it. Nesta views her ability to find someone's weakness and use it to verbally cut them down as a gift, and that's pretty fucked up to view that as a gift. That's kind of a curse, but she's like, it's a blessing and a curse, and it's like, girl, just don't be mean. I mean, sometimes these people do deserve to be, like, talked down to, but it never works in Nesta's favor. Cassian tells Nesta that she needs to eat, and she refuses because she has no appetite. That's a pretty common trauma response, and it's repeatedly stated how much weight Nesta has lost as a result. Oh, except for her boobs. Don't forget she still has great boobs. Cassian insists that Nesta must eat or she won't make it through training, and Nesta again refuses to train at, quote, that horrible place. She hates the Illyrian camp, and I don't blame her. I wouldn't want to go to that awful place either. Cassian reminds Nesta that she was ordered to train, and she's still welcome to go to the human realm if she's not down with the plan. Nesta thinks about calling his bluff, but doesn't risk it because he might actually follow the plan and drop her off there. And she really doesn't want to go back to the human realm because that would suck ass and nobody would welcome her back, so she's like, fuck, I guess this is my life now. Nesta bitterly thinks about how even though Elaine had mourned her human life most of all, even she had found a place in the fairy realm. Elaine tends the gardens at Feyre's fancy house and has made friends with the servants, so she's found a position that really fulfills her and has friends, and Nesta really has neither. She doesn't really seem to be happy for Elaine for having these things, though. She does seem bitter about it, which, like, gross. Even if I was suffering, I would still want the best for my sisters because I love those bitches. Even if I'm miserable, I would not want to drag them down into the mud with me. I want them to live their best life no matter what. Anyway, Nesta says she's tired and Cassian tells her to rest up because training starts in the morning. They'll train for 2 hours, then have lunch, and then Nesta will start work in the library. They must not be starting that early in the morning if they only have 2 hours of training before lunch. But I doubt Nesta has stamina for any more training than that. Hell, my fat ass wouldn't make it more than 30 minutes through any kind of training. And let's be real, with whatever training Cassian is doing, like, I wouldn't last 10 minutes, so 2 hours is a lot. Nesta doesn't ask any questions because she doesn't care, and it really doesn't matter. She just has to do whatever she's told to do, so, like, what is there to ask? So she goes into her room and shuts the door. She's incredibly numb and dissociated as she climbs into bed and tries to ignore all of her existential dread, which I did not mean to rhyme, and that's really sad. As much as I hate Nesta, I really don't like to read about suffering, and Nesta is really going through it. But that's the end of the chapter, so, night-night, Nesta. The next chapter is from Cassian's perspective as he meets Mor at a cafe, and I think this would have been a better time to reintroduce her character into this narrative than her randomly showing up to teleport Nesta and Cassian to the House of Wind. She kind of just fucked off after that, so like, why not just use this to reintroduce her? Why did she even show up earlier? Side note, the narrative constantly compares Mor to Sunshine, which is not only repetitive, but super heavy-handed messaging, that even though she's from the dark, scary cave that is the Court of Nightmares, it didn't destroy her and she's still bright and sunny and good and all that jazz. Or maybe she's not, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Oh, one more side note. Cassian also constantly thinks about how beautiful Mor is, to the point that it seems more than friendly. I definitely think Cassian would have pursued a relationship past their one-night stand if Mor was down with it. In earlier books, there was a weird pseudo-love triangle set up between Mor, Cassian, and Azriel, and I'm still kind of annoyed that it was abruptly dropped, instead of doing anything interesting with it. Anyway, people are openly gawking at Cassian like he's an actual celebrity because he's a big bad war hero and everyone admires him and blah 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 blah. Oh, but only in Valaris. The Illyrians still hate Cassian, and so do I. Mor indirectly asks about Nesta in kind of a mean girl way, and Cassian straight up tells her to knock it off, which surprised me. He doesn't often stand up for Nesta, which irritates the fuck out of me. Don't. His attention drifting to the glittering Cedra a mere feet away. Please don't. Mor sipped her tea, the portrait of elegant innocence. We'd be better off throwing Nesta into the Court of Nightmares. She'd thrive there. Cassian clenched his jaw, both at the insult and the truth. That's exactly the sort of existence we're trying to steer her away from. Excuse me? This sentiment makes me so angry that it's hard to even articulate. First of all, the Court of Nightmares is a horrible, awful place, and nobody knows that better than Moore. To suggest throwing another woman into that kind of environment is absolutely vile. It's disgusting that now that Moore is free of that place, she's willing to use it as a punishment for other women rather than advocating for change. It's disgusting beyond belief. Seriously? Don't forget that Moore was in charge of the Court of Nightmares for years until she took on this new role of being a diplomat to other fairy countries or whatever the fuck she does. I don't know how much power Moore actually had, but it doesn't seem like she even tried to make the Court of Nightmares any better. So if it's still a shithole, it's kind of her fault, and it's definitely Rhysand's fault, so why are we oh, let's throw Nesta there? Bitch, what? Nobody actually tries to fix anything despite being the most special badass people to have ever lived, but the narrative expects us to give them credit for simply acknowledging that things should be better. It's performative activism to the max, and Moore isn't even doing any activism here. She's like, well, let's put Nesta in the snake pit for reasons, because we don't like her. What? Moore is a pick-me, and it seems like she doesn't actually love women, and that's so irritating. This is seriously the queer representation we get, is this bitch? For real?
Man, fuck them bitches.
Moore realizes that Cassian actually cares about Nesta, and Cassian goes on to say that he's genuinely bothered by how much pain Nesta causes, but also the pain that she must feel herself. It would be a nice moment to see Cassian show this level of care and concern and just general awareness, but then he immediately changes the subject. What? You were so close, Cassian, come on! God forbid anyone actually stand up for Nesta in any meaningful way. Even more bizarrely, as soon as Cassian stops thinking about Nesta, he switches to yet again thinking about how beautiful Moore is. He again let himself admire her perfect face. Beyond the disastrous consequences for Moore after their night together, the fallout with Rhys afterward had been awful, and Azriel had been so furious in his own quiet way that Cassian had quelled any further desire for Moore, had let lust turn into affection, and all romantic feelings turn into familial bonds. But he could still admire her sheer beauty, as he'd admire any work of art. Even though he knew well that what lay inside Moore was far more lovely and perfect than her exterior.
A bullshit? A bullshit? A bullshit.
See, I told you that Cassian would have dated Moore for real if she was down with it and his bros weren't pissed about it. He only views her like family because he can't have her sexually, and that's weird to me. I guess we should give him credit for respecting Moore's boundaries and not continuing to pursue her like Azriel seemingly does, but it's still weird. This whole dynamic between these three people, Azriel, Cassian, and Moore, is so fucking weird. Also miss me with that shit about Moore's interior being more perfect than her exterior. That bitch just suggested they should throw Nesta into a literal nightmare realm for the crime of being too mean. Nesta hasn't really done anything bad, she's just mean. Nesta literally saved Cassian's life during the war, and they all hail him as a hero, but Nesta is still viewed as trash because she's not a kiss-ass to Rhysand in the inner circle. They change the subject to talk about Moore's diplomatic duties, and we get a bunch of exposition that I don't really care to explain because the book isn't really about any of that. It pretends to be about politics, but it is not. The gist is that Prythian is trying to draft up a new treaty after the war, and nobody else is really down with it and they won't sign it. Since the wall between the human realm and the fairy realm is gone now, there's still a looming possibility that some evil fairies will try to expand their territory into the human realm, even though that would be impractical because Prythian is in the way. Not courts within Prythian trying to take over the human realm, even though we'll later find out that might be a thing, but other fairy nations that we hear about in passing and never see anything about for real. Anyway, Rhysand asked Cassian to look into the human queens because they haven't disbanded their armies, which means they might still be preparing for war. That confuses me because you'd think they would always have an army on standby regardless of an impending war because that's just how countries work, but whatever. Humans really don't stand a chance against fairies for obvious reasons, so they speculate that the humans must have some kind of trick up their sleeve to deal with the fairies, and Cassian has to find out what that is. We're reminded about Vassa, the human queen who is outcast by the other queens because she wasn't down with their scheming. They somehow orchestrated getting Vassa to be kidnapped by some wizard guy and turned into a firebird at night, which is bad, I guess. But Vassa mostly seems free to do what she wants considering she was still able to fight in the war on the side of Prythian. The whole situation is weird and I don't really understand it, and it's a very, underbaked plot point, so, who gives a shit about Vassa? Anyway, Vassa might know some helpful stuff about the other queens. Cassian says that Lucian already hangs out with her so he can deal with all of that, and, yeah, Lucian should deal with all of that. But Moore says that they can't trust Lucian because he's friends with Vasa and Jurian, that one human guy who is also, like, irrelevant. This is very confusing to me. Why is everybody so torn up about Lucian having friends? Feyre was acting weird about this in the last book, and I just don't understand why. Shouldn't they want to be friends with the humans so that they can finally have some peace and, like, work out some relations with them? Cassian comes to the conclusion that Lucian might be biased when it comes to giving information about, like, Vasa because he's her friend, which is, like, such a non-issue since Rhysand or Feyre can just read his mind to see if he's telling the truth. I don't know what incentive Lucian would even have to keep secrets, considering he also wants peace between these realms. Like, why would he keep information that's helpful from the Night Court? Like, what? If someone knows what's going on here, please explain it to me in the comments below, because I'm genuinely so confused about why this is a problem and why they can't trust Lucian or Vasa or Jurian. Like, why are they making this a problem? That's all I really care to get into with this scene, so let's move on. The next scene is from Nesta's perspective as she wakes up from her nap. She's disoriented and panicky because she thinks she's back at their cottage in the human realm when they were all poor and starving. It's kind of weird to see moments like this where Nesta is clearly traumatized from that time and trying to reconcile that with how she acted in the first book, like being such a bitch. But I've already complained enough about that, and this video is going to be long enough. Nesta stands at the window to observe the city, but is still lost in past memories and thinks about her mother. Before Mama Archeron died, she was essentially training Nesta to be the perfect woman so that she could get into some kind of high position through a strategic political marriage, but obviously that all fell through when they lost their wealth. They had thrown them all, mere children and a crumbling man, to the wolves. So Nesta had become a wolf, armed herself with invisible teeth and claws, and learned to strike faster, deeper, more lethally. Had relished it, but when the time came to put away the wolf, she'd found it had devoured her too. Except Nesta used her newfound wolf furry powers to be mean to her sister instead of the people who actually wronged them. Great. Feyre also frequently refers to herself as a wolf to hype herself up, and I don't know if SJM is just a lazy writer or if this is supposed to highlight some kind of sisterly connection through wolves? Like, why do they love wolves? Just kidding, SJM is definitely just a lazy writer. We are also reminded that Nesta previously had a fiancé, which is something that was mentioned in the first book, and something Nesta used to act all high and mighty over Feyre. She was like, "Oh, Feyre, I'm gonna get married and I'm never gonna see you again. I'm just gonna go live a high life without you. Bye." Except obviously that never came to fruition, and now we are getting like this kind of retconning about how that fiancé was actually a really bad person. It is implied here that Nesta's fiancé made her uncomfortable sexually and pushed her boundaries, and I'm only bringing that up because it's somewhat relevant later on and gives more context to why Nesta acts certain ways, but we'll talk about that later when it's more relevant. The next scene is from Cassian's perspective as he lays in bed, unable to sleep. He was startled awake by the sound of a door opening and was on edge to the point that he grabs a knife. And the whole time he's thinking about all the other weapons hidden in his room and around the house in general. Cassian clearly has his own war trauma that he's dealing with if a door opening was all it takes to get him all worked up, so it's baffling to me that he's so oblivious when it comes to Nesta and her obvious triggers. If Cassian, the big bad war general, still gets flashbacks, then it's ridiculous to expect Nesta to be perfectly okay. We're told that Azriel is back at the house, and that's who Cassian heard walking around. Considering Azriel is a super spy, that means he intentionally wanted Cassian to hear him and know he's around if he's not, like, concealing his footsteps. Which I think is a smart and courteous thing for him to do. If I were Azriel, I wouldn't want to get shanked because I caught someone off guard. We get what I think is supposed to be a thoughtful moment as Rhysand mentally checks in with Cassian to ask why he's still awake, but I think it's incredibly creepy that Rhysand is monitoring everyone in the middle of the night. Cassian points out that Rhysand is also still awake, and Rhysand disgustingly says that he's taking a break from activities with Feyre. Apparently her kitty game isn't good enough to keep Rhysand from thinking about his bros. Oh my god, why did I say that? Why did I write that? I'm losing my fucking mind, guys.
What the fuck is this?
Cassian calls Rhysand out for snooping on him, but Rhysand acts like he's just concerned. I don't buy that for a second. Rhysand is weird and nosy with his mind control powers, but he won't use them when they actually need to get information, which is so unbelievably stupid. Anyway, Cassian promises he'll update Rhysand tomorrow on how things go with Nesta, and the chapter ends there. The next chapter opens up with breakfast as Cassian tells Nesta she better eat or she'll regret it. Ah yes, threats will definitely work on someone with a history of disordered eating. Just bully them into getting better, and everything will be fine. Nesta is obviously uncomfortable with everything that's going on, so of course she doesn't have much of an appetite. Nesta kept perfectly still in her chair, keenly aware of every movement in the fighting leathers she donned. She'd forgotten how it felt to wear pants, the nakedness of having her thighs and ass on display. That's kind of a weird, uncomfy way to phrase that, and it kind of makes me think of the joke of like, a court of tits and ass, throne of ass, that clip.
A court of tits and ass.
But I can see why Nesta is bothered by all of this. The human realm is really backwards with how women are treated, like especially backwards even compared to Prithian. So they don't wear pants there, and Nesta isn't used to clothes that show off her figure. Thankfully, Cassian isn't leering at her like before when he noticed her magnificent breasts. Cassian gives Nesta a lecture on nutrition and how she shouldn't eat sugar or white bread because it'll make her crash later on. Like, okay, thanks Gym Bro Cassian. Never mind the fact that Nesta isn't even eating, so giving her that information comes off as needless shaming because it's not like she's eating the bread. She's not eating anything. Nesta still refuses to eat and says that she's not going to be training either, so Cassian hits her with a low blow. His hazel eyes guttered. Not eating won't bring your father back. That has nothing to do with this, she hissed. Nothing. He braced his forearms on the table. We're gonna cut the bullshit. You think I haven't gone through what you're dealing with? You think I haven't seen and done and felt all that before, and seen those I love deal with it too? You aren't the first, and you won't be the last. What happened to your father was terrible, Nesta, but... But what, Cassian? Shut the fuck up. You literally haven't gone through what Nesta is currently dealing with because your shitty father wasn't ever present in your life. So no, you don't know what it's like to have your father die. You didn't even have a father. Nesta had to deal with her shitty father being present despite his abandonment of family duties, and that's a whole other kind of mindfuck. That's not to say that Cassian hasn't gone through worse things, but this shouldn't be a competition, and I hate how all of this is being handled. Telling someone that their suffering isn't unique and that other people have it worse doesn't actually make anyone feel better. Nesta tells Cassian to keep his fucking opinions to himself, and he's surprised by her vulgarity because the humans are kind of repressed and act all prim and proper, and so they don't really swear. Nesta says she learned it from hanging out with the inner circle because they all have really foul mouths, and Cassian is kind of amused and says he'll keep his fucking opinions to himself if Nesta eats her breakfast. Nesta straight up grabs her plate and devours it out of pure spite, which would be kind of a bad bitch moment if she wasn't doing exactly what Cassian wanted her to do. Nesta finishes her plate and gets up to leave, but Cassian grabs her arm to stop her. This leads to some pretty sexually charged banter between the two, and Nesta thinks about how they kissed that one time and it was super hot, and I don't think it was that hot. They were like on a battlefield about to die, but like I guess it was spicy. Nesta isn't willing to let herself get vulnerable with Cassian again, so she keeps all that to herself and instead tells him to keep his hands off of her. Her fingers curled once more. She selected her next words like throwing knives. If you think this training nonsense is going to result in you climbing into my bed, you're delusional, she added with a slice of a smile. I'd sooner let in a mangy street dog. Oh, it's not going to result in me climbing into your bed. Nesta snickered, victory achieved, and had reached the stairs when he crooned, You'll climb into mine. She whirled toward him, foot still suspended midair. I'd rather rot. Cassian threw her a mocking smile. We'll see. Oh, we'll see, all right. God, I wish I didn't have to see. I'm sure some people find this dynamic hot, but I don't. I like couples who actually love and respect each other rather than people who are constantly at each other's throats, but to each their own. Cassian tells Nesta to finish getting ready for training, and the scene ends there. The next scene opens from his perspective as he thinks about how hot Nesta looks in her pants, which, God damn it, Cassian! God, I hate him! He thinks about how long it's been since he's had a good bone sesh, and how the last time was with some random chick in the alley behind the bar they like to go to. How romantic. I think Nesta is going to regret that she said she'd rather let in a mangy street dog into her bed, because that's exactly what Cassian is. This man is for the streets. That had been more than 2 years ago. It had been his hand ever since. He should have scratched that particular itch before deciding that living in the house with Nesta was a good idea. She was hurting and adrift, and the last thing she needed was him panting after her, grabbing her arm like an animal, unable to stop himself from drawing near. Damn straight that's the last thing Nesta needs, but that's not going to stop Cassian from continuing to leer at her and making sassy sexual comments. This would bother me a whole lot more if Nesta wasn't also clearly into it, but these two idiots are too stubborn to actually have a real conversation with each other, which is so irritating. God damn it, just bone already. Except don't, because when they do, it's so gross. We'll get there. Cassian has a big, long internal monologue about how he wants something more real with Nesta, but she keeps pushing him away and he's so hurt by it. Too bad they can't just talk it out like adults, because that would be way too mature for this 500-year-old fairy. Nesta is like 25, so she gets more of a pass, but even that's old enough to act like an adult. Moore shows up to the House of Wind to teleport Cassian and Nesta to the Illyrian camp, and Cassian didn't come help her, which means that she teleported in above the wards and then fell down to the house. And the narrative states that the 30-foot drop had zero effect on Moore, so I guess she's like the fairy version of the Terminator or something. 30 feet is like a really big distance to fall. The narrative will randomly talk about how Moore is such an accomplished and powerful warrior to the point that it sounds like she should be the one in charge of the army instead of Cassian. Like, they did this a lot in ACOSF during the battles with the Summer Court or whatever the fuck happened. They're like, Moore is this bad bitch, except we've never seen her be a bad bitch. But if she is allegedly such a bad bitch, maybe she should be the one training Nesta. Except actually that's kind of a terrible idea, like they would not get along. Except actually it might be cool to see them go through like a friendship arc, whatever. I actually don't want Moore to do that because I don't want to read about Moore. Anyway, the next scene cuts to the Illyrian camp, which is more of a small remote village than a camp. All the women are tending to the chores while the men are in the sparring rings cosplaying warriors because they like to pretend fight but pitch a fit when they have to fight for real. Good thing they avoided that civil war or whatever the fuck that was. Devlin is there, and I don't think I mentioned him by name in my previous videos, but he's the asshole Illyrian captain or general or whatever who doesn't want to let women train, and also he hates Nesta. Like, this is the guy in one of the past books that was like, "Is that a witch?" And Nesta's like, "Yep, I am a witch."
Witch!
The familiar male's gaze snagged on her. What's her business here? Nesta gave him a secretive smile. Witchcraft. Nesta joking about being a witch to scare the Illyrians will never not be funny to me. Like, yes, she is a witch. Yep. Whatever that even means, she's a witch. Cassian tells Devlin to respect Nesta because she's the High Lady's sister, as if she isn't inherently worthy of respect if she's not related to, like, their noblewoman. It seems like the Illyrians weren't asked for permission or even told that Nesta and Cassian would be training at the village, which is weird but not a surprise. No wonder the Illyrians hate Cassian and Rhysand. Devlin doesn't turn them away, but says that any weapons Nesta touches will need to be buried, and I think the superstition is because they think she's a witch and not merely because she's a woman. Or at least I hope that's what this is all about. He goes on to say that if Nesta is on her period, then she can't touch the weapons at all, and that goes to show how backwards the Illyrians are. Gross. I'm with Asriel on this one, and I think the Illyrians are beyond fixing and need to get wiped out. Like, fuck those people. Cassian tries to lead Nesta out to the training ring anyway, but Nesta stays true to her word and plops her ass down on a rock because she's like, I'm not training. She said this up front. Like, she was not even going to pretend she was going to train. Cassian demands that she gets up and gets into the training ring, but she refuses, which is really embarrassing considering everyone is watching and, like, Cassian's supposed to be the leader of the army and he can't even get Nesta to do anything. The Illyrian stares pelted them like stones. Cassian bristled. Good. Let him see what a waste of life, what an utter wretch she'd become. Get the hell up. His words were a soft snarl. Nesta even realizes that she's humiliating Cassian in front of his men, and she kind of feels bad for it, but she told him she wasn't going to train like 10 times already, and she sticks to her word instead of yielding to save his feelings. Good for her, honestly. She had a boundary and stuck to it, and I'll never falter for that. Like, I wouldn't want to train in this godforsaken place either. I wouldn't want to train at all. Cassian is infuriated and can't hide his disgust and disappointment, and the chapter ends there as Nesta thinks that it's easier if Cassian hates her, which, like, that's so sad, Nesta. Girl, come on. Good lord, these two need couples counseling. Everyone in this book needs therapy, but I think the only therapy that exists in this universe is Feyre's art therapy for traumatized kids. I think I would have liked this book more if it was about Feyre and Nesta working through their trauma together and forming a strong sisterly bond, rather than Nesta healing her trauma through Cassian. But this is a romance novel, so of course that's not what we get. Even though Nesta refuses to train, Cassian still does his workout, and he's super badass and awe-inspiring, but not enough to get Nesta off her rock. Instead, she sits there and broods about how she does actually have a connection with Cassian, or at least she used to at some point. But that all went away, and now she doesn't know how to have a proper relationship with him. Moore shows up to teleport them back to the House of Wind, and she sees Nesta sitting on her rock. They talk, and Moore straight up says that her vote was to dump Nesta back in the human realm, and it's exactly this unwarranted hostility that will always hold Nesta's relationship with the Inner Circle back. Sure, Nesta should have been training, but she was sitting there minding her own business, so Moore also should have minded her own business and kept her mouth shut. Some thoughts can stay in your head. And did they really expect Nesta to be, completely changed overnight? She was furious at the intervention, so of course she's not going to immediately yield to their demands. It's going to take time to get Nesta to get on board, and Moore saying all these rude things to her is not going to help. Nesta kind of puts Moore in her place and says, well, it's a good thing I'm Feyre's sister then. Moore's response to that is to say that Nesta doesn't deserve the benefit of the doubt that good people like Cassian give her, which is so wild for so many reasons. First, what a rude thing to say to someone you barely even know. If you always assume the worst out of someone, then you'll never have a good relationship with them. Secondly, it's kind of crazy that Moore is like, oh, you don't deserve Cassian giving you the benefit of the doubt, when he doesn't even do that most of the time. Even he thought Nesta was capable of raging so hard that she might kill Feyre. That's not the benefit of the doubt. Thirdly, I wouldn't call Cassian or anyone in the Inner Circle a good person. They all suck ass. Nesta hates herself and believes she's a piece of shit, so she doesn't even argue with Moore, even though I really wish these two would just fight, even though apparently Moore is the Terminator and would probably kill Nesta. Whatever. It's kind of sad to see Nesta think this way about herself, even though I also think Nesta is kind of a shithead most of the time. But outside of her behavior in the first book, Nesta doesn't go out of her way to hurt people. She typically just responds poorly when people confront her, and that's not nearly bad enough to compare her to anyone from the Court of Nightmares, which is what Moore does. Nesta isn't some evil monster. She's just a bitch and she's going through some shit right now. She's just kind of a mean girl. She's not really, evil. She's just mean. There are worse crimes than being mean. The scene cuts there as they go back to Valaris, and Nesta thinks about how Moore is a self-righteous busybody, and I kind of wish she'd said that to Moore's face, but it probably would have made everything worse, so it's good that she didn't. Nesta is in the underground library to get to work, which is something she actually doesn't mind doing because she would rather not be sitting and brooding in her room. That's a good start for sure, considering all she's done for the past year is sit around and brood. If she's not going to train, it's good that she's at least taking her library duties seriously, so, let's give credit where it's due. She's not completely fucking off on doing everything. If you don't remember, back in ACOWAR, Hybern attacked the library to try and kidnap Nesta, but Feyre was able to defeat them with the power of Bryaxis, the creepy pit monster who once lived in the library but is now missing. Nesta is uncomfortable as she remembers all of that, but she pushes through that to go speak to Clotho to get her assignment. We are reminded that Clotho is all mangled from a violent assault that I won't recount here because I've already talked about how disgusting I find this whole thing to be. And seeing that really triggers Nesta's PTSD. She slips into a flashback of being forced into the cauldron and how her body was used and changed without her consent. Clotho is patient with Nesta until she snaps out of it, and Nesta is like, oh wait, yeah, I'm here for work. What do I need to do? Since Clotho can't speak or write because she has no tongue and mangled fingers, she communicates by using magic to write notes. I think she levitates a pen or something, but it doesn't explicitly say that here. Clotho tells Nesta that she has a 5-hour shift of shelving books, which Nesta doesn't complain about and decides to participate in, unlike training. Nesta is unnerved by the way Clotho silently observes her because she gets the sense that Clotho can actually understand what she's going through, and Nesta can't handle that kind of vulnerability. I am worthless and I am nothing, Nesta nearly said. She wasn't sure why the words bubbled up, pressing on her lips to voice them. I hate everything that I am, and I am so tired. I am tired of wanting to be anywhere but in my own head. This is uncomfortably relatable, but I've done a lot of work on being kinder to myself and developing a more positive self-talk. If you frequently have thoughts like these, please speak to a mental health professional if you have the means to do so. The world is mean and shitty enough already, so you don't need to dogpile on that by also being mean to yourself. Back to Nesta, she gets to work and finds peace in the menial labor of shelving books. It sounds like she should fully become a priestess instead of also being forced to train, because she doesn't like training, but she does like the library stuff. But the Inner Circle might need her spooky cauldron powers if she still has them, so fuck what's actually best for Nesta, she must train. Nesta returns to Clotho at the end of her shift, and Clotho thanks her for her work and says that Feyre speaks highly of her. Nesta doesn't believe her for obvious reasons and says that nobody likes a liar. Clotho lets out an amused breath, not a full-on laugh, and the scene ends there, so it's kind of unclear to me if Clotho was actually lying, but I doubt she was given her character. I can't really imagine what nice things Feyre had to say about Nesta, though. Nesta goes back up to the House of Wind and cleans herself up for dinner, but Cassian never shows up and has been distant with her ever since they left the Illyrian camp. Nesta seems disappointed by that, but isn't surprised given how she treated him and embarrassed him in front of everyone. And it is nice to see her reflect on the consequences of her actions, even though Cassian totally deserved to be embarrassed because fuck Cassian. A plate of food magically appears at the table for Nesta, and she tries to ask the house to also give her some wine. It doesn't listen to her commands, and Nesta feels ridiculous for talking to a house, but we later learn that the house does actually have some level of sentience, and kinda becomes Nesta's friend, which is the exact kind of whimsy I expect from a fairy book. The series as a whole would really benefit from more whimsy, and I'm sure I've complained about that before. I want more magic and fairy hijinks and, what more than whatever this shit is. The magic house is fun, I want more of that. The chapter ends as Nesta declares to the house that she will find her own wine, and she storms off, presumably to the stairs down to Valaris, which I'll remind you there are 10,000 stairs, so good luck, girl. Hey guys, it's Editing Senti. Before we see what's up with Nesta, we have a bunch of boring Cassian stuff to get through, and I recorded these sections on different days, so that is why my energy abruptly changes. I just wanted to pop in and give you a heads up so that it wasn't quite as jarring, and bye guys, enjoy the rest of the video. The next chapter is from Cassian's perspective as Mor teleports him to the human realm to do some sleuthing work on what's going on with the mortal queens. They go to the war-ravaged mansion that Lucien, Jurian, and Vassa use as their headquarters, and I can't help but wonder why none of Feyre's charity money went to setting up, an actual headquarters for this team that's dealing with human relations. They're stuck with this falling apart building while Feyre has, 5 houses. She couldn't have set them up better?
That's not my problem. It's yours.
Everyone in the Night Court is mean and untrusting of Lucien, Jurian, and Vassa for no good reason, which is so weird to me. We are reminded that the trio calls themselves the Band of Exiles, and Cassian thinks that nickname is ridiculous, as if he's not part of a group that calls themselves the Court of Dreamers. Nobody outside of the inner circle is allowed to have a cringe friend group, I guess. It's only them. They get to have their club, but no clubs for anyone else. Cassian thinks about how mad he is at Nesta for embarrassing him in front of the bros earlier. He told Feyre and the gang about what happened, and shockingly Amryn of all people told him to let Nesta dig her own grave. Which sounds bad, but she did also then say, keep offering a hand out to help her. You gotta be patient. I wish Amryn was more consistently wise and helpful, which is something I've complained about before, that she's seemingly the most immature of all of them despite being 10,000. Anyway, Cassian remembers why he's actually there, so he goes to talk to Lucien. Before Cassian can say much, Lucien warns him that his allegedly evil brother Eris is also there, and how did Cassian not smell Eris or something? Shouldn't Cassian have been able to detect Eris without Lucien having to just tell him he's there? If you don't remember, Cassian especially hates Eris because Eris was engaged to Mor, and when Mor broke that engagement by sleeping with Cassian, she was tortured by her family in the Court of Nightmares. Eris is frequently blamed for that torture, but to be clear, he didn't have anything to do with that. After all that went down, Mor was left at the Autumn Court border all busted up and bleeding, and Eris left her there, which was viewed as leaving her to die. But I think he was actually trying to be kind, because if he'd brought her into the court to render aid, then she'd be stuck there, which is exactly what she was trying to avoid. The narrative frequently references that things in that situation, didn't go down the way they're presented, but we never get the truth, so I guess forget about it. Cassian thinks about how much he wants to torture Eris for literally years on end, have him chained in a basement for years or something. What the fuck, Cassian? That's definitely not a scary thing to think at all. Cassian is totally normal and mentally well-adjusted.
Weird, buddy. You're weird!
Lucien's gold eye clicked, reading Cassian's rage while warning flashed in his remaining russet eye. The male had grown up alongside Eris, had dealt with Eris's and Baron's cruelty, had his lover slaughtered by his own father, but Lucien had learned to keep his cool. Right, Rhys had asked Cassian to do this. He should think like Rhys, like Mor, push aside the rage. Cassian, bro, you should think like Lucien, who you just said can keep his cool, not like Rhys or Mor. Lucien has a handle over his anger and hasn't had any inappropriate outbursts that I can recall, unlike Rhys and Mor. The inner circle couldn't even tell more about the deal they cut with Eris because they were so scared of how she would react. And let's not forget that time that Rhysand broke that one guy's arm because he was mean to Feyre. Those aren't the role models Cassian should be looking up to. Cassian tries to figure out what Rhysand would do in that situation, but admits he isn't capable of playing the mind games that Rhysand plays, which I actually think is a good thing. It's a huge red flag to be so good at and willing to manipulate people. Like, that's not good. This chapter is long and I don't give a shit about it, so I will do my best to quickly summarize. Oh, but first I want to point out that Cassian is super uncomfortable throughout this entire conversation, and he doesn't know what info to reveal and what he should keep to himself. He gives credit to Lucien for being able to be a liaison between so many courts and different groups of people, and being immaculately dressed while doing so. Like, he specifically points out how Lucien has drip, which is just so funny. Anyway, Eris is meeting with the group because some of his soldiers were out on patrol and went missing. We get some exposition that Eris is known for having super badass hunting dogs, which is also like such a weird funny detail to me. The dogs picked up a weird smell where the patrol went missing that smelled like humans, but like weird humans somehow, so something funky is going on. So Eris went to the Band of Exiles to see if they'd know anything about that, for reasons. I don't know how the dogs told him what they smelled and that the smell was weird, but that is what happened, allegedly. Eris thinks that someone is pulling some funny business to start another war, and he even casually says that Rhysand might have been behind it all. I don't think Eris is actually serious about that, but it's definitely something Rhysand is capable of. Cassian is offended by his god king being, dissed on, and he's like, you know what, Eris, maybe you were the one who staged things. And before that can get too heated, Jurian jumps in. Jurian says that the humans clearly don't like the fairies, but that's not good enough reason to believe that they had any involvement with the missing troops. They talk about the possibility that the mortal queens are involved in the abduction, but can't come up with any reason why they would specifically target Eris's soldiers. Eris suggests that they did it to cause them all to fight amongst each other, like accuse each other of doing it, which is exactly what they're currently doing, so that kind of sounds reasonable. Vassa says that's definitely something the queens would do, and specifically calls out Brialyn, I'm gonna say Brialyn, which is the queen who was dunked in the cauldron and became a withered old crone rather than a hot fairy, and she was real mad about that. They talk more about how Brialyn could be involved, but they aren't sure how or why. Vassa says that Brialyn could be getting help from some guy named Lord Cochet, who is the sorcerer who turned Vassa into a firebird. Cassian realizes that Lord Cochet is the Bone Carver's brother. The Bone Carver had previously mentioned having, 3 gods, and it was himself, the Weaver, and a third. That's the third, is Lord Cochet. So that means that Lord Cochet is a death god, which is a super big deal. And so I don't know why they were calling him a sorcerer this whole time. The word sorcerer is throwing me off, but he is a death god, he's a problem. Lord Cochet has been imprisoned at a lake for reasons that aren't explained, and must be looking for a way to free himself from said lake, and he's using Brialyn to achieve that somehow. We're told that Cochet is truly immortal and can't be killed, whatever that means. We saw both the Bone Carver and the Weaver get killed, so I guess Cochet can't be killed. We'll see. That's a lie. Spoiler alert. He can in fact be killed, but forget about that for now. Cassian feels like he has enough info, so he starts to leave, but Eris follows him outside to talk to him privately, and I'm like, I don't think Cassian really learned that much at all, but okay. Eris says that Cassian is a terrible courtier, but he wants in on whatever Cassian is investigating, because apparently Cassian has no poker face and made it very obvious that he was trying to get answers to something. Cassian, of course, is like, yeah, right, but also, why do you want to work with me? Eris drops a huge bomb by saying that his father Baron, the High Lord of the Autumn Court, has already pledged his troops to Brialyn for whatever war she intends to start. Eris didn't share that with Jurian or Vassa because he wanted to see what information they already had, which is basically no information, and I don't know what he expected them to know. I guess Lucien already knows about this, or he just found out, because he would definitely be able to hear Eris and Cassian's conversation with his advanced Fae hearing, unless he's, plugging his ears? How does Lucien not know? He has to know now. Eris says that a month ago his father met with Brialyn, and the specific soldiers that accompanied him on that mission are now the ones who not so coincidentally went missing. They were acting weird when they got back from that mission, and then they vanished. It doesn't make sense that Brialyn would target the Autumn Court if they were allies, which is why Eris wants to get to the bottom of everything. Eris doesn't agree with starting another war, and he needs to figure out what Brialyn's plans are so that he can stop her. Cassian is like, cool story, bro, but why don't we just make it easy and kill your dad? Which is so stupid and short-sighted and would actually cause another war in Prithian, like different from the war they're trying to prevent. It would be super sketchy for the Night Court to assassinate another High Lord to put Eris in power, and it would reveal their alliance, which would not be good. Cassian stupidly asks Eris why he should help him, as if the obvious answer isn't that they're trying to avoid a war. Like, duh, Cassian. Eris says he already has an alliance with the Night Court, and he doesn't want to get other people involved because it could make things worse. They somehow know that Briolin specifically hates Nesta and could be targeting her, so another court solution to this problem might simply be to give Nesta to Briolin so she backs off and doesn't start a war. The Night Court obviously would not want to give up Nesta, so it's in their best interest to help Eris with this. Cassian is stupid yet again, as he says he could just kill Eris right now and not worry about any of that, as if that would actually solve anything? Like, Eris is not the one putting these actions into motion, like his father is doing it, so killing Eris would not stop the war at all. I know Cassian doesn't trust Eris, and Eris could be lying about all of this, but assuming he's being honest, he's an incredibly important source of insider information relating to all this stuff, so killing him would only make things worse, and it would do nothing to stop Briolin. Cassian is such an idiot! Eris straight up tells Cassian all of this, so Cassian hesitantly agrees to an alliance. An alliance within an alliance, really, since Eris already has an alliance within the Night Court. Take a shot every time I say alliance. The chapter ends there, and I thought that summary would be shorter, but I was trying not to cut too much context out so you would have some semblance of what the fuck is happening, even though none of this matters, truly.
It's not that serious. Trust me, I know that. But anyway.
The next chapter goes back to Nesta as she angrily tries to descend the 10,000 steps to Valaris in search of wine. 10,000 steps between her and the city, and then a half-mile walk at least from the bottom of the mountain to the nearest tavern, and awaiting blessed oblivion. 10,000 steps. She was no longer human. This high fae body could do it. She could do it. She couldn't do it. The scene break, followed by the blunt "she couldn't do it," had me straight up cackling. I'm not sure if it was supposed to be funny, but it definitely was funny. We get a kind of long scene about how Nesta tried and failed to climb the staircase, and she pushes herself physically in a way that we've never really seen from her before. She's motivated by spite, which isn't the healthiest, but it's better than brooding, so good for her, Nesta. Go, go, get your wine, girl!
Yes! Come on!
Unfortunately, Nesta is quickly humbled and realizes she has no chance of making it down to get her wine, so she gives up and returns to the House of Wind, and by that point she literally has to crawl up the last few stairs from exhaustion. She opens the door and finds none other than Cassian standing there waiting for her, which would be my 13th reason. Oh my god, he is the last person I would want to see after that ordeal. Actually, scratch that. Rhysand would be the last person. We cut to Cassian's perspective, and we get some exposition about how he told Rhysand and the gang everything that went down with Eris. Cassian's new order is to keep an eye on Eris because they still aren't sure how honest he's being and, like, what's going on with him and that whole mess. After that meeting, Cassian went back to the House of Wind, saw that the door to the staircase was open, and stood there and waited for Nesta to come back up, and I don't know how long he was waiting, but I hate Cassian. He must have been waiting for a while because he thinks about how worth it is to get to see Nesta all sweaty and fucked up, and like, oh my god, Cassian, I fucking hate you. I know Cassian is mad at Nesta right now, but this still feels kind of wrong to me to like delight in watching someone suffer just because you're mad at them. Like, somebody you're supposed to care about, you would never enjoy seeing them suffer no matter how mad at them you were. Nesta says that whoever designed the staircase is a monster, and Cassian says that he and the other Bat Boys had to climb up and down it as punishment when they were kids. Apparently the trio did some kind of prank that involved public nudity, so I guess they have all been sexual predators for a long time. Oh, sorry. Anyway, they pulled this prank in the middle of summer, and so it's extra hot and terrible. So their punishment was to climb up and down the stairs, and because it's so hot and terrible, Cassian got so dizzy he puked on Azriel, who then puked on Rhysand, who then puked on himself.
Disgusting!
Cassian is grinning at that memory, but I have kind of a weak stomach, so I'm trying not to join the puke party because, oh my god, ew. Cassian asks Nesta how far she made it down the stairs, and she says she only made it to stair 111 because the whole time she was counting to, like, clear her mind. And remember, that is out of 10,000 stairs, so Cassian calls her pathetic. How romantic! He threw her a crooked smile, glad for the distraction. You can't get up, can you? Her arms strained, elbows buckling. Go fly into a boulder. I wish he'd fly into a cauldron laser and vaporize into dust. Cassian helps Nesta up off the floor but continues to dog on her for being so out of shape. He says that if she doesn't want to be weak, then she should actually train, and the scene ends there. The next scene picks up at breakfast because it wouldn't be an ACOTAR book if these bitches weren't constantly eating, and we're in Nesta's perspective. She's really sore from trying to climb the stairs and doesn't want Cassian to pick up on that and make fun of her again. Cassian obviously picks up on it, and the two are about to fight when Azriel shows up. Side note, Nesta thinks to herself that Azriel is beautiful and, quote, the prettiest of the three males, referring to the Bat Boys, which is good for him, I guess? Honestly, I think Nesta and Azriel could have been a good couple together. I prefer the dynamic of, like, opposites attract with having a hothead with a stoic person more than having two hotheads together, because then the hotheads are always fighting each other and it gets very toxic very fast. Too bad for Azriel, though. He will remain girlfriendless for the foreseeable future. Maybe in the next book, bud.
I mean, what's really bizarre is the fact you get no bitches.
The three have some banter as they eat breakfast, and Nesta and Azriel have so much chemistry that she straight up says she wants to train with him instead. We haven't seen much of Azriel, but so far he is the least obnoxious of the three Bat Boys, so, like, I want a book from him, not these two losers. Fuck Cassian, fuck Rhysand. I said what I said. Cassian tells Nesta that Azriel is even stricter with training, and she definitely won't survive a lesson with him if she can't even manage the stairs, so he's like, be careful what you wish for, Nesta. Nesta is always empowered by spite, so she plants her hands on the table and pushes herself up to prove that she can stand, while Azriel quietly watches the argument between Dumb and Dumber go down. Cassian shoveled more eggs into his mouth and set around them. Doesn't count when you use your hands to do most of the work. Nesta schooled her face into utter disdain, even as a hiss rose inside her. I bet that isn't what you've been telling yourself at night. Okay, I'm ready to make it official. I like Nesta. I can't hide it anymore. Yeah, she's mean, but she's mean to people I hate, so I'm on her side now. Team Nesta, let's go. Azriel quietly laughs at the joke, so Cassian doubles down and says that he's not just cranking his hog at night, but also during the morning, bath time, after training, anytime really can be hog cranking time. Nesta is kind of bashful because she wasn't expecting Cassian to go full force hog cranking, and she's a little turned on though, and what the fuck? The thought of a man straight jorking it is not attractive. Oh my god. Nesta, of course, can't admit that she's turned on by this, though, so the scene ends with one last snappy remark as she tells Cassian it sounds like he has a lot of time on his hands. Or dick, apparently. A lot of hands on his dick. A lot of time with his... Oh my god. Can we stop talking about this? Okay, we gotta move on. Sorry, guys. This is about the point in the video where I fully lose my mind, so please deal with my incoherent rambling for the rest of this. Thank you. This chapter is somehow not over, and we get another scene from Cassian as he and Azriel go outside to speak privately. Azriel is like, dude, you're in deep shit, and Cassian's like, yeah, dude, I know. In case you forgot, the fairies emit some kind of pheromone when they get horny, and the other fairies can smell it, which can lead to some awkward situations. Cassian was turned on by telling Nesta about his hog cranking. I'm gonna stop saying that. I'm sorry, hold on. Cassian was turned on by telling Nesta about his hog cranking habits, and even imagined— oh my god, I cannot get through this line. Cassian was turned on by telling Nesta about his self-love practice, and even imagined her jorking it for him, so Azriel was able to smell that. Azriel jokingly asks Cassian if he needs a chaperone to stay at the house, and Cassian jokingly replies back that he thought Az was already their chaperone, even though he's never there. Oh, and Azriel is about to be around even less since he has spy business to take care of. You know, the business that Cassian was somehow put in charge of when Azriel should have been doing it the whole time. Like, what the fuck are we doing? The scene ends there as Cassian wishes Azriel good luck with all his spy business. This chapter still isn't over, and we're still in Cassian's POV as we cut to the Illyrian camp. Somehow he's surprised that Nesta still refuses to train. He tries and fails to get her to leave the rock she's claimed for herself, and if I was him, I'd bust that rock in half to show her who's boss. Instead, he goes and trains by himself, and we get another scene break as this chapter continues to slog on. Like, oh my god, this chapter is randomly so long. Cassian has finished up with his workout, and it's so cold outside that Nesta's lips have turned blue, but she still refuses to move from her rock, even if getting up like she could exercise a little to warm herself up. Honestly, Nesta's level of spite and pettiness is kind of impressive. Cassian tells Nesta he has business at the camp and points to the cabin that Rhysand owns because they own another house. But Cassian is like, oh, you can go wait in the cabin. It seems like Nesta is going to stay on her rock, but common sense wins out over her pettiness, so she agrees to go inside. Cassian reminisces on some good times he had in the cabin with his bros before he realizes Nesta is just standing there staring at the fireplace. The fire crackles and Nesta flinches, and for the first time ever, Cassian notices and acknowledges Nesta's PTSD. Of course, he is not going to remember this moment, so don't get too excited. In a rare moment of consideration, Cassian tells Nesta that there are some shops around the village if she'd rather not, sit in the cabin and watch the fire. He doesn't explicitly say the last part, but it's clear that he understands that something is going on with Nesta. Nesta doesn't say anything though, so he leaves, and then the chapter ends there, finally. As much as I appreciate Cassian noticing that Nesta was suffering, I think it's pretty dumb to let Nesta go around camp by herself when everybody hates her, and they hate women in general, and they hate Cassian. But Cassian isn't exactly known for making smart choices. The next chapter cuts to Nesta entering a shop, and I'm shocked that she didn't just stay in the cabin. I'd rather not deal with the Illyrians if I didn't have to. This is the same shop from the last book when Cassian bought a bunch of winter clothes to give out to the Illyrians who refused to buy them for themselves because the shopkeeper was a woman. Brilliant. I don't know how that shop is still in business nearly a year later, but apparently it is. Nesta tells the shopkeeper Emery that she's looking for warmer clothes for training so she can sit on her rock in style. Okay, I added the last part about being stylish, but she just wants warmer leggings or whatever. Emery asks Nesta how often she trains, and we get this response. I'm not training, Nesta struggled for the right words. Honestly, what she was doing was being a wretched asshole. I'm watching, she said a shade pathetically. Nesta is typically a wretched asshole, but in this case I'd say she's justified for not wanting to train, especially in the Illyrian camp. Nesta has no interest in being a warrior and really did not have a good time in the war at all. That's where a lot of her trauma is from. And she seems to have had a better time working in the library. So if anyone truly cared about Nesta's healing, they'd let her focus on things that she actually enjoyed, instead of pushing her to train and do all these things she clearly does not want to do. Emery straight up asks if Nesta was brought there against her will, but Nesta deflects and vaguely says that it's part of her night court duties. Emery's wings are visibly scarred, and Nesta stares at them to the point that Emery explains the whole wing clipping thing to her. So much for Rhysand outlawing that practice, it clearly still happens. We get further exposition that clipped wings can't be healed even through magic because it's too complicated. Except at the end of ACOSF, Cassian got blasted by the cauldron and his wings were reduced to bloody stumps and he's just fine now. Maybe he grew them back? Actually, I don't care. Emery arranges to make Nesta some fleece-lined leathers, but once Nesta realizes she has no money and would have to ask Rhysand to pay for her bill, she says never mind. Emery questions that, and Nesta admits that she's been financially cut off, but she doesn't know Emery well enough to give her the whole story. Emery backs off with her questioning and says she'll start work on getting a price quote for the clothes anyway, and that Nesta deserves to be warm no matter what anyone thinks, even the High Lord. Damn, I know I'm gonna like Emery. I like anybody who doesn't lick Rhysand's boots. I've been referring to Emery by name this whole time, but they only just now introduced themselves to each other. Emery already knows who Nesta is and knows that she's the one who killed the King of Hybern, except I think it was technically Elaine who killed him, but whatever. Emery clearly approves of what Nesta did and isn't afraid of her like so many other people are, and that acceptance makes Nesta so uncomfortable that she quickly leaves the shop. The next scene cuts directly to the library as Nesta gets her tasks for the day from Clotho. We get some exposition that Cassian was extra tense after whatever he went off to deal with, and that Moore was equally tense when she showed up to teleport them back to the house. Nesta clearly knows that shit is going on behind the scenes that she's not being told about, and while the political stuff isn't really any of her business, I'd be uncomfortable to be so excluded from all of that, especially with how much Nesta did for their side during the war. Like, if she's truly attributed to killing the King of Hybern, then maybe she should know about some of the stuff going on with the country. That's just my opinion. We're told that after they all arrive back at the house, Cassian flew off with Moore in his arms, and it made Nesta feel a little jealous to see that, even though she knows that's not fair considering she keeps pushing Cassian away. The Magic House tried to give her lunch, and she refused to eat it and went straight down to the library to get to work. Clotho tells Nesta to shelve books on one of the lower floors, and Nesta is hesitant to go near the spooky pit where Bryaxis once lived. I always thought it was goofy to house a horrifying monster in a place that's meant to be a sanctuary for trauma survivors. But don't worry, because Clotho clarifies that Bryaxis took pity on them because they'd already experienced their worst nightmares. Yikes, that got dark fast. Nesta awkwardly agrees to her assignment and gets to work. After an hour, she takes a break, and the lunch she previously refused appears on a table nearby. She insists she's not hungry, and the house responds by giving her a spoon and a napkin. The sentient house is something I actually really liked in this book, and I think it's fun and charming, and I just want more of that. One of the other priestesses walks by and asks Nesta who she's talking to, and Nesta dodges the question because of course she's not going to admit to talking to a house. We get a long description about how pretty the priestess is, but Nesta picks up that she has some kind of secret, which is kind of obvious given the context of who works in the library. Nesta then says she's taking a break. "You've only been working for an hour. I didn't realize anyone was timing me." Nesta allowed every bit of unpleasantness to show in her face. She'd already conversed with one stranger today, fulfilling her quota of basic decency. Being kind to a second one was beyond her. Honestly, that's such a mood. I really try to be nice to everyone even when my social battery is drained, but goddamn that's hard sometimes. You know what, Nesta? I'll give you that. The priestess gives Nesta some more books to shelve, which causes a little argument between them because Nesta says she only answers to Clotho. The priestess says Nesta is there to work for everyone and introduces herself as Gwyneth Berdara, or Gwyn for short. Nesta thinks it's weird that she used her last name because most Fae don't announce their last name, and she specifically thinks that Rhysand doesn't use a last name. There are fan theories about what Rhysand's last name is, but I haven't looked into them because I think it's related to Crescent City, which I have not read, and maybe I won't read, maybe I will read it, I'm not really sure yet. Anyway, the two talk some more, and Nesta is a little nicer when she remembers that the priestesses have all been through their own traumas, that's why they work at this library, because they've been through traumatic events. Gwyn marked the change. "I don't need your pity." The words were sharp, as clear as her teal eyes. It wasn't pity. "I've been here for nearly 2 years, but I haven't become so disconnected from others that I can't tell when someone remembers why I am here and alters their behavior." Gwyn's mouth flattened to a line. "I don't need to be coddled, only spoken to like a person." "I doubt you'll enjoy the way I speak to most people," Nesta said. Gwyn snorted. "Try me."
Oh, try me, bitch.
If it's not obvious already, this chapter was to set up Emery and Gwyn as Nesta's future besties, but it'll be a while yet before they all group up. Anyway, I'm with Gwyn on this one because I can't stand when people talk to me in a soft, pitying voice. I know it comes from a genuine place, but it's an instant rage trigger for me, and for Nesta too, given how she's acted throughout this series. Nesta takes Gwyn up on her challenge and bluntly tells her to get out of her sight. Gwyn is amused by this and grins at Nesta before promptly fucking off. Nesta is left kind of dumbfounded that she's had not one but 2 positive interactions with strangers, which is a major progress for her. Nesta finishes up her work and reports back to Clotho. She complains about Gwyn bossing her around, and Clotho explains that Gwyn works for Meryl, who is the second in command of the library and an accomplished scholar. So Gwyn is super busy and needed help, and she's not just lazy. It's not like she was taking advantage of Nesta. She did genuinely need help. Clotho surprisingly says that if Nesta has a problem with that, then she should bring it up with Gwyn, and given how confrontational Nesta is, I would not have encouraged that. Nesta says she's already, brought it up with Gwyn, and that Gwyn is a real piece of work. Clotho points out that people say the same thing about Nesta, so she should give Gwyn the benefit of the doubt. Nesta immediately feels guilty about that, which is fairly common for her after she realizes she's being unnecessarily rude, but this time it feels like she's actually going to learn from that feeling of shame, which is nice. Nesta goes back to the house and finally eats the soup that the house has been trying to feed her all day. The house lights a fire for her in the hearth, but quickly puts it out at Nesta's request. In ACOSF, we were told that Rhysand's mountaintop palace was heated by magic and not fireplaces, so I'm not really sure why they aren't doing that here. I think they eventually start heating the house that way later on instead of having fires, but I'm really confused because the magic systems and other world-building details aren't the most consistent throughout this series. Anyway, the chapter ends there. My Kindle says we are about 16% of the way through this book, which is wild given how much I've been yapping already. This book is so freaking long and takes an extremely long time to set everything up, only to rush the ending, which is classic ACOTAR, but we'll get there when we get there. Nesta is still ravenously eating as the next chapter opens and devours a slice of cake that the house offered her. Cassian walks in and says that's not part of the approved training diet, and fuck off, Cassian, for real. Nesta needs all the calories she can get considering how undernourished she's been for so long. Cassian tells her to eat the cake anyway, but knowing how spiteful Nesta is, he should have just kept his mouth shut. Cassian, go away.
What is Minnesota?
Go.
You don't care about.
Go.
I was asking about Minnesota though.
Go away.
Dude, what's wrong?
Cassian dogs on Nesta for talking to the house, and we get a little exposition that the house seems to especially like Nesta and acts beyond just being enchanted to serve its guests, like it seems to especially cater to Nesta. Put a pin in that for now, it will be explained later. Cassian takes Nesta's cake and starts eating it and says that if she wants it back, she can fight him for it, which, oh my god, Cassian, you are the fucking worst. I hate Cassian so much. Cassian tells Nesta she'd already know what to do if she'd actually train with him, and that her threats would be a lot more impressive if she could actually back them up physically. I feel like all of this taunting is at odds with how everyone is clearly scared of Nesta, and training her only makes her more dangerous, but whatever. I guess they're counting on the training breaking Nesta's spirit, so they can control her more effectively, and there is solid evidence for this theory later on. Anyway, Cassian realizes he's about to get stabbed with a fork, so he gives Nesta her cake back and leaves. Bye, Cassian. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Nesta spends the rest of her night reading smut in the library, like her personal library in the house, not the priestess library, and then she finally goes to bed. The house once again lights a fire before Nesta says to put it out. The house then uses the warming spell I just mentioned before, and it's weird to me that it wasn't just doing that the whole time. I guess the fairies prefer the aesthetic of a crackling fireplace? Whatever, let's just move on or we will never finish this godforsaken book. Nesta goes to bed but wakes up in a panic in the middle of the night because she's been having nightmares about the cauldron. She doesn't know how to deal with the feeling now that her only coping mechanisms, booze and drunken hookups, have been taken away from her, so she goes straight to the stairs to try and get to Valaris to acquire those things. She's plagued by thoughts of the cauldron and loses her balance and starts tumbling down the stairs, which is incredibly dangerous. Nesta grabs at the wall to catch herself, and we're told that her nails generate sparks as they slide across the stone, which is important. Nesta manages to catch herself and realizes that her fingers are straight up embedded in the wall and the rock is glowing, so it's clear that she still has some kind of power laying dormant inside her. That snaps Nesta out of her panic, and she quickly returns to the house instead of trying to get to Valaris. The next scene opens with Cassian asking Nesta who won the fight because she's all busted up from falling. Typically I'm a fan of dark humor, but Cassian doesn't have that kind of relationship with Nesta, at least not yet. And it should be concerning to see her so injured when she should have been safe inside the house. Like, what? They're already at the Illyrian camp, and we're told that neither Cassian nor Moore asked Nesta about her injuries at breakfast, which is so fucked. We're told that the fall likely would have killed a human, and Nesta seems a little more grateful for her fey body for once. She's making progress, but I don't really see anyone around her doing the same, which is incredibly irritating to witness. Nesta still refuses to train, so she's sitting on her rock during this conversation. She blows off Cassian's question and is like, what fight? And Cassian is like, the one with the wall, and goes on to say that he knew she fell down the stairs in her rush to go get booze. Nesta is taken aback that not only was Cassian watching her, but also that he didn't step in when she was clearly in trouble, which is something that would also piss me off and make it really hard to trust Cassian. Cassian shrugs it off and is like, well, you stopped falling. Someone would have come and helped you eventually before you fell all the way to the bottom. Bitch, excuse me? The fall was bad enough that Nesta is still super messed up despite her advanced healing. She wouldn't have survived a fall to the bottom of the stairs. It's insane to me that nobody stepped in to help her, and again, this would severely damage my trust in Cassian or anyone who knew that I was in danger. I also don't really know how they're watching her exactly, but I guess it's magic or whatever. Cassian tells Nesta that she should train, and she responds that she should push him down the stairs. Wow, what a healthy relationship. This banter is funny and not at all concerning. Cassian says that if Nesta is going to be all bruised up, it might as well be from training, but she still refuses to do that. She notices that the other Illyrians are giving rude looks to Cassian, and acknowledges that at one point she would have stood up for him, but that is not that point anymore, so she stays put on her rock. Maybe if Cassian stood up for Nesta more, she would have kept that same energy for him, but Cassian doesn't stand up for Nesta nearly enough. Cassian is starting to get desperate, so he says please, which is something he has never said to Nesta before. She recognizes that he's trying to meet her halfway, but she can't make herself get off the rock to meet him there. I'd say he isn't actually meeting her halfway at all, considering she never wanted to train and asking her nicely doesn't change that, but whatever. Nesta stares at Cassian and kind of realizes how handsome he is, and remembers how captivating he was when they first met. He was the first manly man she ever saw compared to the puny humans around her, and she instantly wanted to jump his bones because she knew he could take a rough ride. Ew, why did I say that?
Disgusting!
Despite all of Cassian's hotness, Nesta still isn't compelled to get off her rock, and she feels ashamed by how disappointed Cassian is in her. Again, I think this is all pretty manipulative considering Nesta made her stance on training clear, but she did technically agree to the plan to avoid being dumped in the human realm, so I guess she's obligated to train. The chapter ends there, and the next chapter picks up with Nesta back at the House of Wind. She's trying to get into the library, but the house won't let her in, and to be clear, that's the private library, not the library with the priestesses that she works in. We get some exposition that Nesta's shift at the library was more work than usual because a bunch of the other priestesses started giving her more books to put on the shelves. How much work is being done in this library that there are tons of people whose primary job seems to be shelving books? Is that all they do? What else do they do at the library? You know what? I don't care, actually. Nesta skipped lunch and now appears to be trying to skip dinner, which is why the house won't let her into the private library so she can read more smut. It kinda seems like the house is the only one that actually cares about Nesta, which is sad. Left with no other choices, Nesta goes to the dining room where Cassian and Azriel are having their dinner. They ignore her as she sits down and eats the plate of food that appears in front of her. Still ignoring Nesta, Cassian and Azriel continue their conversation, which is about the spy business with Vasa in the human realm. Curiosity bit deep, but Nesta said nothing. Vasa, she hadn't seen the enchanted human queen since the war had ended. Since the young woman had tried to speak to her about how wonderful Nesta's father had been, how he had been a true father to her, helped her and won her this temporary freedom. And on until Nesta's bones were screaming to get away, her blood boiling to think that her father had found his courage for someone other than her and her sisters, that he'd been the father she had needed, but for someone else. He had let their mother die in his refusal to send his merchant fleet hunting for a cure for her, had fallen into poverty and let them starve, but had decided to fight for this stranger? This nobody queen peddling a sad tale of betrayal and loss? If you don't remember, back in ACOSF, Lucian was sent to the human realm to find Vasa and see if she could help them in the war. Unbeknownst to him, Vasa had already encountered Papa Archeron and worked with him to get the ships together to go help in the war. I'm a little fuzzy on the finer details of what went on with that, but it doesn't really matter. The point is that Papa Archeron didn't step up for his family until it was way too late, and I'd be bitter about that too. Vasa talking about how great he is would irritate the fuck out of me, but I wouldn't exactly call a queen a nobody, Nesta, let's be real on that point. Except Vasa is kind of a nobody given how underutilized she is in this series, so I take that back, Nesta, you do have a point. Anyway, they talk some more before Azriel notices how fucked up Nesta is and asks what happened to her. Cassian jumps in to say she fell down the stairs, and Azriel pointedly asked if someone pushed her, and he clearly means Cassian. It's insane to me that Azriel thinks it's feasible that Cassian would push Nesta down the stairs, and I wouldn't be friends with someone that I believed was capable of doing that. Cassian calls Azriel an asshole for the suggestion, and it comes off like Azriel was just joking, but I think he was serious, and that is fucked. They talk some more, and Azriel asks Nesta why she isn't training, and she simply answers that she doesn't want to. Azriel asks why not, and Cassian angrily tells him not to bother asking. I mean, maybe they should have a conversation about this, like Azriel is being reasonable and trying to talk to Nesta. Nesta answers the question anyway, and reiterates that she's not training in, quote, that miserable village, which is exactly what she said before. She's clearly not comfortable at the Illyrian camp, and they don't want her there either, so I don't blame her for not wanting to go. Cassian, however, is pissed. Cassian glared right back. You've been given an order. You know the consequences. If you don't get off that fucking rock by the end of this week, what happens next is out of my hands. So you'll tattle to your precious High Lord, she crooned. Big tough warrior needs oh so powerful Rhysand to fight his battles? Don't you fucking talk about Rhys with that tone, Cassian snarled. Rhys is an asshole, Nesta snapped. He is an arrogant, preening asshole. Azriel sat back in his seat, eyes simmering with anger, but said nothing. Bro, nobody else seems to have any consequences for not following Rhysand's orders, so why are they going so hard on Nesta? None of the inner circle listens to Rhysand, as we've seen in previous books, so of course Nesta wouldn't take him seriously. Also, Nesta is right that Rhysand is a preening asshole, and he even seems to take pride in being an asshole, so I don't really know why Cassian and Azriel are so angry. They're acting like she said something substantially worse than she actually did. Surely they've also both called Rhysand an asshole at some point in this series. I hate him, she seethed. Good, he hates you too, Cassian shot back. Everyone fucking hates you. Is that what you wanted? Because congratulations, it's happened.
What did you say?
Oh my god, Cassian, you can't just tell someone that everyone hates them even though it's low-key true. This goes so far beyond a tough love approach that it's straight up cruelty. Rhysand definitely hates Nesta, but Feyre doesn't, and Elaine doesn't, so Cassian should just speak for himself rather than saying everyone hates her. Hell, even Cassian doesn't hate Nesta. He's just mad that she keeps embarrassing him by not training. That's valid to feel that way, but they need to have a real conversation about that instead of resorting to threats and nastiness. I know Nesta is hard to deal with, but Cassian is over 500 years old and should be able to handle himself and his emotions way better than he does. Nesta handles being told that everyone hates her better than expected and sarcastically says, "Oh, so now's the part where you say you're the only one who doesn't hate me, so I feel grateful enough to train with you, like I get what's going on." Except Cassian flips the script on her and he's like, "Actually no, I'm done with you, like you suck." Nesta and even Azriel are taken aback by that. Nesta goes straight into attack mode and throws out a barb of her own by saying, "You know what, Cassian, I hope you're done panting over me and I hope you get the hint that I'm not interested." Except she's definitely interested and just said that to hurt Cassian's feelings. These two are toxic as fuck together and they aren't even in a relationship yet. Imagine someone telling you that everyone hates you and you still decide to date them. That is wild! Cassian is like, "Fine then, keep destroying yourself. The training was supposed to help you, not be a punishment. How can't you see that?" Except the training is definitely a punishment, and I've explained that at length already. Nesta doubles down and insists she won't train in that miserable village, so Cassian storms out. Nesta is so angry she bares her teeth at Azriel like a dog, which is something the fairies do semi-frequently, and I just haven't mentioned it because I have 1,000 other things to complain about. I think it's supposed to make the Fae look more animalistic, but I think it's just silly. Azriel seems sorry for Nesta, which embarrasses her, so she also leaves. She goes down to the library to shelve more books, which is a better coping mechanism than drinking, but I'm wondering how the house is connected to the library and how Nesta got down there by herself. Actually, I don't care. The next scene is from Cassian's perspective as he stands outside the house and broods about how he's never failed at anything like this and he was so stupid to feel hopeful that Nesta would listen and blah 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 blah, whatever, Cassian. For context, he's overlooking a private training ring at the House of Wind, which is an obvious solution to the problem of Nesta not wanting to train at the Illyrian village, but somehow that doesn't occur to him. Feyre shows up to talk to Cassian and says that Rhysand teleported her there because Cassian was, quote, thinking loudly. There goes Rhysand being creepy again by monitoring his friend's thoughts. Throughout this series, he frequently doesn't use his telepathy in moments that he really should, because it would, quote, violate boundaries, but he keeps tabs on the inner circle that he's supposed to trust? What? Make it make sense. Sometimes Rhysand is okay with mind reading and sometimes he's not, and it's so inconsistent and weird. We're reminded that Feyre still has that super powerful shield around her, and Cassian even asks about it. Feyre says that Rhysand is still learning about shield magic and wants to leave it up while they deal with all the dangers with the queens and Koschei and the war and all that nonsense. It's literal plot armor, which is so hilarious to me that they didn't learn about this shield stuff before the war where it would have been actually helpful. This shield thing is like a MacGuffin for a later reveal, but we will get there when we get there. They talk about the political stuff a little bit, and Cassian gives Feyre a friendly nudge on the shoulder, which he shouldn't be able to do given that she has that shield up, but he does, which feels like a plot hole, or not a plot hole per se, but it's not correct. Feyre asks how things are going with Nesta, and Cassian admits that it's bad, but at least Nesta is doing her duties at the library, and that she's even at the library right now. Feyre gave a of contemplation, gazing at the city. His high lady looked so young. He always forgot how young she truly was, considering what she'd already faced and achieved in her life. At 21, he'd still been drinking and brawling and fucking, unconcerned with anything and anybody except his ambition to be the most skilled of Illyrian warriors since Analius himself. At 21, Feyre had saved their world, mated, and found true happiness. Okay, and Nesta is only like 25, so maybe cut her some slack. I hate how immature these old-ass fairies are while expecting maturity from humans who are a fraction of their age. It also adds a gross dynamic to the romance, but I'm sure I have complained about that before. Also, enough with the ass-kissing. Feyre didn't save the world. At best, she saved Prythian from Amarantha. That's not the entire world. The war business against Hybern was a group effort, and nothing is even really fixed after that, considering they're anticipating another war, so, like, did Feyre really save anything? I mean, she did save Prythian from Amarantha, but the war, that didn't save anything. That didn't fix anything. Feyre asks if Nesta has said why she won't train, and Cassian quickly answers that it's because she hates him, even though Nesta never said that, and has repeatedly said she won't train in, quote, that miserable village. Nesta has made her problem very clear, and Cassian is literally looking at a private training area while this conversation goes down. The solution is obvious. Feyre says that Nesta doesn't hate Cassian, and Cassian says that Nesta doesn't hate Feyre either, which, like, I don't know how he knows that, but, I mean, it's obvious that Nesta doesn't actually hate them. Feyre isn't sure about that, though, given how explosive her last interaction was with Nesta, and Nesta was like, I never want to talk to you again. Cassian asks why they can't just get along, because he's clearly never had a sister, and Feyre says that it's always been that way. My sisters and I used to fight all the time, but that cleared up as we got older and we weren't all stuck in a tiny house together. By 25, I definitely was not arguing like this with my sisters, but I also wasn't turned into a hot fairy or went through a war. So the Archeron sisters get a slight pass, even though they still have a ton of work to do on their relationship. We get some exposition from Feyre that their mother only paid attention to Nesta growing up. She straight up ignored Feyre and treated Elaine like she was just a doll to dress up. Nesta was the clear favorite, and their mother made sure that they all knew it, which started the rift between Nesta and her sisters, especially Feyre, and that only got worse as they fell into poverty. Cassian is saddened by this and thinks about how both sisters need each other and they should just get along and blah blah blah. Nesta definitely needs Feyre or else she would have starved to death, and she needs her financial support now. But I fail to see how Feyre needs Nesta outside of her being potentially useful as a weapon for the Night Court. They talk about what to do with Nesta since she refuses to train, and Cassian says that maybe the library will straighten her out, which is what I've been saying this whole time. She seems to like that work way more. Feyre says that won't work because Nesta will just hide down there and the library work was meant to balance training, whatever that even means. Except Nesta isn't just hiding in the library like how she sits on her rock during training. Nesta is actually doing the work that's assigned to her, and she's even starting to make friends, or at least starting to realize that not everyone is out to get her. That's plenty of progress for only a week of work, and I think their expectations of her are ridiculous. Let's not forget that Nesta is also an alcoholic and has been forced to quit drinking cold turkey. She's not going to be perfectly functional and well-adjusted and do everything she's ordered to do after her only coping mechanisms have been taken away. It's going to take time for her to find healthier coping mechanisms and really lean into that. They're lucky that Nesta isn't sick as a dog in alcohol withdrawals right now, like they're really expected too much out of her this soon. Cassian finally realizes that he's looking at a private training ring and that they should try that with Nesta because she clearly hates the Illyrian village and has said it like 10 fucking times. He goes to give Feyre a kiss on the cheek because I guess he's just so relieved or whatever, but because of that shield around her, he can't. Except earlier in this scene, I pointed out that he gave her a shoulder bump and it didn't say that the shield blocked it, so like, make it make sense. Cassian isn't done with the Feyre ass-kissing, so he thinks about how sickly Feyre was when he first met her and how far she's come since then, which gives him renewed confidence to keep trying with Nesta. The next chapter cuts straight to Nesta's next training session, this time at the House of Wind instead of the Illyrian camp. Nesta is still thinking about what Cassian said about everyone hating her, but Cassian is acting normal like nothing happened. Instead of owning up and saying he or Rhysand, whoever made the plan for Nesta to train in the Illyrian camp, was a mistake, Cassian says that there's nobody available to teleport them to the Illyrian camp, so they need to train privately at the house instead. I don't even know if that's true or if he's just trying to save face, but he should have been honest, like, hey, we fucked up, the village was a bad idea, let's just train here. I feel like that would, come a long way in building trust with Nesta, but he doesn't do that. We then have a scene break to switch to Cassian's perspective as he thinks about how obvious it is that Nesta was never going to train in the presence of the Illyrians and that they always should have trained privately here at the house. Nesta might be willing to face down the King of Hybern himself, but she was proud as all hell. Appearing foolish, making herself vulnerable, she'd rather die. Would rather sit on a freezing rock in the icy wind for hours than look like a fool in front of anyone, especially arrogant warriors predisposed to mock any female who attempted to fight like them. It didn't matter to him where she trained, so long as she began the training. Putting Nesta's personality aside, how did anyone ever think that training a woman in an Illyrian camp was a good idea? The Illyrian women are technically supposed to be allowed to train, but Rhysand and Cassian are well aware that they aren't being given equal opportunities. How can they expect Nesta to heal through training in such an oppressive environment? Why would they entirely devote Cassian to training one woman, and mind you, not an Illyrian woman, instead of stationing him at camp to ensure that the Illyrian women are actually allowed to train? Logistically, it also never made sense to train at the Illyrian village. Why waste resources having someone teleport Cassian and Nesta back and forth when there's already a training ring at the House of Wind? Like, what? The only explanation here is that Nesta was being punished by being forced to train in the Illyrian camp, and that should tell you all you need to know about how Rhysand views the Illyrians. Cassian is still afraid that Nesta will refuse to train in the private ring at the house, and he isn't sure what he's going to do if Nesta is still going to refuse to train. He specifically moved all of the chairs in the area somewhere else so Nesta wouldn't have somewhere to plant her, quote, beautiful ass. Ew, Cassian, why are you thinking about her ass right now? Even though Cassian is terrified of Nesta and hasn't apologized for saying everyone hates her, he still can't help but think about how sexy she is. Which is gross! Cassian! Oh my god, I hate you so much. Nesta hesitates to go to the training ring, so Cassian says that he'll offer her a bargain. We're reminded that bargains are supposed to be a big deal to fairies, and they hold a lot of weight and significance and all that jazz, but we've never really seen that to be true throughout the series. The fairy bargains are used as convenient plot devices and nothing more. Cassian's proposed bargain is pretty simple. If Nesta trains for 1 hour, then he will owe her a favor. Any favor. He's trying to be casual about his offer, but he's so scared of Nesta not following orders that he's literally trembling, like in fear of what he's gonna do if she continues to say no. Moments like this are why I call Cassian pathetic. I'm not saying that men can't show vulnerability and weakness, but the way Cassian expresses it is often very bizarre to me. If he'd just sit down and have an honest heart-to-heart conversation with Nesta, instead of trying to threaten or coerce her into training, I'd have a lot more respect for Cassian. Nesta says she doesn't need any favors from Cassian, and Cassian is like, fine then, name your price. As if Nesta literally just said she doesn't need any favors. Like, come on, Cassian. Cassian says that the only limit to the favor she can ask for is that she can't order him to die, which, like, that's crazy. Nesta asks if he really believes that she would do something like that, and Cassian says no without any hesitation. And neither Nesta nor I believe him, because why would you clarify that you can't wish for something like that if you didn't think she would actually do it? Like, come on, Cassian. Also, earlier in this book, he was genuinely worried that Nesta might attack or even kill Feyre during that confrontation. And if he thinks Nesta would be so violent to her own sister, then why would he think that she would spare him? Like, really? This would be a great moment for Cassian to apologize to Nesta for saying everyone hates her, but of course he doesn't. Nesta finally agrees to the bargain, but she doesn't specify what favor she's going to ask for, just at any time she can cash in a favor. And Cassian even thinks about how dangerous that is as he reaches out to shake Nesta's hand to make their bargain official. Does Cassian trust Nesta or not? I understand that emotions are complicated and people change their minds all the time, but I feel like Cassian never fully accepts or trusts Nesta even by the end of the novel, even though the narrative tries to convince us that he does. He does not. I'm getting ahead of myself though, we will get there. Cassian and Nesta make their bargain official, and to be clear, this isn't just a handshake agreement. This is a magically binding contract, and they both get sick-ass tattoos on their back as a result. I think Feyre also got a back tattoo at some point with one of her bargains, so SJM must think that's just a super badass place for a tattoo. No hate to back tattoos. I have a back tattoo. I just think it's funny that, that's her default. Tattoo on the back. Yep, sick. Cassian whips off his shirt to look at his new tattoo, and he catches Nesta giving him googly eyes as she ogles him. He shows some restraint for once and doesn't give some dumbass remark that he knows will piss Nesta off. Mostly because he enjoys how Nesta is looking at him and not because he actually cares about whether or not he upsets her. He keeps his mouth shut and even flexes a little for Nesta to really enjoy the sight, and oh my god, Cassian, I fucking hate you. A deal's a deal, so Nesta agrees to train and heads into the ring with a still shirtless Cassian. The scene cuts there to switch to Nesta's perspective, and she's still thinking about how he said everyone hates her. Throughout this book, intense moments, she will come back to thinking about what Cassian said to her, which is fucked up. That's such a messed up thing to say to someone, and Cassian really should have apologized immediately. He does kind of try to apologize in this chapter, but it's half-assed, and he never actually uses the words, I'm sorry, so it's not, to me, a clear apology, but we'll get to it, and you can judge. Nesta is just as horny as Cassian, and spends several paragraphs describing his muscles and scars, and generally how hot he is. I'm less critical about Nesta thinking about Cassian this way, because he just openly thought about how much he wanted her to stare at him. In contrast, when we're in Nesta's perspective, she thinks about how uncomfortable and exposed she is while wearing pants or other tight revealing outfits. So that's why I think it's so gross that Cassian thinks about her body so sexually, especially during serious moments. We see that Nesta has expressed being uncomfortable being stared at, while Cassian is the exact opposite. They start their training session, and Nesta asks about swords, but Cassian is like, girl, you are not ready to start with swords. And there's a joke there, you can make one. But anyway, they need to start with the basics. Nesta specifically needs to start by training her toes to properly grip the ground or some weird shit. Like, get them grippers out, girl, you're not standing right. Nesta is a little offended and somehow knows that Cassian didn't make Feyre start off so simply with getting her grippers out during training, like Feyre obviously skipped that part. And Cassian reminds Nesta that not only did Feyre actively want to train, but she already had a base level of athleticism from hunting, so like she got to skip a bunch of that. Okay, wait a minute. I just realized something as I'm recording this that was not originally in the script. We learn later on that Nesta is a very accomplished dancer to the point that she's like the best dancer that has ever danced. She would be winning awards. She gets marriage proposals from how good her dancing is. Like, she is like dancing like there's no tomorrow. I would imagine that dancing requires some, like, adept footwork. Like, she would know how to work her toes and know how to have a good posture and stance, like, from dancing. Would she not? I'm not a dancer, so I don't fully know what that involves, but I would imagine you would have to have good footwork to be a dancer. Like, duh. I know Nesta hasn't regularly danced for a while, but when she does dance later on, she's just as good as she's always been. So, like, right now, she should have some level of stamina and endurance and, like, being an athlete. Anyway, Nesta says that Feyre taught her how to use a bow once, which is something we've never heard before now, and it feels like revisionist history considering how unhelpful and frankly useless Nesta was in the first book. They jump into gripper training or toe training or whatever they're doing, and it's basically just Pilates. Nesta is actually listening to Cassian despite how physically difficult the exercises are for her, and she asks genuine questions throughout. Cassian teaches Nesta about how important breathing is, which sounds like a stupid thing to say, but it is actually important to strategically time your breathing when exercising. And again, I would think this is something Nesta would understand as a dancer, but apparently she does not. They train for a while, and by the time they're done, Nesta seems to have a newfound appreciation for how hard Cassian must have worked to get so buff and good at fighting. I, however, have no appreciation for Cassian. I hate him. They do a cooldown at the end of the workout, and Nesta randomly asks Cassian if he likes flying, and he says that he does, because of course he does. Nesta asks about Emery, that Illyrian shopkeeper from before, and why her wings were clipped. Cassian gives some exposition we are already painfully aware of about how the Illyrians don't treat women well. He even mentions that Rhysand tried to ban wing clipping, but gives the excuse that they couldn't enforce that while Amarantha was around. That was like 4 whole books ago, though, so I'd love to hear Cassian's excuse now for why they still aren't enforcing the rules in Illyria. Like, I understand they had to go through that war and stuff, but they will take any excuse not to actually enforce the rules that they set up. The conversation is uncomfortable, so they stop talking about it and get back to doing their cooldown. Cassian looks at Nesta laying on the ground looking all sweaty and limp and can't help but to think of her looking like that in his bed. Cassian, gross! Someone needs to get a spray bottle and blast Cassian with it every time he starts gooning. On a less sexual note, Cassian thinks that Nesta does look more lively after training and has some color back in her face, which is good. I know that exercise is a great way to work off stress and get some good endorphins and all that, but what Nesta really needs is some goddamn therapy. Exercise is good for you, but you can't fully outrun your trauma on a treadmill at the gym, and I don't like how this book pushes the message that you can heal through exercise alone instead of using it as a supplement to actual therapy. Training is over, and Nesta is about to go inside to freshen up before going to the library for her shift when Cassian stops her. He says that he didn't mean what he said about everyone hating her, but he doesn't actually say he's sorry about it. Nesta coldly says that it's true though, and Cassian assures her that it's not, and they wouldn't be doing all of this if they hated her. As I've said ad nauseum at this point, I don't believe that Rhysand concocted this plan to help Nesta in any way whatsoever, and simply wants to punish her and then later control her when she's been trained to behave. None of this is about genuine concern for Nesta. That is a lie. Cassian specifically says that he doesn't hate Nesta, and shockingly, Nesta says she doesn't hate him either and never has. I can't say the same. I hate Cassian, but I don't hate Nesta anymore. I think. My feelings about her are complicated, which at least makes this book a little more interesting. Nesta doesn't wait for Cassian's response, and the chapter ends there as she heads back into the house. We cut to Nesta shelving books in the library, and she's ravenously hungry after training. So I'm not sure if she skipped lunch like she normally does, or if she's just extra super hungry. She's super sore and achy, and thinks about how pathetic it is that she's so weak. As much as everyone else hates Nesta, or allegedly doesn't hate her according to Cassian, Nobody hates Nesta more than Nesta hates Nesta. She is truly the queen of Hater Nation. Nesta no longer finds the same peace she did before in mindlessly shelving books, and finds that she can only keep calm as long as she keeps moving. That sounds like a recipe for injury or burnout, but I think we're supposed to see it as character growth, which feels dismissive of the library work. Nesta is struggling to put a book on a higher shelf when Gwen shows up. Gwen asks if Nesta can use magic to shelve the book, like I guess teleport it up there or like float it or something, and she's shocked when Nesta says no, and that she's been shelving every book by hand. I feel like using magic would still be tiring, but in a different kind of way. Also, I'm a little confused about the magic here that some people have like a telepathic kind of magic, like Clotho, how she can write with a floating pen, but other people can't use magic in that way. The magic feels super wishy-washy throughout this series, and changes depending on what a character needs in the moment, so it's very hard to keep track of who can do what. Or like what is a common power and what is an uncommon power. Nesta doesn't give any specific details on her magic abilities, and Gwen shifts the conversation to ask if Nesta has seen a specific book. Nesta says that she hasn't seen that book, and we're reminded that Gwen has a super demanding boss, so she's very worried about finding the book, like she really needs to have it. They talk about Gwen's mean boss, Meryl, and how Gwen doesn't want to hate her considering the reason why they're all there in the library, but that Meryl really isn't nice to anyone. I don't want to sound like I'm minimizing anyone's trauma, but I think it's important to say that past trauma doesn't give someone an excuse for bad behavior, especially when it's directed toward people who have nothing to do with said trauma. Regardless of what someone has been through, you're allowed to dislike them if they act like a total asshat, and you don't have to accept their poor treatment. That is not an excuse for them to do whatever they want. Gwen is currently trying to fix a mistake because she delivered the wrong book to Meryl and is trying to go find the right one before Meryl notices. Nesta doesn't really seem to understand why any of this is a big deal, and neither do I. Meryl isn't researching anything that's urgent or life or death or anything, so there's really no reason to get so pressed about a book. It's not that serious, I say as I complain about this book for hours on end. Gwen says that Meryl doesn't tolerate mistakes, and Gwen doesn't want to feel like a failure after everything the priestesses have done for her by accepting her into the library. Nesta doesn't really know how to handle this somewhat emotional conversation, but she does her best to talk Gwen through it instead of telling her to fuck off, which is progress for sure. As it turns out, all Nesta really needed this whole time was for everyone to talk to her like she's a person and not a rabid dog or a ticking time bomb. Who would have thought it'd be that simple? We get some exposition that once the priestesses enter the library, they don't typically leave, even to go outside and enjoy the sun, unless they're leaving for good. Oh, but don't worry, they have windows at their dormitory on the side of the mountain, and the reason the storm has never been mentioned before now is because it's glamored to be invisible. How convenient! To be clear, I don't think the priestesses are forced into staying in the library, like they probably could come and go if that's what they wanted to do. But they're also traumatized that they just don't want to leave the library. I know Rhysand started the library as a sanctuary, but I don't think that it's healthy to be so isolated, and it might even make their trauma worse as they become more and more disconnected from society at large. Gwen goes on to talk about how priestesses have religious services when they aren't working, and Nesta is intrigued to hear that that involves music. Maybe they should have just let Nesta heal through the power of music or something she's actually interested in rather than forcing her to physically train. But Rhysand and Feyre aren't mental health professionals, and neither am I, so like whatever, this is what's happening. Gwen goes back to looking for the misplaced book as Nesta gets back to shelving. Nesta thinks about someone other than herself for once, and thinks about what a shame it is that such a bright person like Gwen plans to live out the rest of her life in a dark, secluded library after everything else she's already been through. Nesta feels compelled to help Gwen and asks the sentient house to help her find the book. The book instantly appears on Nesta's cart, and I wonder why the house's magic wasn't already doing things like shelving books or locating books for the priestesses. I know that the house particularly likes Nesta, but it was already capable of doing things like making food or fire appear before she ever showed up, so like, why are the priestesses working? Well, I mean, I guess like the house would put them out of a job and maybe that's why it doesn't do it, but it seems silly that the priestesses are struggling to find books and they can just appear immediately. Like, okay. Anyway, Nesta has the book now, so she asks someone where Meryl's office is and goes there to switch the book for the one that Gwen misdelivered. Meryl is in her office busily working, but somehow hasn't noticed Gwen's mistake, so the book must not be that important if Meryl hasn't even looked at it yet. Can't be that urgent if she didn't pick it up immediately. Nesta notices the book on a nearby cart and plays dumb when Meryl asks her where Gwen is and what Nesta is doing there. Nesta's like, "Who's Gwen? Anyway, someone told me to bring you these books. I don't know who, because all you priestesses look the same in your dumb little hoods." Of course, tight-ass Meryl doesn't appreciate the sacrilege of referring to their religious garments as mere hoods, but she can't out-bitch the head bitch in charge. That firmly belongs to Nesta. Nesta purposely calls Meryl the wrong name to really piss her off, and of course it works. This whole time, Nesta has been sneakily looking at the book she needs to replace, which is kind of funny in a slapstick kind of way. Meryl tells Nesta to get the hell out of her office, and then turns around so Nesta takes her chance. One eye on the priestess, Nesta moved. She coughed to cover the whisper of books moving, and by the time Meryl whipped her head around again, Nesta made sure she wasn't so much as looking toward the shelf, where Volume 7 of The Great War stood in place of Volume 8, which now sat atop the other books in Nesta's arms. This scene is really goofy, but it's fun, and I'll admit that I enjoyed this little moment between Nesta and Gwen. Like, this is genuinely a really cute scene. I have to give compliments where compliments are due, and I wish more of the book was like this. I wish the book focused more on Nesta developing her first real female friendships, but there are so many plot lines crammed into this book that Nesta's relationship with Gwen, and especially Emery, feels pretty surface level, even after they're all supposedly besties. I'm getting ahead of myself though, so let's try and finish this chapter. Nesta finds Gwen to tell her about what just went down with Meryl, and comes across Gwen quietly singing to herself. The song is weirdly captivating, and Gwen is weirdly glowing, but this little detail never really goes anywhere or gets explained, just like many other things in this series. I'm still waiting for an explanation on what the fuck Moore's truth powers are. What does that mean? Nesta goes up to Gwen and is like, hey dude, I helped you out with your book thing, like what is Meryl even studying anyway? Gwen goes on to explain that Meryl is researching the multiverse and if other worlds can overlap and all that jazz. Massive spoiler alert, but they definitely do, and there's a direct crossover with ACOTAR and SJM's other series, Crescent City. I haven't read Crescent City, so I don't exactly know how they're connected, but I've seen enough spoilers online to know they are, just not like the details about it. Anyway, Gwen admits that Meryl isn't even researching that stuff anymore, so I don't know why Gwen even brought that up other than to like explain to the audience that this is happening, to like set this up for later, I guess. Gwen says that Meryl's research now is focused on writing a comprehensive history of the Valkyries, and Nesta's like, the Valka who? A clan of female warriors from another territory. They were better fighters than the Illyrians even. The Valkyrie name was just a title though. They weren't a race like the Illyrians. They hailed from every type of fae, usually recruited from birth or early childhood. They had 3 stages of training: novice, blade, and finally Valkyrie. To become one was the highest honor in their land. Their territory is gone now, subsumed into others. This sounds totally irrelevant, but it's actually important. This book is even broken up into 3 parts, labeled Novice, Blade, and Valkyrie. So I'm sure anybody who's been paying attention can already see where all of Nesta's training is leading. It feels weird though that Cassian is the one who trains Nesta into becoming a Valkyrie when it's a group of warrior women. I think I mentioned before that it could have been interesting if Nesta trained with Moore instead of Cassian. And I think that would have made this whole Valkyrie plotline more impactful and make more sense if it's a woman training a woman warrior. Like, I don't know. Apparently all the Valkyries are gone now because they were wiped out in the war 500 years ago, and since they mostly kept an oral history rather than a written one, much of their lore has been lost to time. Never mind the fact that there are plenty of fairies who were old enough to be at the war and likely encountered the Valkyries. Maybe Meryl would get farther on her research if she went out and interviewed these people instead of relying on random library books. Hell, Meryl doesn't even have to leave the library. Rhysand and Cassian were at the war, so maybe one of them or both of them can come down and chat with her. I think later on, Cassian even references that he did know the Valkyries, so like he has information that would be helpful. Nesta is super interested in the Valkyries, but Gwen is too busy to keep chatting. Gwen is genuinely grateful for Nesta's help with the book situation, which of course makes Nesta uncomfortable as she's not used to having pleasant conversations with people. The scene cuts there and Nesta goes back up to the house to eat dinner and take a bath. She goes to bed and in her sleepy haze senses something familiar beckoning to her, but the feeling goes away. Ooh, foreshadowing. What possibly could it be? Is it another underbaked plotline to pad out this ungodly long book? I guess you'll have to keep watching to find out. The next chapter is from Cassian's perspective as he stands in the training ring waiting for Nesta. She skipped breakfast and also dinner the night before, so in a rare show of concern, Cassian checked on her, but didn't wake her up to go eat some meals because the sentient house showed Cassian a bunch of empty dishes to show him that Nesta wasn't missing meals. Sorry, that was phrased so weirdly, but it's so sad to me that a sentient house is the only one who's really taking care of Nesta. Good work, he'd muttered into the air, and the tray vanished. He made a mental note to ask Reese about it later. Whether the house was sentient. He'd never heard his High Lord mention it in 5 centuries. Considering the filthy things he'd done in his bedroom, his bathroom, in so many of the rooms here. The idea of the house watching him? Cauldron boil him alive.
Are you not ashamed of yourself? Are you not embarrassed? This is really embarrassing.
It's cracking me up that Cassian is such a gooner. I didn't expect to hear so much about his hog cranking habits. Cassian is starting to lose hope that Nesta will show up to training, even though she made that bargain, so I think she has to go to training? I don't know what would happen if she didn't. But she finally stumbles in all disheveled and exhausted. Cassian finally realizes that Nesta was late because she's so sore she can hardly move, and he finds this funny instead of concerning and decides to continue on with training anyway. I'm not a gym bro, so I'm really not sure what I'm talking about, but I feel like pushing yourself through strenuous exercise when your body is that sore and tired would be super damaging. Maybe fairies are just built different? I don't know. We get a scene break to switch to Nesta's perspective as she struggles through training. 2 hours later, sweat poured down Nesta's body, but the aching had at least ceased. You need to get the lactic acid out of your muscles. That's what's hurting you, Cassian had said when she'd complained nonstop for the first 30 minutes. Whatever the hell that meant. Bro, what the fuck? How do fairies know about lactic acid? In case you also don't know what that means, lactic acid is a chemical your body produces when your cells break down carbs for energy. Working out causes more lactic acid to be produced, and people believe that it causes muscle soreness, but apparently that's a myth and studies show it's not true. My source on that was the Cleveland Clinic. If you're interested in reading more, that's kind of just what came up when I googled it. I also believed that lactic acid causes muscle soreness, and I didn't know that was considered a myth, but I don't care to track down studies that say otherwise, or whatever, that doesn't matter. That's what lactic acid is. I don't think I need to extensively explain that there is zero logical reason for Cassian to know about lactic acid. There's just no way they'd have this kind of knowledge about metabolism. This does not make sense. Moving on, Nesta is laid out on the ground all exhausted after her workout, and in a rare show of kindness, Cassian helps her stretch her sore muscles. He's holding her foot to manually stretch her leg, and he's actually being gentle and considerate, which is nice to see. They talk to each other civilly for the first time in a long time about training and all that stuff, and Cassian points out that Nesta was more nimble than he expected her to be. I took dancing lessons as a girl. Really? We weren't always poor. Until I was 14, my father was as rich as a king. They called him the Prince of Merchants. He gave her a tentative smile. And you were his princess? Ice cracked through her. No, Elaine was his princess. Even Feyre was more his princess than I ever was. And what were you? I was my mother's creature. She said it with such cold it nearly froze her tongue. Cassian said carefully, what was she like? A worse version of me. The Archeron family dynamic is only mentioned in passing, and as I've said before, I think the book would have been more interesting if Feyre was more involved in Nesta's healing, because then we could learn more about their family and how their upbringing shaped how the sisters behave. The family relationship between the Archeron sisters is really hollow throughout this series, and it's a definite weak point. Anyway, Nesta doesn't want to talk about her mom, so she pivots to talk about what happened to the priestesses in a place called Singrava, which I'm probably saying wrong. I didn't mention this by name before, but Gwen had referenced being there at Sangrava, and whatever happened there is why she's now at the library. Cassian is clearly shaken by the question despite being a big bad war hero, so whatever happened there had to be super mega bad. If you don't remember from ACOSF, the cauldron was split into pieces and Hybern had the main part but still needed the cauldron's feet. So they went around to a bunch of temples in search of those feet, and one was at Sangrava. Apparently Hybern sent its most evilest soldiers there to get it, and you can imagine they weren't very nice to the priestesses they came across, to put it simply. We hear more about the specifics behind what happened there from Gwen later on, so stick a pin in that for now. The scene ends there, and we cut to Cassian randomly at the spring court, and he's all itchy and sneezing from all the pollen, which is probably the only thing I can relate to Cassian on. I also have terrible allergies. The spring court is definitely on the bottom of the list for courts I would choose to live in. Rhysand is there too as they walk through a random apple orchard, and I think they're relatively close to Tamlin's estate, which is stupid and risky. They come across Eris, and we're told that he's the one who set up this meeting in the first place. It's explained that they're using the Spring Court as neutral territory since Tamlin has let the place go to shambles and doesn't really police who comes and goes anymore. I really don't understand why they couldn't meet at the Night Court because they're supposed to be allies, so Eris should feel comfortable going to the Night Court. I'm pretty sure there's also a neutral middle ground somewhere in Prithian that they could have met instead, so why they chose the Spring Court is beyond me. They get down to business, and I really don't give a shit about this plotline at all, to be frank. It's boring and drags down the pace of the novel. I'll do my best to summarize their conversation without boring you or myself to tears or cutting out too much context. Eris is annoyed that they're spending more time gathering information than acting, and he proposes that they simply kill the remaining mortal queens and get it over with, instead of waiting around for whatever they're planning with Koschei. Cassian is like, dude, no way, that's a terrible idea, and it's gonna start a war because we're gonna look like the bad guys for just killing these people. Which is a weird thing for Cassian to say because he suggested doing similar things. But Rhysand is like, dude, no, wait, let him cook. That might be a good idea. We just can't be sloppy about it. Cassian is somehow surprised that Rhysand might be down with that plan, but it's not surprising to me considering how much Rhysand manipulates things behind the scenes, like throughout this whole series. That's definitely something Rhysand would do. I don't know why Cassian is surprised. Even though Rhysand seems to want to do that plan, he knows that it's going to be too hard to pull off, so he shuts down that idea, and instead asks Eris why his father wants to go to war so badly. As if it isn't obvious that Baron is simply a massive entitled douche who's evil for the sake of being evil. That applies to pretty much all of the villains in ACOTAR, so Rhysand should have known there was no motivation outside of Baron just being evil. Eris pretty much says that, and he says that it isn't the mortal realm that Baron wants to take over, implying that he wants to extend his control across Prithian instead. He'd likely be successful in taking over the already weakened Spring Court, especially because it's right next to the Autumn Court, so that's clearly the plan. We're told that Tamlin has pretty much abandoned being the High Lord and just runs around the woods in his beast form being all sad and depressed. Cassian stupidly doesn't think that's a big deal and that Tamlin deserves to suffer, which is so incredibly smooth-brained. Regardless of what Tamlin has done, it's bad for all of Prithian for the Spring Court to be a lawless wasteland that's ripe for the taking by whoever's bold enough to start a war to get it. Even if they don't care about Tamlin, they should care about all the innocent Spring Court citizens who are suffering from their leader abandoning them. We're told Rhysand has been trying to help Tamlin, but hasn't been successful, and gee, I wonder why. Surely there has to be someone else who's better suited to intervene and get Tamlin in a better place. Like, Rhysand is the worst option for that. My vote is for Tarquin because the Summer Court borders the Spring Court, so he's closer and has a more vested interest in helping. Oh, and also Tarquin is actually a nice guy, unlike Rhysand who only pretends to be nice. Anyway, Eris says he'll try to delay his father's plans, but they need to hurry up and figure out what's going on with the Mortal Queens, specifically Briolin, and that evil guy Koschei, so they can prevent the war, or at least get enough info to get allies on their side if the war is inevitable. Spoiler alert, there definitely won't be another war, because then SJM has to write another war, and that's too much work. Rhysand is like, Eris, it's interesting that you're so eager to betray your court, as if he doesn't already have a deal in place with Eris to help him gain control of the court? What? Like, you know that Eris wants to be in charge. How? What? Like, dude, Rhysand, you already knew Eris's goal was to take over the Autumn Court. Like, what? Eris reminds him that he should already know that, and Cassian is like, dude, why do you even want to be in charge anyway? Eris cryptically answers that it's the same reason for why he left Mor untouched when she was dumped at the border of the Autumn Court after that whole failed engagement thing. And I really don't know, what he's trying to say by that. Cassian is like, dude, you left Mor there to suffer and die. And Eris is like, you really think that's how that went down? Maybe you should ask more about what actually happened. This isn't the first time that the narrative has hinted that Eris isn't actually evil, and there's stuff about the Mor situation that is being hidden or misinterpreted, but we never learn what that is. I previously said that I think Eris didn't help Mor because it would cause her to get stuck in the Autumn Court, which is exactly what she was trying to avoid. So it sounds like Eris was doing a favor, and maybe he's trying to imply that he wants to be in charge of the Autumn Court to make it a better place? I really don't know what he means. The conversation abruptly ends there and Eris leaves. Rhysand is being weird and seems distracted by something, but he won't tell Cassian what's wrong. I think I know what's going on with that, but I'll explain later when it's relevant. I've already talked way too long about this nothing burger of a scene, and nothing happened and we learned no new information. The next scene cuts back to Nesta as she stands at the top of the 10,000 stairs and recaps her library shift. It was boring and uneventful, and Nesta didn't see Gwen, which is something she's surprised to realize that she missed. Give me more scenes with Nesta and her friends, please. Less political scheming, more friendship. SJM, I'm begging you. Nesta feels restless despite her exhaustion, which is why she yet again tackles the stairs. Hopefully this time the stairs don't tackle her. She only makes it to the 150th stair before turning back, so she still has a long way to go, but it's nice to see her trying and actually making progress. When Nesta makes it back to her room, the house has dinner and a smutty book ready for her, and even runs her a bath complete with fancy scented oils. Nesta straight up tells the house that it's her only friend, which pleases the house so much that it even gives her a slice of chocolate cake. The sentient house really would be charming if it wasn't so fucking sad that it's the only one that cares about Nesta. Like, that's so sad! The next chapter opens with Nesta back in the library, and she's on a deeper level, which makes her think about Bryaxis, the creepy pit monster that is currently missing, and that time back in ACOWAR when Hybern attacked the library. It's super creepy down there, even with Bryaxis gone, and Nesta hears the darkness calling out to her, which seems like a cool plot point that's being set up, but the explanation we get for this later on is so lame. Nesta is almost in a trance, but snaps out of it when Gwen comes by. Nesta is like, hey dude, do you also think it's creepy down here? And Gwen is like, yeah, it's real creepy down here, let's get the fuck out of here. They start walking and Gwen ominously tells Nesta not to look behind her, like straight out of a horror movie, and that something definitely is watching them, so they gotta go. Again, this all feels very tense and exciting for very little payoff, which is true of many things throughout this series. Nesta and Gwen make it to safety and talk about what just went down and how the presence they felt seemed even older than Bryaxis, whatever that means. Nesta reveals to Gwen that she was turned into a fairy by the cauldron, which is different than how Feyre was turned into a fairy, and I guess it makes sense that the general public doesn't know all of those details. They speculate that whatever just happened has to do with the cauldron, so Nesta should avoid going to the lower floors. Again, this seems like it's such a big deal, but it's really not. Nesta and Gwen talk some more, and some other priestess walks by. Nesta asks about her, but Gwen says that she doesn't really know her backstory and they don't gossip about each other. Like, it's kind of an unspoken rule that they don't tell each other stories or, like, speak behind each other's backs. Which is real interesting considering Rhysand immediately told Feyre all the gruesome details about Clotho's backstory the moment she was out of earshot back in ACOWAR. It just goes to show that Rhysand isn't the ally he says he is if he's willing to tell everyone's business when the priestesses have a code not to disclose other people's stories. Of course that doesn't apply to Rhysand for some reason, like damn. Gwen thanks Nesta again for helping with the whole Meryl situation, and then realizes Nesta doesn't seem physically well, so she asks her what's wrong. Nesta reveals that she's been training with Cassian to, quote, curb her behavior. And Gwen asks why she needs to do that, which catches Nesta off guard because she thought it was obvious that she's, quote, a horrible, wretched waste. Damn, that is so sad to refer to yourself that way. Like, even if you don't like Nesta, that's just sad. Nesta dodges the question, and Gwen says that she really needs to get back to work, and the scene ends there. As I'm going through this book a second time writing this script and recording this video, I'm realizing that so many of these scenes are totally inconsequential to the plot, even if they seem important as they're presented. SJM has a major issue with pacing and story structure, which is why her books are so unnecessarily long and all the action is packed in at the very end. Nothing happens for a long time, and then suddenly everything happens all at once, and it makes for a really bad reading experience. The next chapter is from Nesta's POV as she makes another attempt at the stairs. Exercise has become her new coping mechanism, and while that seems healthier than drinking or anonymous hookups, remember what I said before about Nesta taking exercise to the extreme and not resting enough. The stairs are especially treacherous considering she had a really nasty fall down them that would have killed her if she wasn't Fae, like they explicitly say that. I don't really like that the narrative isn't pointing out that Nesta is still acting in self-harming and self-destructing ways, but this time through exercise, and I think that's kind of an irresponsible message. This isn't really any healthier of a way to cope. All Nesta can think about as she descends the stairs is how much she wants to drink wine and listen to music, which on its surface doesn't seem that unhealthy. That kind of sounds like a good Friday night to me. But Nesta does take the drinking part to excess, which is the problem. Feyre worked through her trauma through painting, so it would be nice if Nesta could do something with music instead of being forced to train, and essentially physically punished into getting better. I would have liked to see her nurture herself more instead of break herself down completely to build back up again. Like, that's not necessary in my opinion. Nesta sets a personal record by making it all the way down to step 1000, and she's calm now, so she turns around and goes back up to the house. Cassian is still there waiting for her, and Nesta simply says she doesn't want to fight anymore and that she wants to go to bed. Nesta previously made a magic bargain with Cassian in order to train, and she thinks about cashing in the favor that he owes her to make him fly her down to Valaris so she can go to a bar and get some alcohol and listen to music and just have the time that she wants to have. She realizes that's not a good idea though and chooses not to do that, which I think is humongous progress for her and shows her maturity level has improved a lot. However, I do feel like Nesta was able to quit drinking unrealistically fast. She basically went cold turkey, which can be dangerous to people who have a physical dependence on alcohol, and I don't think that the book handles that situation very responsibly. Even though Nesta told Cassian goodnight and that she wants to go to bed, he initiates a conversation anyway because he doesn't know how to listen to boundaries, and yet again he asks what happened with Elaine. He's at least nice about it now and not yelling, but this is something they could have talked about in the morning. This is not life or death. They don't need to hash this out right now, and it's not any of his business. Nesta dodges the question and instead talks about the priestesses and how they aren't signing up for training like she expected. Some of the priestesses have been in the library for hundreds of years, so Nesta thinks that if they can't get through their trauma after all of that time, then what chance does she have to get through her own? Holy false equivalency, Batman! Everyone is different and has gone through different things, so you can't directly compare how long it takes you to heal versus how long it takes them. It's also not fair to assume that the priestesses need to train in order to heal, and that choosing not to sign up means that they have not healed at all in their hundreds of years. Nesta is pulling a Rhysand here by deciding what is best for other people and then getting all angsty when they don't fall in line. It's a good thing that unlike Rhysand, Nesta can't actually force other people to obey her. This situation is such a mess. Cassian tells Nesta to be patient with the priestesses, and we're told that Nesta has only been training for 2 weeks, which feels pretty damn fast given the progress we've already seen her make, and that's not a lot of time to convince the priestesses to train. It's really hard for me to understand the timeline of this novel and how much time has passed, and it feels so much longer than 2 weeks, it just feels really weird. Cassian tells Nesta that it took Feyre several months to get better, and Nesta cuts him off to say that she's done hearing about everyone else's journeys. Truly, that is not very helpful to say to someone. Cassian is too stupid to understand why it isn't helpful to be constantly compared to other people, especially a person that personally triggers you, and he launches into his own journey as if Nesta didn't just say she didn't want to hear about other people's journeys. Cassian tells Nesta about the time he wiped a village off the map out of revenge for his mother, but don't worry, he spared the children, the elderly, and quote, some females. Which implies that Cassian didn't spare all the females, which is so fucked up that I don't even know what to say about it. No matter what any of the women did, they would be defenseless against Cassian, and thinking about him just slaughtering them, oh, and this is the love interest? Are you serious?
Hey, that's fucked up.
Cassian goes on to say that it took him 10 years to get over all of that, and he virtue signals by saying that Nesta can take 10 or even 20 years to get over her own shit. Except he must have forgotten why they're here right now, and that Rhysand wants Nesta to get over everything right the fuck now, or she'll be dumped in the human realm and abandoned. I don't think Cassian is trying to be manipulative, but that's very much what it feels like. Nesta had already said she wanted to go to bed and that she didn't want to hear about what other people had been through, and Cassian proceeded to trauma dump on her anyway. It doesn't feel like Cassian is trying to relate to Nesta or open up to her. It feels like he's trying to remind her that everyone else, himself included, has had it so much worse than her that she needs to get over it already. He said that she can take her time, but that's not really what it actually felt like. Nesta is obviously horrified by what Cassian has just revealed to her, and she asks if he regrets what he did, and he straight up says no, which is fucking crazy. How did he know that everyone he killed was guilty if he was taken from his mom at an early age? He wouldn't have been around to know who treated her badly and who didn't. So how did he know who to kill and who to spare? I don't get it. I know I've said multiple times that I think the Illyrians should be wiped out, but Cassian doesn't think that, so it's crazy to me that he stands by the fact that he mass deleted an entire village. And also somehow has faced no consequences for doing that. Cassian is fucking scary, and he is a massive red flag. What the hell? This whole situation is so bizarre. It's even weirder that throughout this conversation, Nesta and Cassian get closer and closer until he's cupping her face and leaning in like he might kiss her. He tells her that he can take whatever she throws at him without breaking, which I think is his way of saying he'll be there for her always, but it's blatantly not true. He literally just had a rage outburst at her in the last chapter, so does that not count as breaking? Because he seemed pretty broken to me. You don't understand, she said, voice rasping. I'm not like you and the others. That's never bothered me one bit. He lowered his hand from her chin. She straightened. It should. You say that like you want it to bother me. It bothers everyone, even oh so special Rhysand. His teeth flashed, any semblance of softness gone. I told you once and I'll say it again. Don't take that snide fucking tone when you speak about him.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Oh my god, look, see? Cassian clearly can't take whatever Nesta throws at him if he gets that pissy about such an incredibly minor slight towards God King Rhysand. All Nesta did was call him special. Sure, she said it sarcastically, but like, this reaction to that? Seriously, Cassian? Nesta is spitting straight up facts right now, and Cassian clearly can't handle it. Cassian will never ever choose Nesta over his beloved God King Rhysand, and that's one of the main reasons I hate this couple, and especially Cassian, so much. There is nobody Rhysand would choose over Feyre, and that is not true for Cassian. Cassian would always choose Rhysand over Nesta. I stand by that. Nesta says that she can talk about Rhysand however she wants and tells Cassian to let her go. And he's like, use your training and make me, which is fucking gross, Cassian. If a woman tells you to let her go, fucking let her go. Don't be like, oh, you have to fight me off. What the fuck? They insult each other a little bit more before Cassian finally lets Nesta go. He looks kind of smug about it though, like he's won this whole interaction, and Nesta can't let that go, so the chapter abruptly ends as she pulls him in for a kiss to be like, nope, gotcha, I have the upper hand. Good lord, Nesta, that is such a bad idea. None of this should be happening right now. Cassian should have just let Nesta go to bed when she said she was done talking and that she wanted to go to sleep. Like, what the fuck? The fact that physical intimacy is happening after this huge blow-up fight is more concerning to me than hot, and I really can't overstate how much I hate this fucking couple. Cassian is too stunned by the kiss to do anything, so Nesta pulls back and starts to walk away, but Cassian comes to his senses and grabs her and furiously makes out with her. I know Nesta kissed Cassian first, but this whole situation is so gross to me, especially because he now has her backed up against a wall and she's unable to get away. Nesta seems to be into it, but Cassian should know better than to paw all over her during such an emotionally charged moment. I really don't think the narrative is pointing out how fucked up and toxic this is and we're supposed to view it as hot, and this is not hot, this is concerning. For as old as Cassian is, he really isn't any better at controlling himself and his emotions than Nesta is, which is terrifying given how huge and strong he is. Cassian really freaks me out, he is such a red flag. They get all hot and heavy against the wall, and to be clear, the narrative does say that Nesta is very much consenting to this, but she's so mentally and physically exhausted that I can't help but feel like Cassian is taking advantage of the situation. And I know Nesta kissed him first, but Cassian should have had the maturity to be like, okay, well, it's bedtime now. Why is he escalating the situation? It's especially weird that Cassian is kind of acting like Rhysand, and he's smirking and making teasing remarks, very much Rhysand style. And it's mostly involved about how into it Nesta is, and it just feels really weird that Cassian is being so teasing with her right now. And this kind of talk from Cassian shows that he does have some level of control over himself if they aren't just furiously making out without talking, the passion has overcome them and they just can't even speak. That is not this. This moment is supposed to be super hot as Cassian thrusts his boner. Oh, Jesus. Oh my god, I didn't realize I wrote that in the script.
Ugh. Brother, ugh.
The situation escalates and it's supposed to be super hot as Cassian thrusts his boner at Nesta and she straight up gives him a handy, and I am so horrified by this situation. And I'm especially horrified by the lead up to this situation that I'm not fully convinced that it's consensual, even though the narrative tells us that it is. If this was written by another author, this would not be the same scene. We're told it's consensual, it does not feel that way to me. To me, Cassian comes off as a predator taking advantage of someone who is in crisis, and I really don't like how unaware the narrative is about that. Cassian finishes, gross, and he immediately has post-nut clarity, but he'd remained gaping, like he'd realized what he'd done and regretted it. Every bit of desire, of blessed distraction within her winked out. Nesta shoved at his chest, and he immediately let go, almost dropping her to the floor as their bodies pulled apart. She didn't want to hear his words of regret, that this had been a mistake. She wouldn't let him hold that power over her, so Nesta curled her lips in a cold, cruel smile and said as she left, "Someone's quick off the mark." Good lord, what do I even say about this? The narrative kind of acknowledges the power play between Cassian and Nesta, but ultimately tries to pretend that it's Nesta who is in control, despite Cassian having her pinned up against a wall. I'd like to think that he would have let Nesta get away if she clearly told him to back off, but I can't be sure that he would, which is terrifying. This behavior is dangerous, and I hate that it's being shown off as hot and spicy, and not a humongous red flag that Nesta is in danger. Right before this interaction, Cassian admitted to being a murderer of like hundreds of people or however big that village is. Like, he's scary! And I especially don't like that Nesta looks like the villain in this encounter because of the sassy little remark that she makes at the end about Cassian being quick to finish. But I think Cassian is fully in the wrong for letting any of this happen in the first place. Nesta did kiss him first, but Cassian was the one who escalated the situation instead of letting her go. I found this scene really disturbing when it's clear I was supposed to find it hot, and that makes it more disturbing. This is so weird. There's a scene break, and we cut to breakfast the next day from Cassian's perspective. Asriel is randomly there, and Cassian can't even look at him because he can't stop thinking about what went down with Nesta. Cassian seems ashamed that he was so out of control, but I don't really buy it. He was in control the whole time. Like, he wouldn't be making the pointed, teasing remarks he was if he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. Asriel asks what happened because the vibes are weird, and he can probably smell some horny fairy pheromones, but Cassian doesn't want to tell him what went down. The narrative then says that Cassian is ashamed that he, quote, found his pleasure when Nesta didn't. So that's why I don't believe he has any shame around losing control and inappropriately escalating the situation. His shame lies in the fact that he views Nesta as being in control of the situation instead of him, and that is fucked up. We're supposed to be like, oh, it's so hot that Cassian isn't a selfish lover, and he wants Nesta to have a good time too, and he's so bothered that he got his and she didn't get hers. But, like, this interaction should never have happened in the first place, and Cassian is weird for being like this. This is weird. Asriel says that he's there because he discovered something while spying, and he says that Cassian and Nesta are wanted for a meeting at the river house with Rhysand and Feyre to discuss whatever that information is that he found. Of course, Asriel is vague about it because God forbid anyone gets a heads up about serious discussions instead of being sent in blind and off guard, because that's the best way to have a productive conversation. The chapter ends there, and the next chapter picks up from Nesta's perspective as Cassian flies her to the river house. Nesta is super uncomfortable around Cassian, but not because he pushed her boundaries, but because she feels like she wants him more than he wants her, and like, that is so fucked up, I don't even know what to say. Cassian isn't speaking to Nesta or even really looking at her, which only fuels her belief that she's more interested in him than he is in her. Of course they don't talk about that at all though, because that would be mature and healthy, so nope, not gonna do that. Nesta is super nervous when they get to the river house, given how poorly things went down the last time she was there with her intervention, and she clearly thinks that this meeting is another punishment to her, which is why Asriel shouldn't have been so vague about what's going on. Cassian and Nesta meet up with Rhysand, Feyre, Asriel, and Amren, and that group is bantering and talking normally despite the tension, which feels very weird. Asriel gets down to business to vaguely say that Briolyn has been busier than they expected, as if she isn't plotting a whole ass war, like duh, she's gonna be busy. He continues to talk vaguely until Amren tells him to get on with it, and then Asriel promptly info dumps on us, which is so interesting. Apparently the other mortal queens aren't working with Briolyn, and she controls the throne herself. Everything Eris told them was true, and Briolyn is working with Baron, who is the High Lord of the Autumn Court. Briolyn's goal is to get the cauldron back so that she can get her youth back because she was turned into an old crone by the cauldron. If you don't remember from ACOWAR, the cauldron is now with Miriam and Draken, those two random people I could not give less of a fuck about, on their even more random little island. And I think the Night Court is the only group who knows where the cauldron is. In order to get to the cauldron, Briolyn is working with that death god / sorcerer guy Koschei, but first he needs to get free of the lake he's trapped at. He's told Briolyn about something called the Dread Trove and that he needs her to find it for him to get him free. Amren's eyes glowed with a remnant of her power. The cauldron made many objects of power long ago, forging weapons of unrivaled might. Most were lost to history and war, and when I went to the prison, only 3 remained. At the time, some claimed there were 4, or that the 4th had been unmade, but today's legends only tell of 3. The mask, Rhys murmured, the harp, and the crown. These info dumpy chapters are really boring despite being important to the plot, so I'll try my best to summarize them. The mask can raise the dead, the harp can open any door, both physical or otherwise, between worlds, whatever that means, and whoever wears the crown can influence anyone despite any mental shields they have up. That's different from Rhysand's mind control powers, because he can be blocked out if someone has strong mental shields, whatever that even means, or whatever. Nesta is flabbergasted that such important items have been lost, and Rhysand kind of flippantly says that whoever had them grew careless and kind of forgot about them, which is fucking crazy if they're that powerful. Like, what? These mega powerful magic items are clearly just more MacGuffins for the plot, which makes them lame instead of interesting. It's like the magic mirror and the magic truth orb and all the random magical objects that have been in the other books. They don't really matter or feel very important. Throughout this discussion, they're kind of dancing around the point that the items are cauldron made, so someone who was made by the cauldron would be able to locate them, clearly referring to Nesta. I wonder if that's the real reason Rhysand set up Nesta's intervention. He saw that a war was on the horizon and he needed to be able to control all his loyal little soldiers, and Nesta had powers that were convenient to him, but she was out of control, so he had to manipulate her and fuck Rhysand. Even though Briolyn was also made by the cauldron, they speculate that she can't track the cauldron because it punished her by making her old or something. I don't really understand. We're reminded that Nesta somehow took more power from the cauldron than it intended to give her, and Feyre asks Nesta what went down in the cauldron, as if that wasn't the most traumatic moment of Nesta's life and something she has previously expressed that she does not want to talk about. To Cassian's credit, he tries to change the subject because he knows Nesta doesn't want to talk about what happened in the cauldron, but Nesta vaguely answers the question by saying she knows she took something, but she doesn't know how or what it was, which is very informative, thanks Nesta. They speculate that Briolyn can't track the cauldron itself, but might be able to track the Dread Trove items, and once she has all three, she could somehow use them to find the cauldron. The Dread Trove items are dangerous enough on their own that it would be a problem if Briolyn had any of them, regardless of the cauldron, so this is something they can't let happen. This all feels so convoluted and out of nowhere, and this particular plotline is so messy and boring to me. Getting the Dread Trove is kind of cool. As Nesta goes through all of that, you'll see when it happens, but the ending is horrible. It's horrible. There's a lot I'm skipping over here because the finer details don't really matter, and you'll definitely forget them by the time they're even remotely relevant, so I'm trying to keep it simple. And it's not simple, because this book sucks. Sorry guys, I'm kind of crashing out. We're gonna get through this. They talk more about Koschei and speculate about what his motives are, which I fully don't care to cover because he is so irrelevant. They don't really know exactly what is going on with Briolyn and the missing Autumn Court soldiers, but they know she's gearing up to search for the Dread Trove. So Cassian still has to work with Eris to figure out what's going on with all that mess. They talk about how they're going to deal with that situation, which is another thing I don't care to get into or explain. They can't tell any of the other courts about the Dread Trove and ask for help, because they might go and try and find the items themselves, even though I think they'd already know about such crazy powerful relics. How does nobody know about this? Amren says that it's been 10,000 years since anyone had the trove, so the information was probably lost to time, and she knows because she was old enough to be there. Okay, I guess. We're also told that the trove items have some level of sentience, like the cauldron does, and that the trove wanted to be forgotten, which is why Amren didn't think about finding them to use in the war against Hybern when it would have been convenient to have those things. Yep, it's definitely because these magic items are sentient, and not because SJM needed more MacGuffins to pull out of her ass because she didn't plan enough of this series ahead of time. What the fuck? We get all these things randomly introduced, and then they're used one time and never come back ever again, and that's the same thing with the trove. They finally circle back around to the point that someone who was cauldron made might be able to find the trove, but before they can assign that to Nesta, the chapter abruptly ends as Elaine dramatically comes into the room to volunteer as tribute. I hope that any of that overcomplicated mess made any sense at all. I tried to explain it to the best of my ability. The book pretends the trove is super mega important, but low-key it's not, and the conclusion to this plotline is so unsatisfying. But we'll get there when it actually happens. Nesta is immediately against Elaine being involved for obvious reasons, but Elaine says that it's not up for Nesta to decide. Nesta is clearly afraid of something happening to Elaine after the lame kidnapping plot in ACOSF that was immediately resolved, so it wasn't even really a threat and it feels lame to be repeatedly brought up. But Nesta insists that Elaine is not getting involved in this situation because of how dangerous it is and whatever. Amren suggests that Nesta should look for the Dread Trove, which is the obvious solution, even though Nesta seems hesitant to agree. She's afraid for her own safety, and is also worried that she'll screw it up because she doesn't have a solid grasp on using magic, and she doesn't really have a high opinion of herself. The more that Nesta hesitates, the more that Elaine insists that she's capable of doing it. Absolutely not, Nesta spat, fingers curling at her sides. Absolutely not. Why? Elaine demanded. Shall I tend to my little garden forever? When Nesta flinched, Elaine said, You can't have it both ways. You cannot resent my decision to lead a small, quiet life while also refusing to let me do anything greater. Then go off on adventures, Nesta said. Go drink and fuck strangers, but stay away from the cauldron. Feyre said, It's Elaine's choice, Nesta. Damn, Elaine definitely has a point there. Nesta can't talk down on her for how she chooses to live her life, but then not let Elaine choose anything differently. And none of it is Nesta's decision anyway, especially because she's still continuing to insist that she's not a member of the Night Court. Oh, and here goes Feyre parroting Rhysand's talking points about choice and oh, it's everybody's choice and everybody's get to make choices. Like, shut up. Let's not pretend that Rhysand doesn't get the final say on all of these decisions. Nesta is furious and tells Feyre to keep out of it as if she isn't the High Lady of the Night Court and, like, of course Feyre is going to be involved in these political matters. Nesta even goes so far to accuse Feyre of manipulating Elaine into wanting to help. I can definitely see why Nesta thinks Feyre and especially Rhysand are manipulative, but she's also trying to boss Elaine around and that's not any better. Elaine says that she's not a child and can make her own decisions, so Nesta throws the kidnapping thing in Elaine's face to try to shut her down. Elaine is like, dude, I was there, I remember it, I was the one who was kidnapped, and Feyre rescued me and it was fine. Nesta is immediately triggered by the mention of Feyre doing something heroic, and so she goes into attack mode. For a heartbeat, it appeared that Elaine might say something to soften the words, but Nesta cut her off, seething at the pity about to be thrown her way. Look who decided to grow claws after all, she crooned. Maybe you'll become interesting at last, Elaine. Oh, Nesta, come on, girl. Just as I was starting to warm up to her and get on her side, she goes and runs her mouth again, and this is so especially cringy to me. Shut the fuck up, Nesta. Elaine really doesn't deserve this kind of nastiness, and she's clearly hurt by Nesta's insult. Elaine's eyes brightened with pain. Something exploded in Nesta's chest at that expression. She opened her mouth as if it could somehow be undone. But Elaine said, I went into the cauldron too, you know, and it captured me, and yet somehow all you think of is what my trauma did to you. Elaine hit the nail on the head with that one. Every time Nesta brought up the kidnapping thing, she was only thinking about how scared she was and how much it upset her personally, and not how it affected Elaine, who was the one who was actually kidnapped. That's not to say that someone can't be traumatized by witnessing a loved one go through something traumatic, but it's a big problem to erase or override the experience of the person who actually went through the traumatizing event. Obviously, Nesta has no response to that, so Elaine says that she'll be waiting if or when they need her for the cauldron stuff, and then she leaves. Damn, I thought Elaine was kind of lame, but she's kind of making a name for herself in this book. I really hope we learn more about her in the next book, whenever that ever comes out. Feyre tries to break the tension by saying it wasn't easy to involve Elaine in this situation, which, like, shut up, Feyre, this is not helpful, and Nesta immediately attacks her. Nesta twisted to Feyre. Can't you find the trove? She hated each cowardly word, hated the fear in her heart, hated that in merely asking she'd exposed her preference for Elaine. You've got all that magic, and you were made yourself, even if it wasn't by the cauldron. You trained, you are a warrior, can't you find it? Again that silence, but a different kind, like a thunderhead about to break. No, Feyre said quietly. I can't. She looked to Rhys, who nodded, his eyes shining. Everyone watched Feyre now, but Feyre's attention remained fixed upon Nesta. I can't risk it. Why? Nesta snapped. Because I'm pregnant.
Oh, shit!
Oh shit, plot twist! Except that probably doesn't come off as any surprise to anyone, considering I've already spoiled this in past videos, and Feyre and Rhysand were openly trying for a baby in ACOSF. This is also the explanation for why Feyre has been so strongly shielded this whole time, because her pregnancy has a distinct smell and they're trying to keep the situation under wraps. If Rhysand's enemies knew that Feyre was pregnant, they might target her to keep her from having his heir, because he's very strong, so they really don't want him to reproduce, so it would be a problem if people found out about this. Feyre's pregnancy is also why Rhysand is acting especially unhinged, because it's triggering some kind of animalistic fairy instinct inside of him to protect his unborn child. So he's especially aggressive and protective, mostly of the child, but also of Feyre. I have a lot of issues with this pregnancy plotline, and I've already complained about how I wish Feyre would have been waiting longer to have kids, since she's still like 21 or 22 at the oldest. There's another major issue I have with the pregnancy, but I'll explain that later on after more details are revealed. There's initially a moment of silence after the reveal, before Cassian starts screaming in joy and straight up tackles Rhysand. It's clear by his reaction that he didn't already know about this, and it doesn't seem like anyone else in the inner circle did either. Typically, I complain about Rhysand hiding information, but it's pretty normal not to announce a pregnancy right away, so I won't hold that against him or Feyre. We get some information that fairy pregnancies are 10 months long instead of the standard human 9 months, and Feyre is 2 months along and not really showing yet. Nesta is shocked by the news, but she manages to say congratulations. She turned to Rhys and Feyre and found the former watching her carefully, the epitome of ease with his arm around his mate's shoulders, the gleam in his eye one of pure threat. Nesta let him see it then, that she bore no ill will toward Feyre or the babe. Some primal part of her understood that Reese was not only male, but a fey male, and he would eliminate any threats to his mate and child. That he'd do it slowly and painfully, and then walk away from her shredded corpse without an ounce of regret. Good lord, that escalated quickly. I understand being protective over your child, but Rhysand really takes that to the extreme, and we'll see that happen later on. Nesta shows deference to Rhysand for once and bows her head to him, which is major progress for her to be showing that kind of respect to him. Sure, she's doing it because he genuinely might kill her, but nonetheless I'm glad Nesta didn't ruin Feyre's pregnancy reveal with a nasty or snarky remark. We're told that Elaine found out first. Well, second, because presumably Rhysand was told first, but Elaine was told because she saw Feyre throwing up and kind of put the pieces together. The only one left who doesn't know is Mor because she's off doing diplomat shit, but they'll tell her when she gets back. We get some exposition that Feyre can't really use her magic while she's pregnant because they don't know how it'll affect the baby, so there isn't really anything she can do to help in the conflict with Briellen and the potential war. I'm kind of confused because Feyre isn't the only fairy who has ever gotten pregnant. I know Feyre is different from the other fae, but she has their powers, so they should know how powers affect babies. I'm confused why they don't know. Whatever, let's move on. This whole thing is really annoying to me, and I really hate when extremely powerful female characters get nerfed by motherhood and then they get relegated to the sidelines. No hate to mothers, I just really don't like seeing this happen in books. It feels like Feyre's character was completely discarded in favor of Nesta, so I can see why readers who really hate Nesta did not enjoy this book. Rhysand says that Elaine still needs to work on her magic because she hasn't had visions in a long time, just like how Nesta's powers are also dormant. He says that Nesta can try to scry, though, to find the trove like she previously did in Akawar to find Hybern's camp. What choice do I have? Nesta asked. If it was between her and Elaine, there was no choice at all. She would always go first if it meant keeping Elaine from harm, even if she just hurt her sister more than she could stomach. You do have a choice, Rhys said firmly. You will always have a choice here. I really don't like this grandstanding from Nesta about protecting Elaine when she also throws out nasty low blows and arguments. Nesta is kind of self-aware about that though, but it isn't really enough for me, especially because Nesta doesn't really give that same protective energy to Feyre. I guess all the way back in the first book, Nesta did attempt to go to Prythian to get Feyre back, but we haven't seen Nesta do anything like that since then. I've talked about this at length, but I really don't like this divide between the sisters. Also, shut the fuck up, Rhysand. If he says that stupid bullshit about people getting to make their own choices again, I'm going to lose it. It's especially rich for him to say that to Nesta after forcing her to comply to his alleged intervention because her choices embarrassed him and he wanted to gain control of her for this very moment when he'd need to use her powers. Rhysand is manipulative as fuck and cares more about maintaining the illusion of choice rather than actually letting people make their own choices. The scene ends there as Nesta agrees to help find the trove, but as she said, it's not really her choice because Feyre can't get involved and she's unwilling to let Elaine get involved. What a mess. In the next scene, Cassian goes off to speak to Rhysand about some stuff and Feyre waits with Nesta. It's tense and awkward between them, but Feyre uses their private moment together to tell Nesta that she's having a boy. It's actually kind of a sweet moment because Feyre tells Nesta that she wanted her to know the gender first, and things like that go a long way in helping Nesta not feel like such an outsider. Humans can't find out the gender until about 18-ish weeks, and Feyre isn't anywhere close to being that far along. Not that they would really have a way to do gender testing in this universe, but we're about to cover that. Nesta asks how Feyre already knows the gender, and Feyre says that the bone carver showed her an image of her future child and that it was a boy. Remember, this is the same image that Feyre showed Rhysand in the last book when they were making said baby, which is something I found super gross. He in fact climaxed to the vision of his own child. What the fuck?
Walk out the door, you see someone that you know and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
Feyre and Nesta talk some more, and Feyre says that she didn't realize how much she wanted a boy until she found out that she was having one. Oh boy, Feyre's a boy, Mom. Love that for her. Of course, Nesta can't help herself from ruining a wholesome moment and throws out a snarky remark about how Feyre wants a boy because having sisters was so horrible for her. God damn it, Nesta, I literally just gave you credit for not ruining the pregnancy announcement, but she can't just keep her damn mouth shut. Nesta, cool it. Feyre says that she didn't mean it that way, clearly she didn't. They have kind of a nice sisterly moment as they acknowledge that they both baby Elaine too much and that they internalize her trauma as their own. Emotions make Nesta uncomfortable though, so the conversation ends up not being very productive. Nesta didn't have an answer to that, didn't know where to start. Why not tell Elaine about the baby's sex first? She discovered the pregnancy. I wanted you to know this part before anyone else. I hadn't realized you were keeping score. Feyre gave her an exasperated look. I'm not, Nesta. Do I need an excuse to share things with you? You're my sister. I wanted to tell you before anyone else. That's it. Nesta's scorekeeping behavior is one of her worst flaws, especially when it comes to her sisters and especially when it comes to Feyre. Nesta can't just enjoy a nice moment without assuming that everyone else has ulterior motives. To be fair, Feyre and Rhysand, especially Rhysand, do a lot of shit behind Nesta's back, and she's been kept out of the loop for most of the political stuff, so I can see why Nesta is defensive. The chapter ends as Cassian finishes his conversation with Rhysand and comes out to get Nesta. Feyre wishes Nesta good luck, and it's clear that she's referring to the stuff with Cassian and not just the trove. The last thing Nesta needs while dealing with all this shit is a boyfriend, but this is a romance novel, so unfortunately that's exactly what she's gonna get. The next chapter opens with a conversation between Cassian and Asriel. Asriel asks Cassian if he thinks Nesta can actually find the trove, and Cassian says that he hopes so. That doesn't really feel very confident, Cassian. He feels anxious about Nesta putting herself in danger, but is proud of her for standing up and accepting the challenge, even though she's not doing it out of the general goodness of her heart, and is only doing it so Elaine doesn't have to. Which I would argue is kind of out of the goodness of her heart, because she is doing it to protect Elaine, even if it is babying Elaine, like it is ultimately to save another person. They talk some more about Nesta's dormant powers and how it's obvious that she still has them. Asriel wants Nesta to do the scrying as soon as possible, but Cassian is hesitant because things went badly the last time Nesta scryed, and he doesn't want to traumatize her again when she's finally in her healing journey. Cassian sometimes stands up for Nesta like this, but I can't give him credit for it because it's not consistent, and he endangers Nesta and tears Nesta down himself several times throughout the book. They change the topic to talk about the baby and how Cassian is super excited to be an uncle. I'd find this cute if I didn't hate Cassian so much, and if I wasn't so annoyed that Feyre is already having a baby when she's still so young. Cassian and Asriel talk about if they want their own kids. Asriel doesn't really answer the question about whether or not he wants kids, and Cassian thinks about how badly he wants to bone Nesta and how much he regrets not making her finish, and how that hurts his pride, and how he has to even the score, and yada yada yada. Cassian, you fucking gross loser. Asriel has been apparently sitting patiently while Cassian is having his dirty thoughts, and he's like, dude, do you want kids or not? And Cassian is like, oh yeah, definitely. Cassian knows he eventually wants kids, but he hasn't found his special lady yet. Or has he? The scene ends there as Cassian gets up to leave and tells Asriel to turn a blind eye as his chaperone. Oh lord, I don't like where this is going. We cut to Nesta chilling in her bed reading a spicy book in her silky little sexy nightgown, and oh my god, no, I don't like where this is going!
Okay, I've seen enough.
There's a knock on the door, and of course it's Cassian. Oh my god, Cassian, turn around, go away. Nesta's like, what the hell do you want? But Cassian doesn't answer and just starts flirting with her and says that her hair is beautiful. Wow, what a compliment. Nesta realizes why Cassian is there and gets all hot and bothered and asks if he's back for round 2. Cassian says that he's there to settle the score and that he owes her for their last encounter. The narrative is trying to portray this as being hot and how Cassian isn't a selfish lover and all that, but I find his behavior really gross. Cassian is doing the same scorekeeping behavior that I dogged on Nesta for, and that's an especially unhealthy and sometimes dangerous attitude to have towards sex. What if the roles were reversed and Nesta was the one who got her rocks off and Cassian didn't? Would he be showing up at her door now to demand that she evens the score? We're told that it's Cassian's pride as a man that makes him want to reciprocate the pleasure that Nesta gave him, and I especially hate that attitude. His desire for his partner to have a pleasurable experience isn't because he cares about her pleasure or enjoyment, but because it strokes his ego and makes him feel more manly. He only wants to pleasure his partner because it in turn gives him more pleasure, and that feels really selfish to me. He's not doing this out of the goodness of his heart, he's doing it for himself. It also puts more pressure on his partners to finish, which can be difficult for women sometimes, and I don't like this. That's all to say that a healthy sexual relationship should be reciprocal because you actually care about your partner having a good time, but being reciprocal doesn't mean keeping score. This shit is weird and it's problematic. Also, to be clear, the narrative shows Nesta as being consenting to all of this, and the only part that makes her uncomfortable is being emotionally vulnerable with Cassian, and that he might not share her feelings even though he clearly does. Nesta does not feel pressured into being physical with Cassian, but I wanted to point out that his behavior comes off as pressuring, and again, in another book, this would be a totally different scene, but this scene we're supposed to find hot. It's not hot, it's toxic, it's weird. Nesta is feeling insecure and accuses Cassian of viewing their past spicy encounter as a mistake, and he's like, the only mistake was that I finished before I could taste you, which, ew, gross, and oh no, I'm sure you can see where this is going. Nesta asks if Cassian's friends, meaning the inner circle, will view this as a mistake, and he's like, I don't care what they think, even though he clearly cares what they think. Nesta is still kind of insecure and stalling for time, and she's like, well, what about training? And Cassian's like, this is separate from that, don't worry. Again, Nesta is only hesitating because she's scared of the emotional aspect of this, but she physically wants Cassian and is not, like, worried about that. She finally agrees to get down and dirty, but says that all she wants is sex, meaning she doesn't want an emotional relationship, even though she does, but she's kind of preemptively turning down Cassian before he can reject her, which is fucking stupid, and they just need to have a conversation. Cassian looks disappointed with that, but agrees, and I don't know how Nesta doesn't pick up on that. Like, this is so stupid. It is so obvious how much they want each other. Nesta gives her consent to Cassian, and he straight up lunges at her, which we're supposed to view as sexy, like, oh, I can't restrain myself, I just have to have you now. But that is terrifying! This man is huge and scary, like, he's scary! We then get an obnoxiously long spicy scene as Cassian shows Nesta what that mouth do. I know ACOTAR has a reputation of being fairy porn, and I've even referred to it that way, but the sex scenes were pretty mild compared to what I was expecting. The spice level in Silver Flames is dialed up to 100, and the sex scenes are way longer and way dirtier than anything we saw in the previous books. If that's your thing, then good for you, but I found the massive jump in spice level to be kind of off-putting. It really wasn't what I was expecting given the spice level of the other books. This feels really out of place, but again, if this is your thing, I'm happy for you, I guess. Cassian does exactly what he came there to do, and he quickly leaves before Nesta can return the favor, even though she clearly wants to, and the chapter mercifully ends there. The opening of the next chapter is super gross as Cassian thinks about how pleased he is by the encounter. Watching Nesta climax had been as close to a religious experience as Cassian had ever had. It had rocked him to his very core. And only pure will and pride had kept him from spilling in his pants again. Ew, Jesus, ew, God, why? Only pure will and pride had made him back off the bed when she'd reached for him. Only pure will and pride had made him leave the room, when all he'd wanted was to plunge his cock into that sweet, tight, warmth and rider until they were both screaming. Please make it stop. Please make it stop.
I don't need to know about that. You keep that to yourself.
Only pure will and pride kept him from having a mutual and healthy sexual relationship with a woman who was clearly ready for more. God damn it, Cassian. Not only are you disgusting, but you're also a total fucking idiot. Cassian proceeds to think to himself about how much gooning he did in private so he'd be able to face Nesta for training without jumping her bones again, and oh my god. This is yet another thing the reader is clearly supposed to view as hot, even though I find it gross and off-putting. Even though Cassian can't stop thinking about their encounter, Nesta shows up to training with her usual cold demeanor and doesn't seem to be thinking about it at all. But Cassian thinks that could just be because Azriel is randomly there for training. Azriel can clearly smell what's going on, like with the pheromones, and he smirks at Cassian, so he's probably there as a chaperone instead of dealing with his actually important spy business, which is so fucking stupid. I'd sooner gnaw my own leg off than deal with these two horny idiots, but Azriel doesn't really seem to mind. Cassian thinks about how he enjoyed his encounter with Nesta, but can't admit that fully to her, especially since they agreed to keep feelings out of it. Cassian is weirdly self-aware and says that they're playing a game to see who can pretend nothing happened for the longest time and who can pretend to be the least affected. This makes it seem like he understands Nesta has feelings for him that she's also hiding and that she wants more than sex, but he actually doesn't understand that, which is so infuriating and stupid. Cassian and Nesta banter and continue to act like they hate each other just because Azriel is there. The narrative reminds us yet again that Azriel and Nesta have some kind of chemistry going on, because they're both people that other people are usually afraid of, but they aren't scared of each other and kind of have a special respect for each other. Again, I think Nesta and Azriel are a way better couple than Nesta and Cassian, and I don't care if that's an unpopular opinion. I don't know if it is an unpopular opinion. But Azriel and Nesta, way better than Azriel and Cassian. Oh my god, new ship, Azriel and Cassian? People definitely ship that. Oh my god, we gotta move on. Nesta asks Cassian and Azriel to fight each other as a demonstration, and they're happy to agree because they love punching each other, and oh my god, punch each other, please. They rip off their shirts because of course they do, and they start wrestling. Just so you know, the scene is actually really long, but I'm condensing it down a lot because it's not that important, and honestly I'm fresh out of fucks and I'm ready to get this video over with. This scene is just for the lady gooners out there to watch two hot sweaty guys wrestle. Cassian and Azriel fight each other, which is super hot because they're both super hot and they're good at fighting and whatever. They're fairly evenly matched, so after a while Cassian declares whoever lands the next hit wins. Azriel says no way, and they're fighting until, quote, one of them eats dirt. We get some exposition that Azriel is viciously competitive in a way that is, quote, quiet and cruel and utterly lethal, which is not at all terrifying. I really hate how popular it is in fiction right now for the male romantic lead to be utterly physically terrifying and kind of mentally unhinged too, and everybody except the female romantic lead is terrified of him. I really don't like when the narrative justifies this behavior by the male lead because he'd never hurt the female leads and he's like only mean to people who deserve it, which no, I don't like this. I know Azriel isn't the romantic lead here, but in this series both Tamlin and Rhysand are presented this way. Cassian is less mentally unhinged than either of them, I think, but he is just as, if not more, physically terrifying. We saw firsthand how badly things went when Tamlin turned on Feyre, and it's one of the only times I've ever seen a narrative be self-aware that the male main character can turn his violence on his partner. Of course, that same energy isn't extended towards Rhysand or Cassian, and they are both put on a pedestal about how they'd never act the way Tamlin did, even though they're totally capable of it, and do act in similar ways. Anyway, Azriel fakes Cassian out by suddenly looking at Nesta all dramatically like something is happening, and Azriel uses that moment of distraction to punch Cassian straight in the face, which means he wins. This moment gives Cassian a little PTSD flashback because the way Azriel looked at Nesta made him think something was going on with her spooky cauldron powers, and it reminds him of what went down in the war. Yet again, I point out that everyone but Nesta is allowed to be traumatized. They're justified while she's an inconvenience. Nesta pretends to be unaffected by watching two hot shirtless dudes fight, but Cassian calls her out and says she's drooling. Nesta says that's just because Azriel punched him in the face, which obviously isn't true, but is hilarious. I love these snappy little remarks from Nesta when she's saying them to someone who deserves it. The scene ends there, and the next scene cuts to Nesta working at the library. Nesta proves that she can't be trusted with any important information by asking Gwen if she's ever heard of the Dread Trove. Thankfully, Gwen is pretty isolated amongst the priestesses, so it's not like she has anyone to tell about what Nesta and the Inner Circle are up to, and she hasn't heard of the Trove anyway. Nesta's like, okay, cool, and then she just thinks about what went down with Cassian and Azriel because she can't stop gooning. Seeing them spar had been overwhelming. Their beautiful forms, tattooed and scarred and carved with muscle, gleaming with sweat as they fought with a viciousness and intelligence she'd never seen. She'd been sweating herself when they'd finished, wondering what it'd like to be between those two male bodies, letting them turn all that lethal attention on worshipping her. Elaine would faint to hear such thoughts, and to hear that Nesta had already had two males in her bed not once but twice, and had enjoyed every second of it. But the males Nesta had shared herself with hadn't looked like Cassian and Azriel, hadn't been Cassian and Azriel. Alrighty then. I don't know what to say about any of that, but I'm sure someone has written fanfic about that if you want to hear more. Nesta goes back to thinking about the Dread Trove and reveals more information to Gwen, but is at least smart enough not to give her the full context. Nesta also makes Gwen promise not to tell anyone, and as I said, it's not like she really has anyone to tell. Nesta recognizes that she disobeyed Rhysand's orders to keep this all a secret, but she doesn't care, and neither do I. Nesta says that she told Gwen because she's clearly good at research and might be able to point her towards some books that might help her find the Trove. I'd think if such books existed, Rhysand and the gang would have already retrieved them, but it's nice to see Nesta take some initiative. Nesta tries to talk to Gwen about coming to training, but Gwen says she's not a warrior and doesn't want to become one. Nesta tries to convince her to come train anyway, and sells it as being good research for the Valkyrie stuff that Meryl is looking into. Gwen still seems hesitant, so Nesta asks if Cassian being there is the problem, but Gwen doesn't really answer the question, so it seems like she is really nervous to be around men. Thankfully, Nesta takes the hint and doesn't continue to push that topic and leaves Gwen alone to get her work done. We're told that nobody else has signed up for the training yet either. The chapter ends as Nesta finishes up her work and goes straight to the 10,000 stairs to clear her mind and figure out what to do. We are in the home stretch for part 1, guys. This is the last chapter in this section of the book, and I can't wait to finish. I feel like nothing has happened, but also a lot has happened, which is true for this entire series, and it makes for a very weird reading experience. The next chapter opens with a 5-day time skip, and weirdly enough, Cassian is in the library to meet with Clotho. We get more exposition about how disfigured she is and how she faced unspeakable horrors, even though they speak about it constantly. And it feels like that's all her character really is, which is sad and annoying. Clotho's character exists solely as a physical reminder of how awful men can be, and that's all anyone really thinks about when they look at her. We get hints that Clotho has an actual personality, but we really never get to see it. We're told that it was actually Clotho who called the meeting with Cassian, and she tells him that Nesta keeps training in the library even though Clotho has repeatedly told her to stop. She doesn't outright ask Cassian to make her stop, but that's the implication. Cassian is surprised to hear that Nesta is training even on her off hours, and we're told that even though they're both still training together, there has been no spicy activities since the last time I told you about. These two are so hot and cold that I'm sure it's infuriating for the people who picked this book up for the romance. Cassian and Clotho talk some more about the training, and that even though Nesta isn't causing any damage to the library or slacking on her work, she has to stop because it's distracting everyone else. Cassian asks for permission to go talk to Nesta because of course he always asks for permission before going into the library because he's just such a nice and considerate guy who cares about people's trauma. Even though he's definitely not, but I've already complained about that. Cassian goes to talk to Nesta, and of course she's actively training when he shows up and is shadowboxing a shelf of books. Cassian corrects Nesta's form, which catches her off guard. He says he didn't know she was so invested in training, and she replies that she's tired of being weak. I appreciate that Nesta is making progress, but it feels like she's trying to rush it, and other people are rushing it too, which is a recipe for disaster. Cassian starts to say that Clotho sent him to make Nesta stop, but she interrupts him to ask him to help her correct the issue with her form that he just pointed out, because she's just that motivated. Cassian thinks about how he doesn't want to disrespect Clotho because he promised he was going to go stop Nesta, but he also doesn't want to discourage Nesta, so he decides a few more minutes of training won't hurt. Cassian helps Nesta fix her fighting stance and throw a better punch, and the whole time during this demonstration, he's overly respectful and helpful about it, and he gives none of his sassy remarks. He's basically on his best behavior. The priestesses slowly gather to watch it all go down, and now that there's an audience, Cassian realizes that he's been played this whole time. He's like, wait a minute, your fighting stance was perfect this morning. Why did you make that mistake? And Nesta's like, yeah, I know it was. She reveals that she messed up on purpose because she knew he'd come and correct her. She doesn't explicitly explain why she did that, but the implication is that Nesta wanted to show the other priestesses how polite and respectful Cassian was during training, so they wouldn't be afraid of him anymore and would finally sign up. Nesta says Cassian can tell Clotho she won't be training in the library anymore and kind of saunters off like, aha, I did my plan. Luckily, Cassian isn't offended by being used because he knows that Nesta was just trying to empower the other priestesses, so he's actually kind of proud of her for being conniving, which is weird. The scene ends there, and we cut to Nesta's perspective so she can explain the motive behind what she just did as if it wasn't just explained to us or implied to us. Nesta feels awesome about executing her plan, but the sign-up sheet is still empty at the end of her shift, and even Clotho seems sad about that. Nesta has no other coping skills at the moment, so she goes back to the 10,000 stairs to Valaris so she can ponder what went wrong. Perhaps she was good for nothing after all. Perhaps she'd been a fool to think that this trick might convince them. Maybe physical training wasn't what they required to overcome their demons, and she'd been arrogant enough to assume she knew what they needed. Damn, Nesta, you don't have to be so mean to yourself over all this, but I would agree that she's being arrogant by assuming what is best for other people and trying to manipulate them into doing it. Her heart is in the right place because she just wants to help the priestesses, but this is the wrong way to go about it. Oh, but don't worry, despite the self-awareness from Nesta in her bad behavior, the narrative will later justify that Nesta was totally right to do what she did, and the priestesses definitely needed to train, and it was such a good idea. Nesta makes it to step 900 before turning around and going back up to her room. The magic sentient house has left her another book, but instead of a romance book, it's one about combat. It's not the vibe, so Nesta tells the house to take it back, but then realizes that it was actually Cassian who dropped it off for her, which is just so sweet and thoughtful. Nesta starts reading the book and is even more engrossed in it than she was in her romance books. She has a newfound appreciation for Cassian being such a badass war hero, and I know this is good progress for their relationship, but I hate seeing her fawn over him so much. Cassian ain't shit, and I wish Nesta would find someone better. This scene sucks, but at least we get some insight into Nesta's mindset. She let her thoughts drift for a time, until they snared upon another tangle of thorns. Did it matter if the priestesses didn't show up for training? Beyond her own reluctance to concede failure, did it matter? It did. Somehow it did. She had failed in every aspect of her life. Utterly and spectacularly failed, and keeping others from realizing it had been her main purpose. She had shut them out, had shut herself out, because the weight of all those failures threatened to shatter her into 1,000 pieces. Thanks for sharing, Nesta, but I have a genuine question. Can you really fail at something when you never really tried in the first place? I'm not saying that as a burn to Nesta, I actually mean that. I say that it does count as a failure, and that's actually why Nesta doesn't put in any effort. If she actually fully tried something and still ended up failing, that would hurt way worse than failing because she didn't try. However, Nesta didn't fail this time, despite what she thinks, and we get a scene break to cut to the library as Nesta runs to check on her sign-up sheet. She's gotten her first priestess to sign up for training, and unsurprisingly it's Gwen. The chapter hard cuts at this reveal of Gwen's name on the sheet, and that marks the end of part 1. Good lord, that was such a slog to get through, and that was all just set up for the actual plot. Like, I feel like nothing has really even happened. This book is so ungodly long and poorly structured that it makes my brain hurt. I'm gonna try and get the next part out as soon as I can, but unfortunately I don't know how to stop yapping, and it takes a while to produce these supersized videos. I will try to condense my thoughts for the next video because oh my god, I really yapped a lot in this one, didn't I? Thank you all to anyone who stuck around this long. I appreciate your support, and I hope I was able to entertain you for a little while in these trying times. Ooh, let's not get into that. The world just really sucks right now, so it's easier for me to be mad about these ridiculous fairies than it is to be mad about our ridiculous reality. Oh, but don't get me wrong, I'd still be mad about ACOTAR even if we were currently experiencing world peace. I just hate ACOTAR that much. Anyway, that's all the time I have for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys!